Amidst the desolate, fiery battlefield, one stood tall. Another knelt, signaling an impending execution. The silver-haired man advanced coldly, the sword in his hand still stained with the blood of the defeated foe at his feet. He spoke with sarcasm. So, the one hailed as a hero like you, ultimately meets such a miserable end. He sneered, calling out the name of the fallen hero. Fallen star, Hayden Reich. Hayden Reich lifted his furious eyes, growling at the traitor. Julian, how dare you do this to me? Julian closed his eyes, savoring the moment of victory, and calmly replied. See? You should have treated the one who supported you better. Lying on the ground, Hayden questioned in despair. Can you truly strike down your master, me, so mercilessly? The only reply was Julian's contemptuous smirk. His face showed no hesitation, only the satisfaction of one who had achieved his goal. With bloodshot eyes, Julian raised his sword high, declaring coldly. That was no difficult feat at all. Thwack, a clean finishing blow, fresh blood splattering, ending the hero's life. The scene shifted to a dark room, where a young man wearing glasses suddenly screamed. He clutched his head, utterly panicked by the scene he had just witnessed, muttering, "No way." The gamer, hidden behind his computer screen, was drenched in sweat, unable to believe his eyes. He couldn't accept the truth. I can't believe Hayden died in such a ridiculous way. The words DLC trailer clearly appeared on the screen. It turned out this was just a game preview. The screen began introducing Hayden Reich, hero of the Northern Front, who always led everyone through the most desperate situations. He was praised as a demon-hunting genius, a living legend among the nobility. The gamer roared in his mind, because the most important thing was, he was the main character of this game. He gritted his teeth, unable to stomach the main character being killed by a treacherous villain, and Julian at that. Lee Si-hoo slammed his fist onto the table, his face etched with extreme anger. He cursed the game company Fromwell for stabbing dedicated gamers in the back. The screen clearly displayed the profile of a true gaming addict. Lee Si-hoo, rank 1, who had spent 38 million won and 100,000 hours on this game. Scrolling through the comments, he was speechless to see a bunch of fans hailing the villain Julian as the main character. Typing furiously, he growled, "Cool my ass, he's just a traitor." Without further ado, Lee Si-hoo posted a scathing comment. "I don't understand how a squinty-eyed guy can be the main character. Canceling my pre-order." The mouse cursor decisively moved to the cancel pre-order button. His hand gripped the mouse tightly, preparing for the final click. Click. A cold and furious mouse click. A notification appeared. You have canceled your pre-order. The end of a gamer's love affair. He unceremoniously tossed all the game merchandise into the trash, declaring bluntly, "Let's never meet again." Collapsing onto his bed, he yelled curses. "Goodbye, trash game." But then, he slumped, his gaze distant. He recalled the days of adventure in the vast game world, which had saved his soul after exhausting workdays. Sighing, he admitted it had once been his only spiritual refuge. And now, he picked up a potted plant. He hugged the potted plant, muttering, "Now I only have you. Taking care of you makes me feel better." He smiled, holding a spray bottle to water the plant. "Now I understand why old men like growing orchids. You must grow well. Don't be like that stupid game." As the stream of water sprayed out, a ding sound echoed along with an unfamiliar system interface. He startled, turning around, bewildered, wondering, what the hell just made that sound? A message from Fromwell Software suddenly appeared, confirming the identity of Lee Si-hoo, the gamer who had played their game for 5 years. Lee Si-hoo stared at the screen, muttering to himself, wondering if this was an automated reply. The system continued. "We see you have canceled your DLC pre-order. It seems you are not satisfied with our storyline?" The young man's face went blank, completely bewildered by what was happening. He frowned, thinking to himself, what the hell is this? Are these guys not going to pay me? He turned back to the screen, trying to recall what they had just said. A ding sound echoed, and a link appeared on the screen. Without a moment's hesitation, his hand moved the mouse and clicked decisively. Immediately, a blinding light burst from the screen, making him cry out in astonishment. A terrifying suction force pulled him forward, his glasses flying off. His entire body twisted and was sucked straight into the computer screen, as if swallowed by a whirlwind. He screamed in panic, trying to find a way to turn off this cursed thing. In despair, he reached out, trying to press the computer's power button. He yelled in helplessness, "Damn it, I can't turn it off!" His desperate scream echoed even outside the building. Everything fell silent. The computer screen went black, with only a faint glimmer of light remaining before it completely extinguished. Lee Si-hoo fell freely in a dark space, the potted plant also floating beside him, bewildered, wondering what the hell was happening. He continued to fall through a strange spatial vortex, completely disoriented. "I'm falling, but where am I falling to?" His vision gradually cleared. Below was a desolate, barren land. Thud. He landed roughly amidst a scorching, rocky terrain, dust flying everywhere. Lee Si-hoo scrambled to his feet after a face-first landing, bewildered and wondering where he was. He recognized the familiar desolate landscape. This was the final battlefield of Reich and Julian in the game. Before he could collect himself, a giant scorpion lumbered into view, brandishing its venomous tail. Whoosh! The tail plunged down like a dagger, and Lee Si-hoo only managed to let out a desperate scream. In his moment of peril, he immediately recognized this creature. This was the scorpion demon from Kill, the Demon King now. Ping! A system panel appeared, announcing that he possessed the traits of an outstanding swordsman and incredible instinct, capable of seeing demons' weaknesses. Lee Si-hoo froze, staring at the green panel. A game status panel? In utter panic, he yelled and decided fleeing was the best option. I need to run first. He ran headlong for his life, while the scorpion demon lumbered after him. Crash! Its tail slammed into the ground, creating a small explosion, making him realize one hit would instantly obliterate him. It swung its tail to attack again, and Lee Si-hoo barely managed to dodge. Damn it! He was caught by the venomous tail, and only one thought remained in his mind. Am I going to die? But strangely enough, he gripped the venomous stinger tightly and felt no pain at all. With unimaginable strength, he easily pushed away the monster's giant tail. Lee Si-hoo landed lightly, neatly dodging the attack from the scorpion demon's pincers. The fear had vanished, now only anger remained, and he gritted his teeth. Damn it! He charged forward, delivering a devastating punch straight to the glowing weak point on the monster's head. The monster staggered, and Lee Si-hoo stared in astonishment at his fist. Did it really work? He still couldn't believe what had just happened to his body. Lee Si-hoo realized this body was incredibly light and agile. Has my body always been this light? Suddenly, a thought flashed in his mind as all the pieces started to fit together. A series of information appeared. Character traits, extraordinary instinct, and finally, the two words soul possession made him freeze. While Lee Si-hoo's soul was still scared stiff, the new body automatically charged forward to confront the scorpion demon. The monster roared furiously, lunging to retaliate. The hooded man, or rather, Lee Si-hoo, still hadn't processed what was happening. He swiftly drew the sword at his hip, a strangely familiar weapon. He stepped on the remnants of the monster he had just punched, feeling power surge through him. But fortunately, the character he possessed was Hayden Reich, the very character he had grinded for thousands of hours in the game. Knowing this character's strength, he channeled energy into his hand, preparing to unleash a finishing move. A sword strike was unleashed with terrifying speed. A brilliant blue sword aura tore through the air, shooting straight towards the scorpion demon. Boom! The attack hit its target perfectly. The monster collapsed, blood gushing from the fatal wound. Staring at the massive corpse before him, he could only utter one word. Wow. He told himself that Reich's power was truly no joke. A one-hit kill was real. With this power in his hands, he could change the storyline, save Reich from death at the hands of that bastard Julian. Ding! A notification panel appeared. Swordsmanship Foundation. You have acquired the normal attack, Moonlight Slash. He froze, unable to believe his eyes. Moonlight Slash? He frantically realized a harsh truth. Wait a minute. This isn't Hayden's skill? He tore at his hair, muttering in panic over the completely wrong skill set. He looked back at the sword in his hand, trying to find an explanation for this absurdity. A brilliant red killing intent flared up, and Hayden's black hair suddenly turned silver white. His bloodshot eyes gleamed, and a system ding sounded like an ominous omen. The notification panel appeared, confirming the new physical trait. Silver hair. The system continued to list. Narrow eyes. An emotionless face. A series of overpowered buffs appeared. Master Swordsman, Vessel of the Demon King, Perfect Mana Control, Unrivaled Instinct. And then the faded name appeared on the screen, along with a profile picture, Julian Crivehart Plassen. His soul screamed in despair, realizing he was in the body of that bastard Julian. Julian's entire status panel appeared, confirming an undeniable truth. He had possessed the final boss. The scene shifted to a magnificent mansion, the residence of an influential figure. Standing before the mirror, he bitterly stared at Julian's form, whom he described as a hypocrite, a nest of betrayal. He recalled Julian's cunning face in the game and couldn't believe he had become that eyesore. He pulled open both his eyes, checking if he could open them wider, but it was futile. Sweat poured down him like rain. He still couldn't accept this harsh truth. Finally, he gave up, telling himself he had to live as Julian, and a week had passed like that. He recalled his futile attempts, banging on the status window, searching for resources, desperately trying to return to reality. Letting out a sigh, he admitted it was all for naught. Suddenly, a character trait notification appeared. Formal speech. Always use honorifics in all languages. Looking at his reflection, he grumbled in his thoughts. This is so annoying. Even talking to myself requires honorifics. Shaking off those absurd thoughts, Julian adjusted his collar and thought to himself. But still, he smirked smugly in his new body. I have to admit, I'm quite handsome. Now I understand why this guy is so famous. Gazing at his reflection in the mirror, he even appraised Julian's perfect body proportions. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man's trembling footsteps approached. A nobleman, pale as a ghost, was drenched in sweat. He imagined meeting Julian was like stepping onto a guillotine, with Julian as the demon-faced executioner, and cursed inwardly. I don't want to go. I don't want to meet him at all. It feels like I'm walking into my own grave. The room door swung open, and a servant announced, Sir Julian. The servant announced, Sir Harand has arrived. Julian narrowed his eyes slightly. The name Harand caught his attention. What is someone from the direct lineage of the Crivehart family doing here? Harand flinched at Julian's gaze. Cold sweat streamed down his face. Julian looks terrifying. Forcing a smile, Harand asked politely, Is your health all right? And Julian simply replied curtly, Yes, thanks to you, I'm fine. Harand let out a forced laugh, trying to appear friendly. What a relief. Who would have thought an unparalleled Julian would ever faint? I was so worried. Both laughed with utter falsity. The atmosphere in the room became noticeably strained. Their eyes met. Julian wondered what this man was up to, while Harand continued to scrutinize him. Julian clicked his tongue inwardly, annoyed that the visitor was a person of standing, not some nobody. Julian, how did you usually live your life? Harand felt a chill seeing Julian's calm expression and thought to himself, this terrifying bastard's face is still cold as ice even with my visit. He's truly no ordinary man. Should I try to provoke him? Harand decided to get straight to the point. Julian, I've heard a rumor. He looked directly at Julian, launching a probing attack. A rumor that you've lost your memory. Julian froze, his pupils contracted, but he tried to maintain a calm expression. Lost my memory? He suddenly realized, finally understanding. So, this is why everyone was whispering when they saw me. I must look incredibly suspicious. Julian, with an impassive face, casually denied the rumor of memory loss. Oh, that's just a baseless rumor. So don't worry. Suddenly, Julian called Harand by name, flashing a twisted, ominous smile that sent shivers down the other man's spine. He tilted his head, his crimson eyes glinting with a deadly light, his voice full of sarcasm. Could it be that you also believe that rumor? Harand jumped, his face drained of color before Julian's overwhelming aura. The nobleman broke out in a cold sweat, stammering a denial while his inner self screamed, damn it, he's not flinching at all. Harand was scared out of his wits, thinking to himself, that smile, and those eyes. Could Julian know I came here on the Elders Association's orders? Trying to regain his composure, Harand cleared his throat, trying to salvage the situation. Don't pay too much attention to those rumors from the maids. Anyway, the reason I'm here, Harand feigned concern, is because even though I know you're injured, the Elders Association has a message, so I came to deliver it. Julian thought to himself, the Elders Association. He knew perfectly well this was a group established by nobles to consolidate their power. The family tree flashed in Julian's mind. He knew these main lineage nobles always valued bloodline, and saw him, a member of a collateral branch, as a thorn in their side. Julian recalled that despite being from a collateral branch, he was the royal family's hound thanks to his overwhelming power. With superior swordsmanship and magic, Julian in the past was a force not to be underestimated. Precisely because he was too strong, he was considered a threat by the Elders Association that needed to be eliminated immediately. Julian brushed aside his thoughts and got straight to the point. So, what's the message? Harand hesitated for a moment before announcing, to participate in the Shut Eyes selection exam as a judge. Julian smirked. He knew exactly what Shut Eyes was. It was a secret royal organization, normally operating as a guard unit, but secretly carrying out assassination and cleanup missions under the command of the royal court. Shut Eyes was a gathering place for the most elite and powerful warriors, an exclusive royal organization. Julian thought to himself, I myself am a member of Shut Eyes. Those bastards who always look down on me are now choosing me as a judge. This smells fishy. Julian pondered deeply, wondering whether to accept this outrageous request. Meanwhile, Harand was sneering, convinced that the original Julian was smart enough to avoid this trap. He began racking his brain, wondering what trick to use to lure the old fox Julian into the trap. Suddenly, Julian grinned widely, pointing directly at him. Okay, I'll be a judge. Harand froze, his face blank as if he couldn't believe his ears. Harand stammered, pointing at Julian's head, anxiously asking about the injury, but the silver-haired man casually brushed him off. Julian smirked with a sinister grin. Oh, it just healed on its own. Which stunned Harand. Harand broke out in a cold sweat, his mind racing. What is this guy planning? Playing his hand so openly? Julian thought to himself that since he didn't fully grasp the situation, he should pretend to be obedient and go along with them for now. He coldly ordered Harand to prepare, then turned on his heel and walked away, making the other man want to flee quickly. Seeing Julian leave, Harand startled and frantically called out to him. The nobleman's face turned ashen. A horrifying thought flashed in his mind. Could it be that he doesn't intend to let me leave alive? In a panic, Harand hastily grabbed a nearby orchid pot and stammered Julian's name. Julian turned back with a smile more terrifying than a demon's, pressing his face close to Harand. I just wanted to give you this orchid pot. It helps calm the mind. Harand stood frozen outside the door, holding the plant pot, his heart burning with anxiety. Inside, Julian clenched his fist, his patience clearly reaching its limit. Harand hastily turned and fled, his steps faltering as if he were about to fall. He panted, drenched in sweat, extreme fear clearly visible on his face. A sharp image of a sword blade flashed in Harand's mind, making him suddenly remember something. He horrifyingly realized who he had just faced. The smiling executioner, Julian's infamous moniker. Julian sighed amidst the room filled with plants. He muttered to himself. One guy down. Julian was speechless, recalling how he had carelessly asked for orchids, turning the entire room into a botanical garden. Anyway, he must be waiting. It's time to get ready to leave. Julian grabbed his sword, telling himself that someone like Julian would certainly not go out empty-handed. Opening the wardrobe, he froze. What the hell is this? The entire wardrobe was a gaudy mess, especially the leopard print jacket that looked like cheap market wear. Ugh, I hate this, Julian mumbled, his hand touching the colorful outfit. But to avoid being exposed, he had to fully play the role of Julian, donning the flamboyant attire. Harand, I'm ready, Julian called out, making the other man, who was hiding behind a potted plant, jump in surprise. With a perfect executioner's smile, Julian declared, let's go. I'm eager to see the interview. the scene shifted to a colossal, magnificent academy. The four-horse carriage rumbled along the forest path. Inside the carriage, Harand reported, "The Shut-Eyes entrance exam will take place at Veal Academy's training grounds." Julian frowned. In the game, this was just a minor location, but he still vaguely remembered it. He feigned ignorance, asking, "What kind of place is that?" Which left Harand bewildered. Harand was utterly shocked, his voice confused. "You're not familiar with the academy, sir?" the nobleman emphasized. "After all, you also graduated from Veal Academy." Julian played along, feigning surprise. "Oh, I didn't know that. It must have been too long ago." He snapped his fingers, covering up. "It must have changed a lot by now." Julian feigned understanding, successfully covering up his amnesia act, which made Harand sigh in relief. In his mind, Julian secretly worried, hoping no one at the academy would remember the old Julian's face. Screech! The carriage wheels stopped, signaling their arrival. The coachman informed Julian and Harand that they had reached their destination. Veal Academy appeared, a grand and massive architectural marvel. Julian accidentally blurted out that the academy was even bigger in real life than in the game, making Harand freeze and question him. Realizing his slip-up, Julian quickly covered it with a sly smile, saying it was nothing, which only made Harand even more panicked. The gamer within Julian was thrilled by the incredibly realistic graphics, while Harand only saw his cousin as a terrifying scoundrel plotting something. Julian realized Harand was excessively afraid of him, even feeling a little guilty. He called out to Harand, making the nobleman jump and stammer in response. Julian allowed Harand to leave, but the man unexpectedly insisted on staying to watch the exam. Harand's sudden change of mind greatly surprised Julian. His eyes flashed red as he thought, "I thought you wanted to get away quickly?" He began to notice the faint dark aura emanating from Harand all this time. Harand broke out in a cold sweat, the dark aura around him growing denser under Julian's gaze. Julian analyzed, realizing this was neither mana nor power, while Harand trembled, asking why he was looking at him like that. Closing his eyes, Julian concluded, "That aura is an emotion. Fear." Whoosh! A blue skill notification window appeared before Julian. The unique skill, Colors of Negation, appeared, allowing him to sense and see negative emotions directed at him as an aura. Julian pointed the skill window directly at Harand to confirm, leaving the man bewildered and confused. He suddenly remembered that the original Julian was a master of reading emotions, and now that skill had been gamified. Julian reflected that the original Julian was indeed a master of psychological warfare, specializing in using his opponent's fear to win without breaking a sweat. He also provoked his enemies' anger, causing them to lose their minds and rush headlong to their deaths. Julian concluded that all those tricks were thanks to some overpowered trait of the original Julian. He glanced at Harand, speculating why the guy was scared stiff yet still clinging to him. It must be because the Elders Association ordered Harand to monitor him closely. Julian knew full well that the Ancient Council regarded him as a thorn in their side. They were certainly trying every means to send him to his grave. He smirked, thinking, "The rumor of my amnesia must also be spread by those old geezers to probe me." But Julian was determined. He couldn't let that happen. He had to survive to return to the real world. Thump! A dazed noble boy bumped hard into Julian's shoulder. The boy quickly turned to apologize, scratching his head with an awkward smile. But upon seeing Julian's stone-cold face, the boy was so terrified that he let out a piercing scream and fell backward. He stammered Julian's name in extreme panic. The surrounding crowd began to notice his presence. They whispered, "It's Julian the Fox-Eyed. Why is the royal mad dog here?" The entire crowd looked at Julian with terrified eyes, while the boy remained seated on the ground. A noblewoman frantically pleaded, "Julian, calm down. Hez just a child." Even though Julian hadn't made a move, Julian clenched his fists, veins bulging, cursing inwardly. "Damn it. I sympathize with you guys too." He was so exasperated he just wanted to shout, "I hate this Julian guy too, you know." The Colors of Negation skill activated. Julian sensed a surging sea of fear from the crowd, but hidden deep beneath it was anger. Julian grumbled inwardly, cursing the wretched reputation of this body. "Julian, why couldn't you have lived a more decent life?" Just then, a long-haired beauty appeared, telling herself she had to calm the situation because she was too conspicuous. The girl stepped forward, breaking the tense atmosphere with a polite greeting. "Greetings, Sir Julian." Julian and Harand both turned to look, Harand openly displaying his surprise. The two faced each other. Julian maintained his cold expression, but his mind was rapidly processing information. He froze, blurting out the girl's name in astonishment. Eileen? Here she was, a formidable figure. Eileen Donatien, one of the main characters from the game Demon King Slayer Begins. She was an instructor at Veal Academy, affiliated with the Mage Tower of the Adrathon Empire. A genius mage capable of controlling the metal element, reaching level 5 at just 24 years old. Truly a top-tier talent. Julian recalled that in the game, Eileen was the one who had given the protagonist Hayden Reich countless valuable pieces of advice during the Academy arc. But something felt off. Why would a righteous character like Eileen proactively greet Julian? Julian began to doubt their relationship in the original storyline. Were they acquainted? He thought, "Oh well, it's good to have someone defuse the situation. It should make the atmosphere less tense." At that very moment, Julian's Color of Negation skill automatically activated, and a gloomy purple aura emanated from Eileen. Julian frowned, realizing he was perceiving her emotions, and they were far from pleasant. Was it fear or anger? No, not those mundane things. Eileen's eyes glowed with a deadly purple hue. The emotion Julian sensed was seething resentment. Julian broke out in a cold sweat, screaming in his mind, "Holy hell, what did the original Julian do to this woman?" He realized he was facing a top-tier mage and couldn't act carelessly. He had to find a way to de-escalate the situation immediately. And his solution was to flash a crazed smile, growling, "Donacien half-blood, who permitted you to speak to me?" Julian grabbed the noble kid's collar, sneering, "That's a bit much. Are half-bloods also half-deaf?" The surrounding crowd fearfully recoiled, while Julian muttered to himself, "Well, since I already have a bad reputation, I might as well play the villain to the fullest." He flashed a crazed smile, his eyes bloodshot, and whispered a deadly threat into Eileen's ear. "Do you know what the scream of a dying person sounds like?" Julian stood tall with his sword in hand, his overwhelming aura silencing the entire crowd behind him. He chuckled inwardly, smugly thinking his intimidation tactic had succeeded. "Heh. Scared now? Aren't you? Finally, I've managed to shut this woman up." Unexpectedly, a hand radiating a brilliant golden magical energy appeared, and Eileen coldly spoke. "Did you just draw your sword?" Without another word, Eileen unleashed her magical power, golden lightning enveloping her body, and she growled, "This is an act of violence against the entire Veil Academy. I cannot forgive you." Julian broke out in a cold sweat, his face blank, completely unprepared for his prey to fight back. With a fierce gaze, Eileen declared bluntly, "Get ready. I am not an easy opponent." Julian screamed in his mind, his plan completely ruined. "Wait, I only intended to scare you off and then escape." With that, Eileen charged forward at terrifying speed, the ground beneath her feet cracking. The girl's entire body was enveloped in brilliant golden lightning magic, hurtling straight towards Julian like a bullet. Julian hastily raised his hand to block the attack, the dazzling golden magic about to collide. Clang! Eileen's golden magic collided with Julian's sword, which was enhanced with blue magic, creating an energy explosion. He broke out in a cold sweat, unable to believe his eyes. "Damn, is she really fighting?" Eileen glared at him fiercely, growling, "How dare you look away?" Immediately after, she turned and shouted to the stunned crowd, "Students, evacuate this area immediately." The noble crowd's faces turned ashen, and they began to frantically search for an escape route. Harand was dragged away, his face drained of color, screaming in despair, "Run! What the hell is happening? I should have fled from the start." Eileen could only force a wry smile. Perhaps the situation had spiraled beyond her control. Julian seized Eileen's wrist amidst the brilliant golden magical energy, warning her face to face. "Don't. Look away." He leaned in close, smirking provocatively, right in the middle of the battle, which flustered Eileen slightly. Caught off guard by the sudden closeness, Eileen's face flushed crimson with embarrassment. She let out a confused cry, and the golden magical energy around her body erupted even more fiercely. Julian deftly dodged Eileen's recently unleashed magical burst. Landing safely, Julian mused that Eileen's attacks were quite formidable, and it felt as if she was channeling her emotions into them. Eileen gritted her teeth, telling herself that she had no intention of delivering a finishing blow. She grudgingly admitted in her mind, "But he dodged all my attacks. Julian truly is different." A flashback began, as Eileen recalled a time when she had considered Julian an ideal noble. In the past, Julian was a perfect senior, shining brightly in the eyes of the students. Other female students were also captivated, gossiping that he was even more charming than the nobles of the main lineage. Eileen de Donacien, then a freshman at Veil Academy, was no exception. The young girl with glasses looked up at Julian's back, secretly admiring his coolness. Not only did he have extensive connections, but Julian was also a rising star of the Empire with his unparalleled swordsmanship. Whenever she looked at him, Eileen's hand would tighten around her book, and a glimmer of hope would stir in her heart. She hoped that being from a branch family wouldn't hinder such a talented person. She had truly believed that Scoundrel could change society's prejudice against those from branch families. At that time, she couldn't distinguish between respect and love, and she gathered all her courage to give him a love letter. The result was a blunt rejection. So harsh there was nothing more to say. Past pains surged, and Eileen screamed, unleashing a colossal orb of magical energy that even made Julian freeze. Eileen's mana was flaring, her face flushed with anger, while Julian calmly thought to himself, "I almost got hit. Why is this girl's face so red? Is she bitter?" She gritted her teeth, silently fuming with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "Just take one hit so I can vent my anger." Julian smirked confidently, deciding it was time to clean up this mess. In a flash, Julian appeared right behind Eileen, moving so fast she couldn't react. Eileen's eyes widened in horror, a cold drop of sweat trickling down her cheek as she realized the skill gap. Julian's sword was already at Eileen's neck, and he smiled provocatively while she froze completely. Eileen's face turned crimson. She stammered incoherently at the close proximity, asking Julian, "Why don't we stop this joke?" She yelled in confusion, "What the hell are you doing? Are you looking down on me?" But Julian only replied with a teasing smile. Eileen questioned why Julian didn't use his moonlight sword when she exposed an opening, pointing directly at his sword hilt. She cried out in frustration, feeling Julian's overwhelming mana flow. "You have enough power to kill me effortlessly. Why don't you?" Julian smirked mysteriously, his voice full of hidden meaning. "Do you want to know, Lady Eileen?" Eileen's heart pounded, a glimmer of hope that he would finally admit his feelings. She softly replied, "Yes." Julian calmly pointed towards Harand, who was scratching his head in embarrassment. Because this is Haran's first time here, he doesn't know the way to the examination center. Eileen was speechless, realizing she had just fallen for a massive trick. Julian continued to explain that others were too afraid of him to show the way, then extended his hand, ordering Eileen, "Understand now? Lead the way, you half-breed." Eileen was dumbfounded, completely shocked by Julian's absurd reason and arrogant attitude. She trudged ahead in embarrassment, while Julian and Haran followed, completely in control of the situation. Julian walked, silently pondering the phrase "moonlight sword" that Eileen had just mentioned. He recalled basic knowledge. When ordinary swordsmen enveloped their swords in aura, they would glow. But Julian's sword was different. Julian's sword didn't just glow. It turned a luminous blue, as if containing moonlight within. A truly unique weapon. Julian mused about his sword, a weapon that had slain countless demons, called the Moonlight Sword by people out of both reverence and fear. But the fatal problem was, how the hell does a gamer like me know how to use this legendary weapon? He broke into a sweat, realizing Eileen had started to sniff out his abnormality. This was an extremely bad sign. The silver-haired man conceived a dark scheme, determined to silence that girl, sending shivers down Eileen's and Haran's spines. Julian suddenly stopped, turning back to ask with an innocent expression, Is there a problem?" Eileen flinched, quickly waving her hands to deny everything, then pointed the way. "Nothing. This way." The three finally arrived at the training grounds, a vast and magnificent area of the academy. Julian casually walked in like a boss, while Eileen walked beside him, scowling because she had been tricked into being late. Julian stood before the crowd, placed a hand on his chest, and introduced himself confidently. "I am Julian Kreifhart Plassen, the examiner for today's Shut Eyes examination." Haran broke into a cold sweat behind him as Julian continued his act. "Surely everyone here has heard of me, haven't they?" Meanwhile, Haran's eyes darted rapidly across the crowd, searching for a specific target. There. He found his ace in the hole, the second son of the Torso family. The Torso and Kreifhart families were long-standing allies, their relationship as close as a shadow to its form. Joining Shut Eyes was a great honor, but it also meant extremely fierce competition, as the entrance exam was a solo battle between the examiner and the applicant. Haran secretly thought about the Elders' Council's plan, to have Julian humiliated and stripped of his power by the Torso family's son. Haran clenched his fist, determined, "This is where your reputation ends." While Julian merely sneered. Julian turned his back, hands clasped behind him, and asked the crowd, "It seems everyone here wants to join Shut Eyes, right?" The applicants huddled together, their voices trembling as they replied, "Yes, sir." "Ha," Julian scoffed contemptuously. "I only see a bunch of cowardly trash." He continued to taunt. "The naive eyes of you pampered young masters, and your decorative swords only make me laugh." Julian began his preamble. "The Shut Eyes you wish to join is the bloodiest slaughterhouse in this empire." He extended his hand, his voice full of challenge. "And as your senior, I will let you taste that flavor." Suddenly, Julian grabbed an applicant by the collar, declaring, "The Shut Eyes entrance exam begins. The passing criterion is..." With a crazy smile and glowing red eyes, he held a knife to his own throat. "To kill me." All the applicants froze, completely shocked by the examiner's audacity. Haran stood beside him, his face pale, sweating profusely, secretly thinking he had misheard. The noble muttered in panic, "It's over." Meanwhile, the soul of Lee Sihu inside Julian was screaming, "Damn it, I just found out the exam is a solo battle? You want me to take on this whole crowd?" Julian recalled the scene where he could only run for his life when facing Eileen's magic. He also knew full well that if he fought fair and square in a duel, he would immediately be taught a lesson by some small fry. Two applicants began to whisper, suspicion rising. "Huh? Could he really be weak?" Another chimed in. "He doesn't even bother to use his moonlight sword. Are all those rumors just hot air?" Haran gritted his teeth, wondering if Julian had truly lost his memory, and secretly hoped this would be his end. Julian let out a sigh, carrying his sword on his shoulder, looking tired. He glanced towards Eileen, calculating silently. "Furthermore, if I act suspiciously, that girl might attack me." Eileen stood from afar, her pink eyes gleaming with vigilance, clearly observing Julian's every move. Julian tightened his grip on the sword hilt. He had made his decision. He spun around with a sneer. "If that's the case, the best way is to provoke them right from the start. What's wrong, everyone?" Julian's aura erupted, and he declared the simple rules. "The exam will only end when I die, or when not a single applicant remains standing." The pampered young masters' faces drained of color, trembling before the declaration of war. Julian carried his sword, facing the entire group of applicants alone, his aura absolutely overwhelming. Immediately, a coward tremblingly raised his hand. I give up." The domino effect began. A series of hands shot up, as the pampered young masters vied to surrender. Amidst the collapsing crowd, the Torso family's son still stood firm, his face scowled, showing a stubborn resolve. He gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down, clearly trying to hold on until the last moment. But in the end, pride could not overcome fear, and he bitterly raised his hand. "I also give up." Haran and a noblewoman watched, wide-eyed and open-mouthed, shouting in despair. "You're lying." The entire arena was empty, all applicants kneeling on the ground, surrendering unconditionally to a single individual. Julian covered his mouth, laughing with delight. They were nothing more than a bunch of small fry. He swept his cloak, the aura of an absolute victor enveloping the entire space. Julian coldly declared, "The exam is over," as no one dares to stand anymore. The gamer's soul inside celebrated wildly. Amazing. This is Julian. This thuggish demeanor is incredibly useful. Julian turned to Eileen, his eyes burning red with provocation, thinking, "Well, Eileen, has fear overcome your hatred yet?" Contrary to his expectations, Eileen merely blushed in confusion, looking completely flustered like a young maiden. Julian froze. He couldn't sense any negative emotions from her. He frantically ruffled his hair, thinking, "Is my color of negation broken? If such an overpowered skill suddenly fails, I'm doomed." Eileen smiled faintly, as if she had known his trick all along. She recalled the past, when Senior Julian also used this very aura to intimidate opponents, avoiding unnecessary conflict, and the system explained that this skill could only read negative emotions. Inside the Shut Eyes building, Harand rushed over, calling Julian's name as if he had found a savior. Julian turned back with an indifferent expression, while Harand's voice trembled as he offered a forced compliment. "Well done, Julian." Julian sneered disdainfully, adopting a superior air. He suddenly grabbed Harand's collar, making the nobleman flinch. Harand's face went pale, utterly panicked. "What's wrong?" Julian chuckled, thinking that his color of negation was still perfectly fine, then released his grip. "Nothing. You've had a tough time." Suddenly, a young man with reddish-brown hair rushed over, greeting loudly. "Good evening, sir." The young man's eyes shone brightly, showing fervent admiration. "You were incredibly cool just now, sir." He introduced himself as Razlot, the administrative officer of Shut Eyes, and considered meeting Julian a great honor. Razlot prattled on endlessly, dismissing the rumors of Julian's amnesia as nonsense. He continued to praise. "You finished the exam without having to lay a hand on any of the applicants." Julian began to feel annoyed, secretly cursing the fanboy's tireless mouth. Razlot continued to add fuel to the fire by mentioning the Torso family's second son, praising Julian for showing no mercy. Truly a class act. Hearing this, Harand became furious, growling at Razlot. "You scoundrel. Are you implying that the Torso family's son failed the exam?" Harand pointed directly at Razlot, yelling at him for daring to be arrogant as merely an intern, especially knowing the relationship between the Torso and Kreifhart families. Julian coldly interrupted. "Harand, I think you're misunderstanding something. Or perhaps it's the Torso family that's misunderstanding." With a cunning smile, Julian extended his hand and declared chillingly, "Shut Eyes does not accept nobles." Harand and Razlot froze, completely shocked by a rule they had never heard of. Harand stammered a retort, pointing at Julian. "Aren't you a noble yourself?" Julian calmly explained that his status was merely from a collateral branch, a dog of the royal family, not of the main Kreifhart lineage. He laid his cards on the table, questioning why the Torso family would send their son to the exam, knowing he would surely be eliminated in the second round. Julian turned away, leaving a loaded question. Or perhaps there's some pre-arranged conspiracy? Then smirked sinisterly. Julian muttered to himself, the image of the Elders' Council appearing in his mind. What scheme are they planning for this exam? Harand stood frozen, his entire body trembling as he realized he had been exposed. He gritted his teeth, clenching his fists, bitterly admitting in his mind, "Damn it, you know everything. You know this is a trap set by the Elders' Council, and I'm their man." Julian suddenly grinned widely, feigning innocence. However, there's no such thing. It must just be a simple misunderstanding. Harand's eyes widened, sweat pouring down like rain, completely overwhelmed by his opponent's psychological warfare. Julian narrowed his eyes, radiating killing intent with a devilish smile. "Otherwise, things will get very bad." The scene shifted to a massive mansion, a voice echoing, "You're finally back." As Julian stepped through the door, he was greeted by bowing maids. 2 rows of maids bowed in unison as Julian strode past like a prince. "Welcome home, young master." A maid timidly asked if he would like dinner, but Julian coldly refused. He turned back with a cunning expression, giving an order. "Oh, and one more thing. Don't let anyone into my office." The maid quickly bowed in compliance, looking a bit worried. Julian stood alone before the large door leading to his private office. Upon entering the room, he immediately placed the moonlight sword on its stand. Julian leaned back in his chair, letting out a sigh of relief, finally able to shed his mask. He recalled Harand's reaction, certain that the Elders' Council had interfered with this exam. He told himself he was lucky no one had detected anything unusual, but wondered how long this luck would last. His greatest fear was that one day, the Elders' Council would discover a weakness and expel him from the family. His gaze fell upon the moonlight sword resting silently on its stand. He admitted his fatal weakness. "The fact that I cannot use the moonlight sword is truly concerning. Because being able to use it means..." Julian concluded that using it was synonymous with possessing absolute power to crush all opponents. If that was the case, he decided to take a gamble, his hand gripping the sword hilt tightly. His crimson eyes flashed with a determined glint. "It's worth a try." To unlock the power of the moonlight sword. Whoosh! Julian held the sword firmly, and blue mana began to gush out, enveloping the blade. He focused his mind, attempting to activate the latent power within the treasured sword. But as expected, the sword remained inert, showing no reaction. He recalled that the original Julian possessed an innate talent. Merely holding a sword would cause sword forms to automatically appear in his mind. The system confirmed that this trait was exceptional swordsman, a form of innate talent that allowed him to wield all types of swords. But this alone wasn't enough. Julian realized that this body's talent was still limited. He knew that in this empire, there were hundreds, even thousands of swordsmen no less skilled than Julian. The difference between them and the original Julian was worlds apart, lying in their use of aura and mana. That was precisely why that Julian fellow could survive with his twisted mentality. He wondered, could he do that right now? Manipulating mana was a double-edged sword. If the flow was reversed, his internal organs would be instantly pulverized. A drop of cold sweat trickled down his cheek. The pressure of this experiment was immense. No. He shook off his hesitation. Sooner or later, he would have to prove his strength anyway. If the concept of mana here was similar to the game, then a veteran who had grinded this game hundreds of times like him knew exactly how to do it. Julian raised the moonlight sword high, beginning to channel power using a method only known to gamers. The goal was to move the mana stored in his heart to the mana meridians, the body's mana organs. Julian began channeling power, aiming directly at the most important of the body's 6 major mana meridians. He gritted his teeth and endured, focusing his entire will on the major meridian in his head, which directly connected mana to the heart. Boom! His eyes glowed crimson, and an azure mana aura violently erupted around his body. The time had come. A mana phantom of Julian appeared, sword in hand, with an incredibly confident demeanor. Next objective, channel all the chaotic mana within his body into the moonlight sword. The resistance was even more intense than expected, but with the skill of a top-server gamer, Julian still managed to bear the burden. A flash of light erupted, and Julian shouted excitedly, "It's a success!" He looked at the glowing sword with a hint of doubt, and, as expected, a notification panel appeared. Moonlight sword, incomplete. Julian raised the sword. It had materialized but still looked feeble. He examined the sword hilt closely, only to see a crude crescent moon symbol. Nevertheless, he smiled contentedly. At least the first day had yielded results. Scene change. Julian was now out on the training ground, facing several wooden dummies. He approached a target, the sword in his hand still emitting a faint blue light. Gripping the sword hilt tightly, he channeled strength into his arm, preparing to unleash a move. Whoosh! An azure sword slash swung out with terrifying speed. The wooden dummy shattered into pieces, and Julian stood in the middle of the ground, his demeanor cold. He sighed in relief, telling himself that his skill had at least reached the knight rank. Looking at the battlefield he had just created, he realized his game knowledge was running out. He needed to complete this sword, he mused thoughtfully. Now he needed someone who understood the original Julian well. Someone that scoundrel would seek out for advice. Just then, a maid called out from behind him. "Young Master Julian." The maid announced, "You have a visitor." Julian was surprised, thinking to himself, this Julian actually has friends? Perfect timing. Razlot, an energetic young man, appeared and saluted militarily with excitement. "Greetings, Sir Julian." Julian merely responded with a speechless expression, showing no interest. Julian called Razlot by name. The fanboy went crazy with joy, shouting because his idol remembered his name. Razlot was startled, fearing it was due to his behavior yesterday, while Julian thought to himself, I don't know if this guy is bold or just stupid. Julian got straight to the point. "No. What brings you here?" Razlot grinned widely, reporting that he had received orders from the commander to confirm the results of yesterday's exam. Julian smirked, retorting, "Didn't you see it yourself yesterday?" Razlot scratched his head and explained that it was procedure, but Julian bluntly criticized. "Garbage procedure. Shut Eyes works incredibly inefficiently." Razlot gave his final report. No applicants passed. He said he would report back to the commander. Julian silently turned his back and walked away, seemingly calculating something in his mind. "Wait," Julian suddenly called out, startling Razlot. Julian reconfirmed. "You said you would report to the commander, right?" Julian turned back with a malicious smile, his eyes glinting crimson. "Then I'll do it myself." Razlot was utterly shocked, stammering. "Excuse me? You will do it yourself? Sir Julian?" "That's right," Julian confirmed, placing a hand on Razlot's shoulder and inviting him. "Come in my carriage. I'll give you a ride." Razlot screamed in terror. Razlot trembled like a leaf, asking in a panicked voice, "Sir Julian, did I do something wrong?" Julian denied curtly and coldly. "No," Julian explained with feigned concern. "I just thought you'd be uncomfortable going back alone." He thought to himself, "Julian, you should live a little more decently." Julian mused, making a final decision. "Anyway, since it's come to this, should I go ask for his opinion?" Julian set his sights on a new target, the commander of Shut Eyes, who surely knew everything about this body. He calculated that just one word from this commander would be enough to put the entire Criffart family in their place, silencing them permanently. The group arrived at a magnificent building, gleaming gold from roof to foundation. A subordinate soldier rushed in, shouting loudly, Commander, something's happened." The commander grumbled, annoyed at the interruption, but the soldier stammered the news. He has come here himself." The soldier shouted the shocking name. "Julian Criffart Plassen has here to see you." The pen in the commander's hand froze. The commander looked up, repeating in utter astonishment. "He came here himself?" The commander's purple eyes flashed with a meaningful glint. "Is that Julian?" The Adrathan royal palace appeared, majestic and magnificent like a newly launched game server. Julian, or rather, the gamer's soul within him, secretly marveled. "Wow, I never thought I'd see this place with my own eyes." The map of the Rosenda continent appeared. The game world divided into 3 major nations. The Carpathian Empire was the strongest overlord, where Julian resided, built upon the ruins of a nation once devastated after sealing demon god Barbatos. The symbol of the empire's power was a magnificent warhorse statue, and this splendid palace too. It was truly the real deal, not just graphics. The gamer's soul within was crying tears of emotion, but on the outside, Julian maintained his poker face, utterly devoid of expression. Julian let out a chuckle of delight, making Razlot, standing beside him, turn pale with fear. Why is he laughing? So scary. Razlot broke out in a cold sweat, unable to comprehend what on earth his boss was thinking. The low-ranking soldier thought, normally, to meet the commander, one had to go through his subordinates. Yet today, Julian demanded to report directly. And why drag along a small fry like himself? The low-ranking soldiers of Shut Eyes were whispering and gossiping. What's going on? Why did Julian suddenly show up here? One whispered to another, suspecting the rumors of Julian's amnesia were a hoax, while the final boss with a brand new eye patch strode past with an imposing aura. Razlot was sweating profusely, his inner self screaming. Why is he laughing? It's an honor, but I might just die of a sudden heart attack. Julian smiled, looking at the scenery, and uttered a very boss-like remark. The palace is as grand as ever, making Razlot beside him only able to stammer in agreement. Standing before the gleaming golden gate, Julian calmly analyzed. This is the first gate anyone can enter. The commander is definitely beyond the second security gate. Razlot was utterly bewildered, not understanding why Julian was stating such basic facts that any shut-eyes soldier would know. A horrifying thought flashed through Razlot's mind as an image of Julian smiling meaningfully appeared. Don't. Tell me. The administrative staff's face drained of all color, his entire body feeling as if struck by lightning. Is this a test? In Razlot's mind, Julian appeared as a demon with a scornful smile, as if saying a low-level intern like him needed to be retested. While Julian was chilling, like a gamer, enjoying the scenery and secretly marveling that the real-life view was better than in the game, Razlot behind him had panicked to the point of clutching his head. Julian turned back and asked with great concern, "What's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" While Razlot jumped in surprise and vehemently denied it, the Shut Eyes headquarters appeared. A radiant gold building, majestic and magnificent under the sunlight, truly a high-quality, real-life structure. Julian announced their arrival, and Razlot, with a glimmer of hope, tremblingly asked, "So, sir, have I passed the test?" Julian looked at his subordinate with a puzzled look. "What are you talking about? Is this another test?" Julian's expression darkened with confusion, and he flatly denied. "Not at all." Julian explained logically. "Why would I need to test you?" A statement that made Razlot freeze completely. Razlot burst into joy, his face flushed red, realizing he was already an official member of Shut Eyes without needing any test. The staff member thanked profusely, bowing repeatedly before scampering away in utter exhilaration. Julian just stood there, his face emotionless, watching Razlot's back as he skipped away, whistling like a madman. Julian chuckled derisively, secretly thinking that staff member was truly an idiot. A guard approached, announcing that the captain invited him inside. Julian smirked with interest, preparing to meet the boss of this body. Introducing Captain Odwin Balladeer, the sole heir of the fallen Balladeer family. Rumor had it, this captain was a formidable individual, the real deal who could command all of Shut Eyes and was loyal only to the royal family. Julian was also curious about the extent of this captain's authority. Led by a subordinate, Julian admitted he felt a little nervous. The subordinate knocked on the captain's door, asking for permission to enter. A cold voice echoed from within. "Enter," while a delicate hand was gliding a pen over documents. Shock. The person behind the desk was not a burly man but a petite girl with pinkish white hair. The girl looked up. It was Captain Odwin Balladeer, who greeted Julian like an old acquaintance. Odwin asked about Julian's injury, making him freeze, his brain unable to process it in time. Julian broke out in a cold sweat. His mind screamed, "This is Odwin Balladeer, the captain of Shut Eyes?" He had only one thought, pint-sized as he saw his boss's dwarfed figure behind the enormous desk. Julian was still in shock, never expecting the captain to be a girl looking like a teenager, while Odwin was already visibly annoyed. Odwin's hand clenched, veins bulging. In a flash, Odwin closed in, grabbed Julian's collar, and growled. "You were going to say I'm small. As always, weren't you?" Julian vehemently denied it, secretly thinking this must be the authority everyone spoke of. Her ability to read others was overwhelmingly powerful. Swiftly changing tactics, Julian adopted a professional demeanor, requesting Odwin to report on the status of his injury. Julian bowed slightly, his mind stretched taut, racking his brain on how to answer his boss. He glanced at Captain Odwin, reminding himself to be careful with every word he spoke to this unpredictable boss. Sweating profusely, Julian calculated the worst-case scenario. He feared that Odwin would discover the anomaly and begin to suspect his identity. In Julian's mind, the image of his former self appeared a loyal hound, absolutely devoted to Shut Eyes, completely unlike him now. Deciding to continue the act, Julian bowed dramatically, thanking Odwin for her concern. He continued his cheesy speech. "Though the wound is not light, it is not enough to hinder my loyalty to the Empire." Odwin merely stared in silence, without a hint of expression, making Julian's blood run cold. The air in the room thickened, and Julian wondered, did I say something wrong? Odwin narrowed her eyes, resting her chin on her hand, appearing to analyze every single detail. In a flash, she was standing upright on the desk, right in front of Julian. Odwin casually walked across the pile of papers, her overwhelming aura completely dominating as she advanced straight towards him. She asked directly, her voice full of suspicion. "Do you always talk like that?" Odwin pressed her face close to Julian's, her gaze as sharp as a razor. "You give me the feeling of a complete stranger, Julian." Julian's eyes flashed with alarm as the system displayed, color of negation. It was over. His boss had started to suspect him. For a moment, Odwin seemed to see the clumsy old Julian again, being grabbed by the collar and scolded relentlessly by her. "How have you treated your superiors until now?" Cornered, Julian decided to go all out, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He smirked like a true villain, growling. "Well then, let's just go with a preemptive strike. Is there a problem?" Odwin frowned, her hand gripping Julian's sword hilt tightly, her aura erupting. "You dare lay your hand on my sword?" Julian smirked, his hand on Captain Odwin's sword. "It's rare for you to come to Shut Eye's headquarters yourself, and each time you only give a brief report before leaving." Odwin shot a sidelong glance, not bothering to turn around. "You're suddenly so diligent today, Julian." Julian scoffed, thinking he had underestimated his boss, while the gamer soul inside him was screaming because his acting plan had fallen apart. He casually stepped forward. "I've been on leave due to injury for quite a while, so I came to report directly." Odwin narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Is that so?" Julian's eyes flashed red. He told himself to go all the way, to be as brazen as the real Julian. Julian leaned his hands on the desk, pressing his face close to his boss, his voice full of challenge. "Is the captain trying to control whether I'm allowed to appear or not?" Odwin crossed her arms, her face as cold as stone. "You're already sassing your boss right after returning? I heard you've been acting strangely, but it seems you've fully recovered." Julian scoffed, thinking to himself that his boss's straightforward way of speaking was both genuine and annoying. Odwin sighed, letting it go for now. "All right, report. Were there any decent candidates in the entrance exam?" Julian answered decisively, without a second's hesitation, his face nonchalant. "Not a single one." Odwin nodded. "That's right. You are the disciple of Sword Saint Hayden Reich. How could those small fry catch your eye?" She continued to ask if anyone was skilled enough to be an intern, and Julian maintained his smile along with the blunt answer. "No." Odwin froze, the hand holding the papers stopping completely. She was utterly shocked, her voice disbelieving. "You mean you didn't let a single person pass?" Julian grinned widely, nodding in proud confirmation. "That's right." Veins bulged on Odwin's forehead. She gritted her teeth. "Why is that?" Julian merely smiled silently, letting his boss boil with rage. Odwin snarled, her face darkening with anger. "Why?" Finally, unable to bear it any longer, the captain slammed the table and roared. "What the hell are you doing? Are you crazy?" While Julian stood there witnessing his boss's outburst, Captain Odwin yelled, pointing directly at Julian's face, questioning that Shut Eyes was desperately short-staffed, and even picking up scraps was better than nothing. Julian scoffed, retorting sharply that being short-staffed didn't mean they had to pick up trash, and asserted that not a single small fry was skilled enough to join Shut Eyes. Odwin still tried to salvage the situation, suggesting that perhaps some of them had potential after training, but Julian immediately shut her down. A waste of time. They aren't even skilled enough to be interns, he thought to himself. In reality, he was just trying to avoid having to fight them. Odwin was speechless, waving her hand to dismiss the insolent subordinate. "You truly are impossible to talk to. Get out of my sight. Now." Julian smirked, not only not leaving but pressing forward. "Haha. Before I go, I have a proposal." He told himself to play Julian's role perfectly, even though he was a bit nervous inside, then decisively stepped forward. Julian's gloved hand placed a stack of documents on his boss' desk. Julian declared that he had pointed out all the flaws in the current entrance exam, leaving Odwin dumbfounded. "What is this?" She picked up the documents, her face full of doubt. "Flaws?" Julian crossed his arms, smugly explaining that those applicants didn't even realize what kind of hellhole Shut Eyes was. Odwin raised an eyebrow, seemingly partly convinced. "Is that so?" "Well, it's true that applicants should know where they're applying." Her gaze sharpened, thinking to herself, "You'd better not waste my time." She skimmed through it, immediately spotting the bold, almost gangster-like text. "Upon registration for the exam, Shut Eyes will not be responsible for anything that occurs." Odwin burst out laughing, her voice full of sarcasm. "Ha, it sounds just like..." She looked up, her eyes sharp, reading Julian's intentions. "You mean you're going to fight them with the intent to kill, Julian?" Julian only responded with a mysterious smile and a low chuckle. Odwin stared at the documents, realizing Julian's silence was the answer. She thought to herself, no answer. So I guessed correctly. How strange. She pondered, realizing this was the first time Julian had directly interfered with internal policies like this, an extremely unusual move. Captain Odwin narrowed her eyes, reading Julian. "Is this why you didn't let anyone pass the entrance exam? Afraid of beating them to a pulp and getting into trouble?" Julian spread his hands, beginning his speech. "Yes, but not only that. Those kids who pass that kind of exam are useless to us, an organization directly affiliated with the royal family." He continued to ramble about honor, but Odwin was fed up, raising a hand to cut him off. All right, I get it." Odwin shook her head in exasperation. "Honestly, whenever it concerns the royal family, you always overreact." Julian scoffed, concluding, "Of course. Thank you for your efforts, Captain Odwin." She reluctantly agreed. I will submit it to the council, but I can't guarantee it will be approved. Julian turned to make a quick exit with a triumphant expression, but Odwin called him back. Wait, Hayden Reich, the protagonist of the original game, suddenly appeared. I heard there's a message from the royal family sent to your office. Go check it. Julian smiled meaningfully, indicating his understanding, and then left. After Julian departed, Odwin sat alone, her gaze fixed thoughtfully on the proposal document. She murmured, rereading the critical clause. Shut eyes will not be held responsible for anything that happens, huh? Odwin grasped the hidden meaning. This implicitly means that even if someone dies during the examination, it won't be considered a crime because the royal family provides protection. She continued her analysis, noting that all shut eyes applicants were commoners or fallen nobles, a group with no voice to complain. Odwin deduced, Julian definitely knows this. The reason he submitted this proposal is because, her eyes flashed with clarity, because he realized the Elders Council and the Torso family were playing tricks in the examination. Odwin nodded, having understood the game. This is his countermove. She secretly marveled at Julian's audacity. This is a message to them. I know what you're plotting. I won't let it slide easily this time. Truly a bold move, Julian. Odwin muttered to herself, still shocked by her subordinates. Brilliant move. Is this how you retaliate against the Elders Council? Then she called out loudly. Is anyone there? A subordinate immediately appeared, saluting. Captain, you called for me? Odwin sighed, handing him a carefully sealed letter. Take this to the council. Odwin's subordinate received the order, responding decisively. Understood. Odwin mused, realizing Julian had completely changed since that incident. Before, he was merely the royal family's hound. She envisioned the wild beast Julian roaring, breaking the chains that had bound him for so long. The female captain smirked, muttering that this could become a major affair, and she needed to keep a close eye on him. Meanwhile, Hayden Reich, with a confident smile, had successfully infiltrated the Shut Eye's headquarters. He thought to himself that he couldn't believe he had made it all the way into Julian's office. As Hayden opened the door, he analyzed. Normally, Shut Eyes doesn't provide private rooms for members, unless that person is an extremely special individual. He stepped inside, curious to see how luxurious the room would be. What met Hayden's eyes was a pile of gaudy, flamboyant woman's clothing, so dazzling it hurt his eyes. Furthermore, grotesque statues were displayed all over the room. Hayden was speechless. What is this pile of eerie decorations? He scanned the room, concluding that Julian's aesthetic taste was worse than even a villain's. All expensive items, yet they looked like trash. Muttering curses as he tripped over a statue, Hayden guessed that Julian surely had a shopping addiction problem. At the same time, Julian coldly permitted the person outside to enter, and Razlot cheerfully stepped in to greet him, reporting that he had brought a letter from the royal family. Julian looked at Razlot with a world-weary gaze. It's you again? Feels like I see you every day. After receiving the letter the captain had mentioned, Razlot was about to slip away when Julian called him back. Razlot turned around, his face blank with confusion. Julian sat imperiously with crossed legs, ordering, perfect timing, load all these sculptures onto your carriage. Razlot broke out in a cold sweat, his voice trembling as he asked if it was all of them, and Julian simply replied with a concise yes. Razlot broke out in a cold sweat, unable to believe Julian's order, but immediately after, he was as delighted as if he had struck gold, deluding himself that the big boss had given him a task, and his promotion day was not far off. He aggressively accepted the order to clean up immediately, while Julian merely stood with his arms crossed, secretly thinking that this guy was making that strange face again. Razlot eagerly picked up a decorative item, grinning widely. Suddenly, a chilling surge of killing intent emanated from Julian, making Razlot freeze, his face pale with terror. Julian silently watched as Razlot, startled, stumbled backward, dropping his belongings. Julian smirked, sarcastically remarking with profound irony. Oh my, you truly are quite handy, Lazarus. Razlot, in a panic, grabbed a sword, prostrated himself, and cried out apologies for messing up, thinking he was about to lose his head. Julian casually crossed his leg, telling his subordinate that he didn't need to put on such a spectacle. Julian leaned down, whispering into Razlot's ear with a dangerous expression. Cleaning up the mess if you die here would be far more troublesome. Razlot froze, his face drained of color, only able to stammer out his obedience, as Julian ordered him to continue his work. Julian turned away, holding the letter in his hand, telling himself he had given that guy quite a scare, then decided to read the letter while waiting. The royal red wax seal was clearly visible, authentic just like in the game. The letter was addressed to Sir Julian of the Kreifhart family and an officer of Shut Eyes. The letter's content was simple. The Emperor commanded Julian, if he had recovered, to return to work immediately. Julian frowned, feeling that they were merely trying to exploit his labor with flowery words. Nevertheless, he didn't complain, believing that accumulating practical combat experience was necessary, and this mission was to recover a resonance stone. This mission involved destroying demons, remnants of the deceased demon god Barbatos, creatures born from his resentment, and to suppress them, special items activated by a complex magic circle needed to be used. The demons were chained within a dark rift, suppressed by items called resonance stones. These stones were the formidable legacy of ancient mages, created from mana to seal the demons. Julian read the letter and concluded, since I'm not a mage, this mission is definitely about protecting the one who will recover the stone. He admitted that fighting demons carried risks, but that wasn't an issue. Julian placed the letter on the table, calculating that if he completed this mission, the baseless rumors about him would automatically vanish. He began to ponder. Let's see which mage is skilled enough to handle the resonance stone. I hope it's not some small fry. The scene shifted to Adrathan Royal Palace, where Eileen Donatien was stretching tiredly amidst a pile of documents. She complained, "Why do I still have to grind through theses like this even after becoming a professor?" Eileen felt helpless, believing that a mage's life meant constantly proving oneself. But the royal family was truly exploiting labor. Suddenly, a hand gently tapped her shoulder. A girl with moss-green hair appeared, cheerfully asking Eileen what she was doing at the palace. Her friend, Diana, was delighted to see Eileen again, teasing that ever since she became the youngest professor, she had been incredibly busy and hard to meet. Eileen gave a wry smile, while Diana immediately invited her to a tea party. The genius mage quickly refused, her face contorted as she made an excuse about having to work on her thesis. Diana found it strange when Eileen suddenly fell silent, her expression becoming unusually tense. Eileen didn't answer, merely pointing a finger towards a distant direction. She pointed directly at a luxurious black carriage approaching on the main road. The emblem on the carriage door appeared, a sword piercing a rose, the symbol of the Prayson branch of the Criffart family, Julian's carriage. Diana was utterly shocked. "I heard he was on the verge of death, didn't I? As truly as tenacious as a leech." Meanwhile, Eileen crossed her arms, her face scowling with clear annoyance. Diana leaned her face close to Eileen, full of hidden meaning. "Oh? What's this?" causing Eileen to ask back awkwardly. Diana directly teased, asking Eileen if she still harbored feelings for Julian, making Eileen blush and vehemently deny it. Diana continued to be playful, teasing about a past, well-behaved Eileen. Memories flooded back. Diana recounted how Eileen had dared to ask Julian out to confess her feelings under a cherry blossom tree, after hearing a rumor that confessions there would not be rejected. Hit where it hurt, Eileen quickly changed tactics, hastily grabbing Diana's hand and inviting her to a tea party to change the subject. Suddenly, "I have free time now," Diana comforted her friend, saying that everyone was captivated by Julian back then, but secretly thought Eileen was probably the most smitten. Eileen recalled how Julian had changed 180 degrees, becoming as cold as a machine after returning from the northern battlefield. Eileen crossed her arms smugly, declaring that she wouldn't have to face Julian for a while. She held out a letter, boasting that she wouldn't be at the Imperial Palace for some time. Diana's jaw dropped when she realized it was a letter from the royal family. Eileen confirmed that she had just received a special mission from the royal family. That mission was to restore a resonance stone. The scene shifted to an army of blue knights with neat spears, ready for battle. Two guards discussed the presence of an important figure, hearing that both Shut-Eyes and the Blue Knights were participating. Another soldier confirmed this was a special mission, and Julian would also be involved, greatly shocking his comrade. The guards believed that rumors of Julian being injured or having amnesia were just dirty tricks by envious people. Julian appeared on a white horse, exuding an overwhelming aura, truly an authentic presence that couldn't be diminished. He secretly thought that accepting this mission was the right decision, as his reputation was gradually being cleared. Julian rode past, receiving a formal greeting from a soldier. "Sir Julian, thank you for your efforts." Two knights from the Order of the Blue Lion rode forward, one introducing himself as Perrin, the other as Heinleich. Julian replied courteously, agreeing to cooperate in protecting the mages on their way to Julin. Julian smirked sinisterly, secretly thinking it would be fun if demons appeared along the way, sending shivers down the two knights' spines. Perrin started a conversation, asking why Julian didn't ride in the carriage to rest and recover. He continued, telling Julian that he could just leave the task of protecting the mages to them. Julian smirked, knowing full well that these guys weren't being kind, merely feigning concern. He thought about the Blue Knights, the Empire's regular forces, quite different from the Shut-Eyes. Most of these Blue Knights were nobles who disliked someone from a branch family like him. Julian immediately saw through them. These guys are trying to ensure that someone from a branch family doesn't steal their credit. Even though he knew their scheme, Julian pretended to agree to ride in the carriage, making the two knights sigh in relief. Heinleich gleefully said he would go inform Maj Eileen, but as soon as he mentioned that name, Julian's eyes flared. Who? Just then, Eileen Donatien stepped down from the carriage, smiling as she greeted them, and introduced herself as the one in charge of the restoration. As soon as she saw Julian, Eileen's smile froze. She was so shocked she stood still. Julian's face darkened, and he turned to Perrin, saying, "Forget about the carriage, my apologies." Eileen stood behind him, her face flushed, frantically wondering why Julian was here, and, more importantly, why he was deliberately avoiding her. Julian secretly thought Eileen was truly an unpredictable character. He felt uncomfortable because he couldn't read her thoughts. Perrin and Heinleich froze, not understanding why Julian had changed his mind so quickly, wondering if he was trying to assert dominance over them. Julian merely smirked meaningfully, making them even more bewildered. Perrin broke into a sweat, realizing that Julian had seen through his scheme to push him to the rear and seize command. The Knight Perrin secretly thought Julian was truly the real deal, surviving the royal chaos without any special backing, but he still resentfully clenched his fist, muttering that someone from a branch family like Julian was far too arrogant. The white-haired Knight Heinleich broke into a sweat, feeling Julian's gaze glaring at him and telling himself, "Just you wait," Julian sneered, annoyed that no one had informed him that the mage he had to protect was none other than Eileen. Meanwhile, Eileen's face was flushed, and she irritably hid behind the carriage curtain, feeling extremely awkward herself. Julian decided he had to complete the mission as quickly as possible, and most importantly, without any interaction with Eileen. With that, Julian spurred his horse into a gallop, leaving the Blue Knights and the carriage behind. The entire team had arrived at Julin Town, where the resonance stone was located, but it looked quite dilapidated. Julian wondered why the delegation sent by the Empire had no one to welcome them. A local youth ran over, confirming they were from the Empire, and welcoming the team after a long journey. The guide announced that he would lead them to the resonance stone, where giant blue crystal blocks were floating above the clock tower. He indicated the position where the resonance stone chest and mana box needed to be placed to begin the work. Eileen stepped forward to take command, declaring she would personally carry the mana-sensitive items. The guide called Eileen over to inspect the stone that needed restoration. Before Eileen was a gigantic, cracked crystal, which left her stunned. After examining it, Eileen declared that the stone was beyond repair and needed partial replacement, causing the guide to blanch. Eileen reassured him that the barrier would only temporarily disappear, not for long, and the guide tremblingly placed his trust in her. She placed her hand on the stone, and a brilliant golden energy began to pour out. After completing the preparations, Eileen suddenly remembered she needed to inform Julian that the barrier was about to vanish while she worked. Eileen's face flushed crimson as she told herself that even though she didn't want to see Julian, she had to be professional for the sake of the task. She timidly called out to Julian as he walked with an overwhelming aura of killing intent, clearly wanting to make a quick escape. Julian completely ignored her, walking straight past, leaving Eileen stunned by the blatant disregard. Annoyed, Eileen chased after him, thinking to herself, "Is he avoiding me? Could he know I've been following him?" She grabbed Julian's cloak, growling that this was a mission and he couldn't behave like that. Having successfully blocked his path, Eileen confronted him directly. "Why are you avoiding me?" Julian turned back with a dominant smirk, turning the tables. "When have I ever avoided you? You're the one who's been trailing after me." Eileen froze, almost believing his supremely confident tone. She snapped out of it, dismissing him. "That's not important." Julian continued to taunt with a provocative expression. "So what's more important, Miss Stalker?" Stung by his words, Eileen fumed, baring her teeth and yelling in protest against the Stalker nickname. Suddenly, the air grew thick, and Julian's smile vanished as he sensed imminent danger. The sky turned blood red, and numerous demonic shadows with blazing eyes began to materialize everywhere. Eileen pointed towards the demons, yelling at Julian. "See, I was trying to tell you." She furiously yelled at him, explaining that she had intended to warn him that the barrier had fallen and demons could appear at any moment. An earth-shattering explosion rang out, and the ground shook violently. Julian reacted in an instant, his eyes flashing crimson, pushing Knight Heinleich out of position. Heinleich was thrown back, unable to comprehend what was happening, only seeing Julian already in a defensive stance. From within the dust and smoke, a gigantic two-horned skeletal demon roared, revealing itself as the perpetrator of the recent attack. Julian faced the skeletal monster, realizing it didn't have one, but two horns. This was getting serious. He immediately pulled Eileen behind him, warning, "Don't come closer, it's dangerous." The two-horned demon let out a roar, its eyes glowing red, exuding immense pressure. Eileen started to panic, realizing she was in a cooldown period and couldn't use combat spells or resonance stones. The boss didn't say much. It roared and then summoned a horde of lesser demons. A lesser demon charged straight at Eileen, making her scream loudly. Julian reacted with divine speed, grabbing Eileen and pulling her out of danger in an instant. He held her tightly, his tone still eerily calm. "Don't let your guard down, Eileen. It's naive of you to be shaken by such a trivial matter." Julian smirked confidently. "I'll handle things here. Why don't we focus on what each of us can do?" Eileen asked back, bewildered, still not understanding his intention. He pointed directly at her, giving clear instructions. "You are responsible for restoring the resonance stones," Julian confidently declared. "And I am responsible for protecting you." Eileen blushed, realizing she had panicked too much and forgotten the team's main objective. She immediately regained her composure, shouted, "It will take another 7 minutes," then ran off to complete her task. Before leaving, she called out suddenly, "Sir Julian," and he replied nonchalantly. She hesitated for a moment, then shouted, "Please don't get hurt." Eileen pointed at him, emphasizing with worry, "I can't use healing magic." Julian only snorted, his shadow stretching eerily. "Getting injured is harder than you think." But the truth was Julian's hands were trembling. He was just bluffing. Facing the boss, Julian cursed inwardly for lacking real combat experience with this type. But since the Blue Knights were watching, he couldn't run away. Julian thought to himself, sweat pouring down. If it were the real Julian, this small matter. The impudent knight, Perrin shouted, trying to steal the kill. "Wait, let the Blue Lion Knights handle this demon." All the Blue Knights charged forward recklessly, determined to chip away at the two-horned demon's health. Perrin looked confident, sneering. "Excellent. Just keep chipping away at its health like this, and it'll be done." He turned to taunt Julian, who stood still. "Haha, are you afraid of the two-horned demon, sir? You don't look like Sir Julian at all." Julian only gave a meaningful smirk. "Yes, that's right." Perrin froze when he saw his comrades fall, stammering, "No, don't tell me." His eyes widened in horror when he saw Julian smiling. Is he smiling? Julian flashed a mad smile, his eyes flashing red. "Right now, I am Julian. And if it were Julian in this life or death situation, he would enjoy it, wouldn't he?" Julian decided to go all out, facing the monster head on. The system panel popped up. A new trait was activated, Master Swordsman. Julian soared into the air, his sword radiating a stream of azure energy, slashing directly at the demon's skeletal hand. Perrin couldn't believe his eyes, shouting in despair. Sir Julian, a single slash caused that much damage? Impossible. Blood splattered onto his face. But Julian only laughed savagely, looking utterly satisfied. He took a stance, sword energy erupting. Excellent. It worked. With a whoosh, Julian moved with incredible speed. He effortlessly dodged the two-horned demon's devastating swing as if it were a joke. Julian unleashed a storm of sword energy, spiraling azure slashes completely overwhelming the monster. Every muscle in his face tensed. Julian poured all his strength into the attack. Crack. The demon's glowing red eye cracked open, signaling a critical hit. Julian realized he had miscalculated a step, a hint of panic flashing across his face. Damn it! A devastating blow from the two-horned demon sent Julian crashing to the ground mercilessly. Julian coughed up a mouthful of blood, his bloodshot eyes wide with shock. He clutched his chest, gritting his teeth against the bone-piercing pain. It hurts so much I can't breathe. The two-horned demon looked down, thinking contemptuously. A mere worm dares to defy me? If that's the case. The demon's glowing red eyes flashed. It prepared to unleash its finishing blow. The monster's skeletal hand rose. The ground around it cracked from the pressure. The Knight Perrin gloated upon seeing Julian defeated. Impossible! Even Sir Julian was defeated? Haha, there's no way he could defeat the two-horned demon by himself. It's my turn to take command now. Another Blue Knight cried out in panic. Look! Making Perrin turn back in surprise. Amidst the dust and smoke, Julian's silhouette stood up straight, his aura completely transformed. His sword began to emit a brilliant azure light, accumulating a terrifying amount of energy. Another Blue Knight stammered in horror. That blue light. Julian raised his head, his entire body enveloped in a blue aura. The system announced, Incomplete Moonlight Sword activated. He smirked arrogantly, realizing this was the legendary Moonlight Sword. Julian swung his sword, thinking to himself, it's not even half the power of the real thing. But it's more than enough to handle this situation. A powerful azure slash was unleashed, tearing through the air and shooting straight towards the two-horned demon. Julian laughed maniacally, completely immersed in his new power. The two-horned demon could only brace its skeletal face for the impact. Julian glanced, analyzing the monster's attack. Sharp attacks, despite its seemingly slow body. But I've seen through all your moves, he confidently declared, because I am Julian. Simultaneously activating a new ability, the system panel displayed the words, Innate ability is less than. Clairvoyance is greater than. Julian activated True Sight mode, his smile like a demon reveling in new power. With True Sight, Julian dodged the two-horned demon's attacks like a god, rendering all its blows a mere joke. His crimson eyes, with the True Sight symbol glowing, read every movement of the enemy. The Blue Knights could only freeze, mouths agape, shouting, he dodged everything! Perrin, who had boasted earlier, was now pale as a ghost, stammering in realization, that's Julian of Shut Eyes. A colossal crystal wall began to form from the ground. Eileen completed the magic circle, declaring, it's done. She clung tightly to the railing, hastily announcing, the barrier will soon be reactivated. The two-horned demon was neatly trapped within the crystal cage, completely losing its ferocity. The demon turned its head to look towards the barrier. A fatal mistake, Julian smirked, his voice full of sarcasm. Oh dear, carelessness in battle, truly a foolish act. The demon's crimson eyes constricted, realizing it had fallen into a trap. Julian swung his sword, unleashing a crescent of brilliant blue, pure energy. The moonlight sword slash tore through space, hurtling straight towards the demon, while Eileen could only watch in stunned silence. The Blue Knights were once again stunned, speechless, each face as if they had just seen a ghost. A perfect slash cut across the two-horned demon's head. The monster's entire upper body slid off and began to disintegrate. Julian stood tall amidst the boss's ruins, his sword still radiating residual power. The crowd behind whispered amongst themselves, unable to believe their eyes. Julian gasped, covering his mouth, as if he himself couldn't believe the outcome. Did it really work? Julian swept past the Blue Knights, each of them pale as a ghost, trembling uncontrollably before his aura. He quietly departed, leaving horror in his wake, perfectly embodying the demeanor of a villainous overlord. An eye patch officer suddenly called out Julian's name, and he casually turned to respond. The officer grabbed Julian's hand, his voice trembling with profuse thanks, which surprised Julian himself. He couldn't hide his excitement. I thought we were all done for. Sir Julian is truly top tier. All the Blue Knights behind them also cheered in applause, regarding Julian as their savior. Perrin, the one who had boasted earlier, now approached with a crestfallen face. I didn't expect this. Thank you for your hard work, Julian smirked, patting Perrin's shoulder, then taunted. Sir Perrin, I'll leave the rest to you, won't I? I'm not used to these kinds of things. Perrin could only nod repeatedly, speechless, at this tense delegation. Eileen observed from a distance, admitting to herself that Julian was completely different, standing out sharply from the other nobles. Perrin was still in shock, muttering to himself, how could he be so calm after defeating the demon? He's truly not human. As soon as he was out of everyone's sight, Julian found a secluded spot by the stream to relax. After just a few steps, he collapsed to the ground, panting, holy crap, that was deadly dangerous. The feelings of hatred, fear, and panic from facing the demon rushed back, forcing him to clutch his head in distress. He looked at his still trembling hand, recalling the sensation of the blade slicing through the monster, secretly thinking that reality was far more terrifying than the game. He sat up, lightly punching his hand, wondering how the original Julian could treat such life-or-death situations as light as a feather. The image of the original cold-blooded Julian appeared in his mind, and he realized he had gotten too deep into character. I've acted so much like him that I'm scaring myself. He looked down at the water's surface, a terrifying question arising. Could it be that my thoughts are being assimilated by this body? Letting out a sigh of relief, he still couldn't stop wondering about the limits of this body's power. Just how strong is Julian? After all, a system panel appeared before him, revealing that the recent skill was a perfect combination of Lee Sihu's gamer knowledge and Julian's combat experience. The system panel appeared, analyzing the unique grade True Sight innate ability, scanning for weaknesses, reading emotions, and increasing damage against frightened enemies. Julian delightedly thought that with this overpowered trait, he could easily dispel all suspicions aimed at him. He frowned, muttering that the only remaining problem was the incomplete Moonlight Sword. He drew his sword, a weapon that looked cool but was still in beta. Julian re-examined the sword, his face full of contemplation about its true power. He discovered scratches on the blade after the solo kill of the boss. He recalled the feeling of having to pour an enormous amount of mana to activate the skill. Its power and stability were far inferior to the complete version. As he wiped the sword, he muttered about stability, the very thing this sword lacked. Suddenly, a cunning smile appeared on Julian's face as he came up with an extremely profound idea to turn the tables. The scene shifts to another location, where the cloaked figures of the Elders' Council were gathered. In a lavish meeting room, Harand stood reporting before the entire noble Elders' Council. An elder leader sat on the main chair, coldly ordering Harand. "Sit down." Harand, pale as a ghost, tremblingly began to report the situation. The elder leader, revealing his aged face beneath the hood, growled. "So you mean Julian has read our plan?" He roared Harand's name, making the noble shrink back in fear. Harand could only meekly reply, "Yes," in extreme fear. The elder leader scornfully said that Harand was truly useless, only bringing trouble, just as expected. Harand hastily bowed and apologized to Lord Orn, admitting that if not for their blood relation, he would have been eliminated long ago. Another member spoke up, reporting, "Lord Orn, Shut Eyes has made strange moves recently. They have submitted a proposal to the Imperial Office." The content of the proposal was presented. From now on, responsibility in the entrance examination will no longer fall upon the examiners. Lord Orn narrowed his eyes upon hearing the report about the new law. And even if someone dies, they will not be held accountable in the name of the royal family. Crack! The old leader clenched his fist, veins bulging from extreme rage. Another council member immediately realized the problem. Isn't this speaking on Julian's behalf? The entire council erupted, shouting curses. "That's right, Hez just the royal family's dog. How dare he warn us like that?" Another hooded figure spoke up to interject. "But Lord Orn, this is an opportunity for us," causing Orn to turn and ask, "An opportunity?" The member named Aiden smirked cunningly, beginning to present his plan to the entire council. Aiden analyzed. Until now, Julian has only obeyed the royal family's orders, as an image of Julian, chained like a hunting dog, appeared. But if he starts acting on his own will like this, he continued, as an image of Julian tearing apart iron chains with his bare hands flashed by. Julian's eyes flashed with a murderous red glint, his teeth clenched like a wild beast just unleashed from its cage. Then something will definitely change, Aiden concluded, as an image of Julian's hands bleeding from crushing the chains appeared. He smirked sinisterly, believing this was an even better way to exploit Julian than sending him to the northern battlefield as before. Another member jumped up to protest. "Are you telling us to just let him do whatever he wants?" But Aiden calmly raised his hand to signal. With a terrifyingly confident smile, Aiden replied succinctly, "Yes." He continued to finalize the plan. "I say we should lie low and wait for a while." Scene change. Julian sighed in relief in his office, admitting that the recent mission had consumed too much mana. The entire room of the future villain sparkled brightly, entirely decorated with meticulously cared-for potted plants. Julian contentedly admired his decorating achievement. But seeing the room decorated exactly to my liking truly brings a sense of peace. The villain hugged a potted plant to his chest, inhaling its scent with affection. Plants bring peace even to someone like Julian. Julian smiled triumphantly, thinking about the mission's outcome. I not only dispelled those ridiculous rumors, but I might have also. He opened a treasure chest, and the brilliant red light of the item inside shone out, signaling that a valuable loot item had just arrived. The valuable loot item just received was a brilliant red gemstone, sparkling and indicating its rarity. Julian held the stone, his mind racing rapidly. I found a way to complete the Moonlight Sword. He affirmed his plan would rely on this gemstone. In his thoughts, Julian recalled the game's mechanics. After the Demon King appeared, all objects gained the ability to absorb mana. Especially, the Empire's mana stones had the highest conductivity and capacity, making them excellent materials for resonance stones. Returning to reality, Julian examined the gemstone, a confident smile appearing on his lips. He decided to borrow the idea of infusing mana into resonance stones to apply it to his sword. Blue mana flared up as Julian held the sword and the stone, and he thought about creating an intermediary layer between himself and the weapon. Crack! Julian crushed the gemstone with his bare hands, and the idea of a mana conduit had taken shape. He frowned, realizing the core problem was finding a gemstone perfectly compatible with his mana. Clenching his fist, Julian blew away the remnants of the stone, his face filled with determination. Knock knock. The sound of knocking echoed, and Julian guessed it must be time for dinner. He called out loudly, his tone somewhat impatient. Butler, come in. The door opened, and Razlot entered, his face pale, raising his hand in a mechanical salute and stammering as he greeted Julian. Julian frowned in annoyance, secretly wondering why he kept running into this Razlot, while Razlot conveyed an order from the captain, requesting him to go to the royal secretary's office to report. A report? Julian smirked, showing suspicious interest. He stood up decisively. Is that so? Julian slung an arm around Razlot's shoulder with terrifying familiarity, asking him to store the pile of gemstones in the vault and telling himself he would complete the Moonlight Sword later. Julian's gaze sharpened. He knew full well that the royal secretary's office wanted to probe him and that the rumors of his memory loss had not yet subsided. Seeing Julian about to leave, Razlot hastily called him back in a panic, causing him to turn back with a "what now" expression. Razlot awkwardly asked Julian what to do with the broken gemstones and received a cold reply. Throw them away. The subordinate's face turned pale, stammering a protest because they were too precious, but still not daring to defy the order. Julian strode in with an imposing aura, entering the royal secretary's office. He secretly remarked that this place was far more luxurious than the shabby Shut-Eye's headquarters. Julian introduced himself as being from Shut-Eye's and wished to meet Sir Sidon Orby. The secretary announced that his boss was busy with a guest and asked Julian to go to the waiting room. Julian smiled and agreed meaningfully, knowing full well this was a test from the royal family. He told himself that the other guest surely held a higher status than the original Julian, which was why they were prioritized. As soon as he stepped into the waiting room, Julian realized it was equally luxurious, a place he had never had the chance to visit in the game. His gaze immediately fell upon a sword resting on the sofa. Julian picked up the sword, assessing it as a high-quality item belonging to a skilled swordsman, but wondering why it was lying carelessly here. He ran his hand along the scabbard and suddenly recognized a familiar motto. A strong body houses a strong spirit. A cold female voice echoed from behind, ordering, "Put that sword down, you lunatic." Julian flinched. He didn't even need to turn around to know the owner of this voice. It was a female knight from the prestigious Ronbell family, one of Hayden Reich's disciples. He immediately recalled that in the game, the original Julian Kryfart Plassen had personally ended her life. Memories of the bloody scene in the game resurfaced when the female knight fell beneath his blade. The blonde knight, Rinna Ronbell, appeared with an imposing aura, her hand resting on her sword hilt. Julian immediately realized she was also Hayden's disciple and could be a crucial factor in helping him conquer this game. Rinna Ronbell, the young lady of the Royal Knight family and also one of Hayden Reich's students, stood there proudly. Julian secretly assessed Rinna Ronbell, a genius swordswoman, skilled enough to one day surpass him, possessing both beauty and talent. In the game, this girl was extremely loyal to the main protagonist, Hayden Reich, and was thus immensely pampered by players. Even Rinna's wedding dress skin was a hot item, always topping the popularity rankings. But now it was different. He was Julian, not Hayden. Rinna glared, the system signaling a negative aura, hatred, as she questioned, "What do you intend to do with my master's sword?" Julian smirked, calmly replying, "Just taking a look." He began to provoke, mocking Hayden for carelessly discarding his sword. But Rinna retorted in a low voice that her master was not as careless as him. Julian continued to add fuel to the fire, reminding her that he too was once Hayden's student, making Rinna even more furious. He sneered, feigning curiosity about his old teacher, secretly thinking this was a good opportunity to test the extent of her hatred. As soon as he finished speaking, Rinna gripped her sword hilt tightly, and killing intent flared up. A crimson killing intent enveloped Rinna, the system confirming a negative aura, anger, as she roared. "What did you just say? How dare you say that?" Julian grinned widely. Just as expected, he felt the surging anger directed at him, though he secretly wanted to apologize on behalf of the old Julian. Click. A door suddenly opened, interrupting the tense confrontation. A man appeared and called, "Lady Rin, please come this way to the secretary's office." Rinna coldly turned away, tossing back a remark. "Well then, farewell, Sir Julian." She told him directly that she hoped they would never meet again. Just then, the man announced that Julian was also summoned. Rinna smirked scornfully, saying that was in the past, but not anymore. She turned and walked away, warning Julian never to mention her master's name again, leaving him standing there with complex thoughts. An imperial clerk, holding a sealed letter, stepped out and bowed to both Rin and Julian. Inside the office, the clerk asked about Julian's recent mission, confirming the rumor that he had single-handedly defeated the two-horned demon. Julian replied smugly that it was just a warm-up, but Rinna immediately interrupted, cutting straight to the main point. "Where is my master?" The imperial clerk announced. "Sir Hayden Reich left after assigning you the mission, Lady Rin, and I think Sir Julian should accompany you." Rinna immediately snapped. "The two of us? Why should I go with this traitor?" The clerk, sweating, explained that Hayden warned it might be dangerous, so someone from the Empire was needed to accompany her, and Julian happened to be present. The mission was announced. "Please investigate the capital's slums." Julian continued his villainous act, smirking. "The slums? Why should we care about that filthy corner?" Rinna glared daggers at him. The clerk stated that there were reports of demons appearing in the area, and the royal family did not want to get directly involved. That was why it was the perfect mission for both of them. The clerk gave a wry smile, as both had connections, but were not officially part of the royal family. The slums came into view, a dark place, a remnant of nations annexed by the empire, harboring the outcast. Julian's red eyes gleamed. He knew full well this was a pre-arranged play. Julian calculated. If Rinna completed this mission, her path to inheriting the title of Sword Saint would be wide open, and he couldn't refuse because he was currently the royal family's hound. With a smug smile, Julian declared, "I understand. I accept the mission." Rinna's jaw dropped in astonishment. "I refuse!" Rinna yelled, while Julian feigned helplessness. "Oh dear, I really want to refuse too, but..." The clerk delivered the final blow. "Lady Rin, your master personally requested you to take on this mission." Julian seized the opportunity, leaning in to provoke. "Are you going to defy his wishes?" Rinna was speechless, stammering wordlessly. Cornered, the blonde knight reluctantly gritted her teeth and conceded defeat. "I understand." Rinna told herself that as Hayden's disciple, she could not disobey her master's words. Julian thought to himself, "During this mission, that girl will definitely try to restrain me. But the problem is, I'm not strong enough to resist her right now. If only there was a gem that resonated with my mana." Julian suddenly noticed the moon-shaped gem on Rinny's neck glowing. Julian's eyes blazed. Blue mana surged around him as he realized the power-boosting item was right in front of him. Julian snatched Rinna's gem, startling her. "What is this gem?" Rinna replied. "That's a moonstone." Julian's mana exploded, resonating with the moonstone on Rin's neck, causing it to glow brilliantly and startling her. Rinna yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" While Julian calmly replied, "Haha, it just lit up on its own. Looks pretty cool." Julian grinned sinisterly, thinking to himself, "In just an instant, it resonated with my mana. The answer is right before my eyes. I need this gem." Some time ago, Julian, in a hooded cloak, entered a jewelry store and was warmly welcomed by the shopkeeper. Julian got straight to the point. "I'm looking for a gem that resonates with my mana. Do you have moonstones?" Leaving the shopkeeper dumbfounded. The shopkeeper explained that moonstones were rare, difficult to mine, and had no demand, so the store didn't stock them. Julian growled, radiating killing intent, making the shopkeeper turn pale with fear. "So you mean they can't be obtained?" The other man frantically realized he had misspoken. Julian softened his tone slightly, but still full of pressure. "That's good then. Can you find them for me?" The sweating shopkeeper promised to search nationwide. Back in the present, Julian still didn't have a moonstone, and thought to himself, "That girl Rinna will definitely realize my moonlight sword is incomplete." On the day of the mission, Julian provoked, "Haha, you'll soon realize the beauty of gemstones, Lady Rin." Rinna irritably turned her back and walked straight ahead. "Whatever, just follow me." But Julian called her back. "Hey Lady Rinna, you're going the wrong way." She turned back, scowling, and asked, "What?" Julian put on the air of an experienced gamer. "This slum is full of dead ends and illegal constructions. You can't just follow the map here," Rinna said scornfully. "I'd rather trust the signs than follow you." Julian just chuckled to himself, knowing that girl was about to suffer for not listening to a pro. He thought, the eastern slums. That place is the Wailing Wall for noobs. Even the game developers admitted this was a difficult map. Rinna clenched her fists, asserting firmly, "I won't fall for your cheap tricks." She pointed directly at Julian, her voice full of hatred. "I'm sure a traitor like you is deliberately setting a trap for me, the disciple of the current Sword Saint, to make me fail," she declared boldly. "But I am different from you, Julian." With blazing eyes and an explosive aura, Rinna affirmed, "I will become the next Sword Saint." Rinna Ronbell walked decisively, determined to prove herself, while Julian ambled behind, secretly thinking this task wouldn't be easy. Julian began to tease. "Are you sure this is the way? There's a reason the sign is placed here, you know." Rinna snapped back, suspecting Julian had never set foot in the slums, while he merely smirked, thinking to himself, Lee Si-hoo has thoroughly explored this map, but Julian hasn't. She questioned how he knew the way, and Julian nonchalantly gave an extremely provoking answer. "Just a hunch, I guess." Losing patience, Rinna suggested they go separately, but Julian immediately countered, "Oh come on, the royal decree states we must go together, doesn't it?" Julian delivered another critical blow. "Or are you saying Hayden Reich is more important than the Empire?" Struck a nerve, Rinna flared up, growling, "Don't you dare use that filthy mouth to utter my master's name." Julian maintained his defiant expression, retorting, "If you have any decency left." Rinna was so furious she clenched her fists, surprised at how easily she was provoked. She reassured herself, admitting inwardly, "I know Julian is stronger than me. They always compare us behind my back." The whispers haunted her. If it were him, it would be done already. If it were him, it would have been much easier. But Rinna regained her composure, her eyes burning. "I am the successor of the Holy Sword, and I will prove it through this mission." As soon as she finished speaking, she looked at the map and froze. The number 11C on a wooden sign made her unable to believe her eyes. Seeing her bewildered expression, Julian mockingly asked, "What's wrong?" Rinna stammered a denial. "Nothing." She panicked when she realized the signs 28B, 35C were completely jumbled, just as that traitor had warned. "The map is all wrong." Finally, they both returned to the correct alley, with sign 1A. Rinna held her head in helplessness, realizing she had returned to the starting point, while Julian stood beside her, laughing gleefully. A strange man with a scar on his cheek approached. Hey, little lady. Seems like you've been lost for a while, haven't you? First time here? He introduced himself as Baden, propositioning to guide Rinna if she treated him to a round, and she, in her confusion, agreed and stated her name. Scar-faced Baden recognized Rinna as the young lady of the Ronbell family, his eyes gleaming as if head struck gold. Looks like I've hit a big score this time. Julian felt something was off, while Baden quickly ushered them both along, not bothering to ask for his name. Julian mumbled the name Baden, his brain processing for a second to see if it was familiar. He concluded succinctly, probably small fry, not in the important data. As soon as they entered the bar, Baden loudly called out to the owner for a drink for everyone, making Rinna bewildered. You want to drink before guiding us? The bartender asked where they were from, and Rinna innocently answered immediately. We're from the Royal Palace. The bartender held up 3 fingers, pricing it at 30 nars per person, making Rinna's jaw drop in astonishment. Baden scoffed, teasing Rin. Prices are steep in these slums, little lady. Don't you have money? Rinna quickly waved her hand, her face calm. No, it's not that. With that, she poured out a bag of glittering gold coins, uttering a sentence that froze Baden. I'm just surprised it's so cheap. Only 30 nars? Baden gulped loudly, realizing he had just found a super rich prey, and dark intentions immediately formed in his mind. He secretly whispered to the bartender, signaling him to mix a special, potent kind into the other two's drinks to easily rob them clean. The bartender quietly took out a packet of white powder and sprinkled it evenly into the 3 beer mugs. The 3 problematic beer mugs were brought to the table, looking like the best kind in the slums. Baden flashed a sinister smile as he saw Rinna innocently pick up her beer mug, preparing to drink. Rinna had just brought the beer mug to her lips, when a hand blocked it. Julian had intervened, his face cold as he looked at the bewildered young lady. Julian shot a sharp, dagger-like glance towards the group of swindlers, his voice full of challenge. You put something in our drinks, didn't you? Baden jumped, sweat pouring out, stammering a denial. What the hell are you talking about? Julian shoved the beer mug directly into Baden's face, smirking. Then you drink it first. Julian smirked with crimson eyes, his voice full of provocation. Or do you prefer I force you? Rin still didn't understand what was happening, quickly shouting to stop him. Stop it! Julian! Hearing the name Julian, Baden and the bartender froze, realizing they had just provoked someone dangerous. The bartender grabbed Baden by the collar, his face drained of color. Hey Baden, did you just drag the royal's dog in here? Baden was drenched in sweat, but still tried to reassure his accomplices. It's fine. He confidently declared that he had a whole bunch of henchmen stationed in this tavern. His thugs, known as the elite of the slums, began to menacingly prepare for a fight. Baden pulled out a knife, straining his neck. Even I know how to fight. Crack. Julian, without a word, crushed the beer mug with mana and declared, Time's up. He flashed a truly demonic smile, growling. Wanna fight? A burly thug roared and charged to attack. Julian casually grabbed the man by the throat, lifting him up like a toy. Another tried to ambush him from the side, but it was too late. Without even looking, Julian grabbed the second man's head and slammed it straight to the ground. Rinna stood frozen, while the remaining thugs turned pale with fear, seeing Julian single-handedly take on 2. Julian held a sharp shard of the beer mug to Baden's throat. I don't want to cause any more commotion in these slums. Baden's face turned white, and he gulped loudly as the glass blade pressed against his Adam's apple. Julian glanced around the bar. Ah, so everyone here is your man, huh? He leaned close to Baden's ear, his voice full of threat. Why did you interrupt me earlier? Tell your friends to back off. Julian finished with a deadly smile. Otherwise, they'll end up like that beer mug. Baden trembled uncontrollably, his face drained of color before Julian's killing intent. Seeing their boss with a knife at his throat, the subordinates panicked but dared not utter a sound. Baden screamed in terror at his companions, telling them to retreat immediately at Julian's command. A burly thug held back a subordinate, knowing that charging in now would only mean death. Julian smirked, praised Baden for being obedient, then set a condition. Answer a few of my questions, and I will help you surrender safely. Baden was utterly stunned, stammering in reply. Surrender? Julian coldly presented an ultimatum. I advise you to surrender, rather than losing your life here. With a devilish smile, Julian asked softly, So, Mr. Baden, what do you choose? The man immediately surrendered. I will surrender. Baden was utterly defeated, unconsciously repeating, I will surrender, as Julian stood watching. On the way, Rinna thought to herself, I knew this guy who offered to guide us was trouble, but I never expected him to be involved with an entire criminal organization. Julian triumphantly held up the information he had just extracted, deeming the trip not in vain. I thought he was just a small fry, but I managed to dig up something useful. Rinna blamed herself for being too naive, but Julian calmly consoled her. It's only natural. How could a young lady raised in luxury know about these dirty tricks? Rinna bit her lip, showing a lack of confidence, which made Julian tease her. Oh, have you lost all your fighting spirit? How could you possibly know that? Rinna suddenly asked directly. How did you know he put something in our drinks? Julian smiled meaningfully. Do you truly want to know? Rinna replied firmly without hesitation. Yes, please tell me. Julian secretly admired Rinna, willing to learn from the one she hates most, prioritizing growth over pride. She's truly genuine. Even so, the intense killing intent radiating from her still made Julian break out in a cold sweat. Of course. If only she didn't hate me so much. It would be so much better. Julian began to explain. Mana gathered in his hand, glowing blue. I sensed the killing intent in the drinks even before entering the establishment. By using mana detection, the scene flashed back to before they entered the establishment, where Julian had secretly activated his ability. His mana flow swept through the entire establishment, detecting the hostility radiating from the thugs, which made Rinna freeze as she realized her master's skill level. Julian quipped that his skill worked like a bat's echolocation, while Rinna looked bewildered, not understanding anything. He explained that this was originally a mage's technique, but because Julian's mana was incredibly vast, detection became incredibly easy. Renee still had questions, asking why Julian had inquired about the slum situation from the guide Baden instead of directly asking about the demons. A flashback showed the scene of Julian interrogating Baden about the lives of the residents there. Julian confirmed it, which made Rinna even more confused, as she thought their mission was to investigate demons, not to do social work. Julian sneered, asking Rinna in return if she knew about demonification, while a glowing red demonic silhouette appeared behind him. Rinna recalled basic knowledge. It's when the remnants of demon god Barbatos parasitize living beings other than humans. A demon with sharp horns and claws growled, blood dripping, illustrating her explanation. Julian pointed out the anomaly. This slum was surrounded by resonance stones, a type of firewall against demon infiltration, and there were no animals or forests nearby. Rinna turned pale, stammering in horror as she realized the terrifying logic. Could it be that the remaining hosts are humans? Julian smirked, thinking to himself that this was exactly what happened in the game, and affirmed confidently, "That's right. I'm certain that human demonification is occurring here." Rinna clutched her head, feeling like an idiot for having mistakenly believed that insane logic, but Julian coldly raised 3 fingers. He declared that was the number of houses that had bought fever medicine in the past week, and fever was one of the first symptoms of demonification. Then proposed a deal. "If I'm wrong, you can take command." Rinna froze, her mind torn between believing an absurd hypothesis and believing the one she hated. Night fell over the slum, and the cawing of crows signaled that a tense investigation was about to begin. After checking 2 houses, Rinna sighed in relief, happily saying there was only 1 house left, which made Julian tease her. "You look happy." Rin still tried to appear optimistic. "Isn't it good news that there are no signs of human demonification?" While Julian only replied meaningfully. They approached the last house, and Rin secretly prayed that Julian's judgment was wrong. Julian raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door. The door creaked open, and an old man with glowing red eyes full of malevolence growled from the darkness. "Who is it?" Julian smirked, thinking to himself that the old man wasn't fully demonified yet, but his negation aura told him the old man was hiding something. He sniffed lightly, recognizing a familiar scent, exactly like the scent from the Resonance Stone mission. The image of demon blood flashed in Julian's mind, and he confirmed confidently. The smell of demon blood. Julian feigned politeness, introducing himself as Julian Criffhart from Shut Eyes, which made the old man freeze. The old man turned pale, sweat poured down, and he trembled upon hearing the names Julian and Shut Eyes. In a panic, the old man desperately tried to slam the door shut, yelling, Get out of my house." A hand gently blocked the closing door, stopping all the old man's efforts. Bang. Julian pushed the door wide open, sending the poor old man flying into the house, to Rinna's astonishment. Julian grabbed the old man by the collar, coldly saying, "Thank you for your cooperation," while Rinna frantically asked what was happening. Ignoring Rinna, Julian stepped inside, uttering a judgment. "You are too naive, Miss Rinna." Julian's eyes flashed with a deadly red light, and he warned that such naivety would one day kill her. Julian walked straight into the house, ignoring Rinna outside, who was yelling that they were there to investigate, not to break in. From the darkness, Julian replied curtly, "The royal family only cares about results, Miss Rinna." He glanced at the dining table and remarked, "I see you're having a meal. According to the data, you live with your son." Julian pointed to 3 bowls of soup on the table, in a sarcastic tone. "Yet, you've prepared a meal for 3 people." Cornered, the old man stammered in denial. "I have guests." Julian calmly stirred the bowl of soup with a spoon, sensing something unusual. He smirked. "This soup is strangely thick. I guess fever medicine wasn't the only thing they brought back." Julian turned around. His gaze, sharp as a dagger, pierced the old man. "You gave your guests soup with sleeping medicine, then used them as food for the demon behind that door, didn't you?" Rinna froze, trembling in disbelief at the truth that had just been revealed. Exposed, the old man wailed in despair, urging his son to flee immediately. He frantically rushed to the door, trembling as he tried to unlatch the lock. As he ran, he loudly shouted, urging his son to escape quickly. He called out, "Son?" in despair, but his body began to grotesquely deform amidst the crimson demonic energy. A roar tore through the air. The old man had completely transformed into a hideous demon right before Julian and Rinna. The demon, with its blazing red eyes and jagged teeth, let out a savage roar. Rinna screamed in horror. A demon! Unable to believe that a human could transform into such a thing. Without hesitation, she drew her sword, declaring resolutely, "We must defeat it first." Rinna charged with a powerful slash, her sword flashing as it aimed directly at the demon. Clang! Her attack was effortlessly blocked by the demon with just 1 arm. The incredibly strong recoil force sent both of them flying, and the surrounding earth and rocks shattered. Julian grabbed Rinna's arm, stopping her, and muttered as he looked at her sword, "Is this Rinna Ronbell's sword before her awakening?" He now understood why she had asked about mana. This situation was clearly beyond her current skill level. Rinna pushed Julian's hand away, stubbornly declaring, "I don't need help." Julian ignored her, took off his cloak, and stepped forward, blue mana erupting around him. "What are you saying? This is our job." He turned to look at her with confidence, declaring that the disciple of a sword saint could not be allowed to get hurt. Julian's eyes flashed red. He secretly thought he didn't want to get involved in silly rumors. But the problem was that the Moonlight Sword was still incomplete. Facing the demon, he was determined to eradicate it, even if it made Rinna suspect him even more. The system activated, and Julian used his "is less than insight is greater than skill" to analyze all of the enemy's weaknesses. Julian activated his skill. His "is less than insight is greater than" eye glowing brightly, scanning all of the demon's weaknesses. A surge of blue energy shot straight into the demon, causing its body to glitch like a broken TV signal. The demon froze, its entire body enveloped by Julian's skill effect. Julian smirked, secretly thinking the attack had hit its mark and now was Rinna's chance to finish it. But the demon recovered in an instant, swinging its arm to attack Rin while she was still stunned. Julian angrily shouted at Rinna to buy him time for another attack. As the demon had recovered too quickly, Rinna gritted her teeth in response, straining to fend off the demon's attack. Looking quite desperate, she decided to take a risk, putting all her strength into a punch straight at the demon's face to create an opening. A mighty punch landed on the demon's jaw. Though not powerful, it was enough to make it stagger. The demon clutched its head, dazed and temporarily disoriented after the unexpected punch. Julian observed, realizing the demon had lost its bearings. This was the golden opportunity. He concentrated all his mana into his sword, preparing to unleash a single finishing blow. Suddenly, the demon located Rinna and swung a colossal slap towards her. Rinna coughed up blood, sent flying by the demon's overwhelming power. The demon seized Rinna. She realized it had found her by scent, and bitterly admitted she had been too careless. She was completely helpless, unable to buy Julian any more time. Her sword fell from her hand, and Rinna desperately thought she was too ashamed to face her master again. The demon opened its maw full of sharp teeth, preparing to devour the Nidus. Julian growled, his face darkening as he shouted Rinny's name. Rin, held tight by the demon, turned back in surprise upon hearing Julian call her name. Not understanding what he intended to do, Julian praised Rin for buying time well, while simultaneously activating his "is less than insight, is greater than skill." His eye scanned once, analyzing the monster's entire structure. The demon flinched, seemingly sensing someone scrutinizing it. The analysis panel appeared, 100% complete. The critical weakness had been exposed. Julian smirked, his eyes flashing with a deadly glint. Found it. In a flash, he was behind the demon, one hand piercing straight through its chest with no difficulty. The monster's hand went limp, and Rinna fell freely from its death grip. The grip that had held her tight finally became completely powerless. The demon was dying. Rinna landed safely, astonished to see the old man's body emerge from the disintegrating demon. The demon collapsed, Julian standing coldly like a god of death, ending the battle. He pulled his hand out, holding the monster's still beating heart. The colossal corpse lay motionless on the floor. The battle ended in an instant. Rinna gaped, unable to believe he had torn apart the demon without even needing the moonlight sword. Julian gave an arrogant half smirk, enjoying her shocked expression. He coolly remarked, "Humph. It seems it wasn't even worth drawing my moonlight sword for," while internally worrying if he was overacting. The scene shifted. Both had arrived at the Imperial Palace, and Rinna informed Julian. Julian secretly thought, another mission neatly resolved. He let out a sigh of relief. It seemed this Nidus didn't suspect much about his true identity. Julian suddenly turned to Rinna and told her, "You can take all the credit for this mission." Rin froze, her face contorted in anger, because she clearly hadn't done a single thing. Julian began to mock, feigning sympathy that a proud Rinna had to let him save her life. He added a sarcastic remark that she truly couldn't do anything against the demon, making Rinna furious. Rinna didn't bother to hide her hatred, declaring bluntly, "Humph, I don't like you." Julian merely sneered, looking amused. "So now you don't even bother to hide it anymore?" Rinna began to lecture, quoting her master about how great power comes with great responsibility. She brought up old matters, criticizing Julian for using his power against innocent civilians. Rinna concluded with an intense statement, saying she now understood why her master had abandoned someone so unrestrained like him. Julian merely smirked cunningly. He retorted sharply, calling restraint the weapon of cowards. Rin, provoked, snapped back. "Are you calling my master a coward?" Julian delivered a villainous philosophical statement, saying he wasn't the kind of pure-blooded noble who lived their entire life within strict rules. He continued his speech, telling her to accept that there were people like him in this world. Rinna was utterly speechless, so shocked that she had to wonder what kind of person this man truly was. Julian waved goodbye, not forgetting to thank Rinna for giving him all the credit. Left alone, Rinna could only mutter in helplessness, completely unable to comprehend Julian's character. In her mind, the thought still lingered that restraint was a virtue for all knights, not just nobles. A luxurious carriage approached, and a middle-aged man poked his head out, calling, "It's Uncle Ergen." The man named Ergen saw that Rinny looked tired, and invited her to ride in his carriage. The carriage rolled away, departing from the Imperial Palace. Inside the carriage, Ergen inquired about her mission, and was curious about the person who had accompanied her. Rinna replied that it was Julian of Shut Eyes. Ergen sneered, revealing that the Elders Association was alarmed by Julian's recent actions, with rumors even suggesting he was challenging the entire council through the imperial court. Ergen showed disdain, finding it unbelievable that a noble would dare to defy the Elders Association like that, while Rinna pondered deeply. Rinna suddenly recalled Julian's words, that he wasn't a pure-blooded noble, and thus didn't need to live his entire life within strict rules. She finally realized, understanding the intention behind Julian's defiant attitude and arrogant actions. Ergen continued to lecture, advising Rinna to stay away from Julian because he was a dangerous individual, and sarcastically added that his power was probably just an exaggerated rumor. Rinna immediately dismissed her uncle's opinion. That's not right, she asserted firmly, despite her annoyance, that she had to admit one truth. He is very strong. Rinna clenched her fist in her iron gauntlet, gritting her teeth in acknowledgement of Julian's overwhelming power. At the Shut Eyes headquarters, a magnificent and splendid building appeared under the night sky. Inside, as Julian stepped into the room, Captain Odwin was already seated at her desk and immediately questioned him. Odwin growled, her face darkening with anger. Julian, what the hell have you been doing? Julian casually chuckled, feigning ignorance as he asked, what do you mean? Which only made Captain Odwin even more enraged. Odwin began listing a series of troubles. Is the bartender suing us for property damage? Or did the slum dwellers report us for intimidation? Julian smirked triumphantly, thinking to himself that he might have gotten too immersed in the villainous role of Julian to remember all the bad things he had done. He fell silent for a moment, his eyes flashing with calculation. Odwin slammed the table, announcing the main news. A criminal named Baden, whom Shut Eyes was pursuing, had surrendered himself. She exclaimed, recounting that when asked for the reason, the criminal trembled violently and could only utter Julian's name, then questioned if his mission was to investigate demons or to cause trouble. Julian casually waved his hand, acting as if he knew nothing. He must be regretting his sins. I don't know why he mentioned my name. Odwin didn't believe him, throwing a piece of paper at him. Don't make me laugh. Take your mission reward and get out of my sight. Upon hearing mission reward, Julian's eyes lit up, and he took the paper with a look of utmost satisfaction. Julian was complaining about being broke when the butler announced a letter from the jewelry store. Julian's eyes gleamed as he calculated whether this amount would be enough to buy the Moonlight Stone. Opening the letter, he was stunned to see the number. 11,000 nars. Julian mentally calculated, converting nars to dollars, and was utterly shocked to realize he had just received a salary equivalent to $11,000. He couldn't believe he had earned so much money from just 2 missions, especially since Rinna had given him all the credit. Captain Odwin unexpectedly chimed in with a taunt, saying that amount was actually less than usual because he had been on leave for too long. Julian froze, secretly cursing that this captain was truly an outsider, knowing nothing about finances. Scrutinizing the payslip more closely, he discovered deductions for registration fees and maintenance costs, telling himself it must be because the old Julian liked collecting art. His eyes widened when he saw a series of unreasonable installment payments for all sorts of expensive jewelry and gemstones. He was utterly dumbfounded when his actual salary after all deductions was a mere 900 nars. Julian gritted his teeth, realizing that it wasn't Odwin who was financially clueless, but the original Julian, who was a true spendthrift. The situation was critical. He needed a huge sum of money to buy the Moonlight Stone. But the previous owner had burned through everything, leaving not a penny. Julian turned to Odwin, asking seriously, "Are there any other missions?" Odwin was visibly surprised. This was the first time she had seen him actively ask for work, and she immediately guessed. "You need more money?" She flatly refused, saying there were no new missions, and didn't forget to rub salt in the wound. "I told you not to waste money on useless things, but you didn't listen." Julian was so bitter he wanted to scream that he hadn't bought those things, but still had to suppress his anger and reply, "I understand." Odwin smirked, dropping a deadly hint. "If you sell those items to an art gallery, you could buy an entire castle." A crazy idea flashed in Julian's mind. He sprang to his feet, his eyes sharp. "That's it." Julian grinned like a true villain, finalizing his plan. "I just need to sell all of them." After Julian left, Captain Odwin sat frozen at her desk, her mind unable to process. She muttered with a scowl, unable to believe his 180-degree change. He's become too strange. In a dark room, 2 members of the Elders' Council were holding a secret discussion. Elder Ergen reported in a panicked tone, "That demon has defeated a demon without using the Moonlight Sword. He's too dangerous." The other man, Aiden, merely sneered contemptuously and challenged, "Is that so?" Seeing his subordinate arrive, Aiden interrupted the meeting. "I have matters to attend to with my subordinate." He coldly turned his back and left, leaving Ergen still fretting with worry. Alone in his office, Aiden mused. It was clear the elders were still deeply resentful of Julian. He recalled the report of Julian's latest feat, a wicked smile appearing. "Defeated a demon without using the Moonlight Sword, huh?" His subordinate stood at the door and confirmed. "Yes, sir." Aiden broke into a cold sweat, admitting Julian's power had far exceeded expectations. Truly a monster. The subordinate asked if other plans needed to be executed. Aiden pointed forward, his eyes glinting with greed. "Go ahead. I will make that monster my own." The scene shifts to the ED Cosmos Art Gallery, where the upper class was gathered. Julian appeared, his overwhelming aura making a boy accompanying him tremble and greet him in fear. A man named Pierso, the gallery's appraisal expert, rushed to shake Julian's hand, looking extremely honored. Pierso, while leading the way, was drenched in sweat. The pressure of working with an infamous figure like Julian was immense. The appraiser pointed to an object covered with a white cloth. This must be the painting to be appraised. Julian confirmed and decisively pulled off the cloth. A landscape painting of a golden wheat field under dazzling sunlight appeared, making Pierso exclaim in astonishment. The appraiser Pierso examined the painting through a magnifying glass, muttering that the brushwork was almost that of Corsius Vincent. Julian leaned in from behind, his voice icy as he repeated, "Almost?" The appraiser flinched, sweat pouring out. Julian's eyes flashed with a deadly red glint, clearly indicating some ulterior motive. Pierso recoiled in panic, screaming in his mind, "Julian, is your aesthetic sense flawed?" Julian thought to himself, "Should I have brought something else? I thought the painting displayed at the entrance was expensive." Pierso thought he had to accept it, otherwise Julian's honor would be damaged for displaying a fake painting, so he decided to go big. "I've never seen such an exquisite fake," he declared loudly. "Therefore, I want to buy this painting." Ignoring Julian's question of whether he was sure, given it was a fake, Pierso still settled on a price of 1,000 nars, considering it payment for the painting's good preservation. Julian breathed a sigh of relief. Money was flowing in. 1,000 nars was more than enough to buy all the moonlight stones. Pierso went to fetch the contract, telling Julian to feel free to look around the gallery. Just as he turned away, a voice echoed from behind. "Are you sure you want to do that, sir?" Eileen Donatienne appeared with an air of confidence, asserting firmly, "It's genuine." Julian and Pierso were both utterly shocked, not understanding what was happening. Eileen explained she came because her cousin's work was on display, then pointed directly at the painting. Her sharp eyes had spotted the problem, making both men freeze. She pointed to the bottom corner of the painting and asserted, "This is definitely Corsius's signature." The entire gallery buzzed with excitement. The gossiping nobles couldn't believe this reversal. Pierso's face went ashen, stammering in disbelief that he had misidentified a work of this caliber. Julian spun around, his eyes blazing with murderous intent, growling, "So, you were planning to deceive me, Sir Pierso?" The appraiser was scared out of his wits, collapsing to the floor amidst the chilling purple aura of killing intent, hastily begging, I'm sorry." Julian emanated a chilling purple aura of killing intent, pointing his hand directly at the appraiser. Eileen hastily grabbed Julian's arm, her voice panicked. "Julian, please stop." She defended the appraiser. "Even appraisers make mistakes sometimes. Everyone makes errors." Julian thought to himself, "I almost lost control and eliminated this guy out of sheer annoyance." Eileen grumbled, thinking Julian was deliberately making her look bad by intervening, and he merely hummed in acknowledgement. Julian smirked slyly, his eyes glowing red. "So, will the price change?" The appraiser, Pierso's face turned pale, sweat pouring off him like rain. The appraiser kowtowed in apology, his voice trembling. I'm sorry." Pierso lay flattened on the floor, desperately admitting, "If it's genuine, my gallery wouldn't even have a chance to buy it." Julian could only offer a wry smile at the incompetence of the pathetic appraiser. He placed a hand on Pierso's shoulder, making the man flinch. Julian leaned down, his voice full of menace. "Sometimes uselessness harms oneself. But this is truly troublesome. What should I do with this painting now?" Suddenly, Julian helped Pierso up with a friendly smile. "I will help you." Eileen crossed her arms, sighing helplessly at Julian's sudden change of demeanor, while Pierso remained bewildered. She revealed, "I know someone who specializes in collecting all of Corsius's works." Julian showed obvious interest in this valuable information. He smiled smugly, but still laid down a counter condition. But in return, Eileen raised 2 fingers, decisively presenting her 2 conditions. The first condition was not to punish the appraiser, and Julian smiled, agreeing instantly. Inside, Julian's gamer soul gloated, as he hadn't intended to do anything to that man anyway. Eileen, her face slightly flushed, covered her mouth with a fan and stated her second condition, "And help me with something. I need your assistance." Julian smirked confidently, accepting the favorable deal. "Of course, I'm free anyway." Both shook hands decisively, sealing the agreement. Eileen glared at Julian, warning him not to misunderstand her as being kind. Julian flatly declared that this was to repay her for saving him in Julin, as he always settled his debts, then directly asked, "So, what do you need my help with?" In a pitch-dark academy corridor, a fully armored guard patrolled with a flickering lantern. The guard broke out in a cold sweat, his face pale as he fearfully looked around, as if something was lurking. He frantically stumbled backward, nearly falling over as he sensed imminent danger. Countless glowing red eyes in the darkness surrounded the guard, making him scream in terror. Julian recounted the incident, while Eileen remained skeptical, believing the ghost stories were just pranks by idle students. In the Veil Academy corridor, Eileen explained that the professors also dismissed the matter, treating it as a trivial prank, but she asserted that the situation was escalating. Many people heard strange noises at midnight, and the number of attacked guards was increasing. Julian looked thoughtful, wondering what kind of monster, if not a ghost, could cause trouble in the academy. Eileen's eyes sharpened as she delivered her verdict. "I believe it's a demon." Julian's surprise was evident, and Eileen explained that the academy was originally strictly protected from demons. She hypothesized that the demons had snuck in while the resonance stone was deactivated, and since fewer people dared to be guards, she had intended to handle it herself. Julian immediately saw through her. "But it wasn't simple, so you had to ask someone else for help, didn't you?" A strange man with a smug smile appeared, introducing himself as Hardy Godfrey, a professor at Veil Academy. The professor taunted Eileen, asking why she didn't greet him upon seeing him, and even dragged a busy person like Julian into solving the problem. Eileen snapped back, declaring that she only wanted to ensure the student's safety, and Julian was a genuine demon-slaying expert. Professor Hardy mocked Eileen, sarcastically remarking that her status as a branch family member meant she had to try even harder. Eileen retorted sharply, subtly reminding the professor about his recent essay and advising him to focus on his expertise instead of provoking others. Hardy, enraged, strained his neck and cursed the branch family members for not knowing their place. Eileen, furious, growled, asking what he had just said. Julian suddenly appeared behind Eileen, his hand already on his sword hilt, radiating intense killing intent. Eileen blushed in confusion, wondering if Julian had stepped forward for her or because the man dared to insult a branch family, while Hardy turned pale with fear. Without another word, Julian swung his sword, his eyes blazing crimson as the professor screamed in terror. Eileen squeezed her eyes shut, expecting a bloodbath to unfold. Hardy clutched his head in fear, but realized he was unharmed. Only a button on his shirt had been sliced off. Swish. A clean slash tore through the wall behind him, revealing something crimson within. The wall crumbled, exposing a writhing, screaming nest of demons. They were hiding right inside the wall. Julian glanced at them, his expression utterly cold as if he had known everything all along. He charged into the midst of the demon horde, purple mana and red evil energy erupting everywhere. Julian smirked with satisfaction amidst the demon's screams. A demon clung tightly to Hardy's back, making him scream for help in despair. The demon opened its maw and bit the professor's nape. More glowing red skull demons continued to pour out from the wall. Julian sneered, delivering a deeply sarcastic remark. These demons don't care if you're from the main family or a branch. Julian pointed his sword, setting a condition for the weeping noble. If you want to live, why don't you beg a branch family noble like me to save you? Julian coldly plunged his sword into the floor right in front of the crawling professor, remarking casually, no need to be so tense. Eileen narrowed her eyes, realizing something was wrong. She frantically pointed behind Julian, stammering, They're over there. The skull demons began to crawl and gather, forming a dark, ominous mass. They merged, purple and red evil energy erupting violently, forming a new entity. The professor and Eileen turned pale with fear, backing away from the horrifying sight. A colossal rat demon, crystallized from hundreds of smaller demons, roared aloud. Julian merely smirked, his sword glowing brightly. So this is your true form, is it? He thought scornfully to himself. A bunch of small fry gathering together to struggle in despair. Suddenly, Professor Hardy Godfrey burst into maniacal laughter, his eyes flashing red just like the demons. The amalgamated rat demon growled, its jagged teeth ready to tear everything apart. It charged straight at Julian, but he was already in a ready stance, prepared for battle. Clang! Julian's sword blocked the monster's attack. Eileen was no slouch either. She cast a spell, creating a 5-pointed magic star to clear out the smaller demons. She realized the main monster was shrinking, as the demons that formed it were destroyed. Seeing the rat demon attempt to escape, Julian hurled his sword straight at it. The sword pinned the remaining part of the demon firmly to the floor. Julian unleashed a massive wave of blue energy, sweeping away the monster's remnants. Meanwhile, Eileen had managed to erect a yellow hexagonal barrier to protect herself and the professor. The remnants of the rat demons were swept away by Julian's energy wave, turning to dust. Eileen lowered her hand, ending her spell as the battle concluded. She turned to question him directly. How do you know where the demons are? Julian smirked, casually replying, It's a secret, while secretly thinking he couldn't explain the game system to her. Eileen seemed to misunderstand, thinking he was defending her. I thought you always looked down on the branch families, but it seems you're still one of us, aren't you? Julian continued to play the innocent role with a cunning expression. Is that so? Eileen angrily brought up the past. Do you really not remember? You called me a Donasian half-breed. She was lost in thought, comparing the cold, career-focused Julian of the past with his current self, finding him somewhat similar to his academy days. Julian realized his harsh words from the past had truly affected her, while Eileen was still sulking. Eileen admitted that while no one dared to look down on Julian, for her, being scorned for being from a branch family was an everyday occurrence. Julian delivered a blunt statement, shattering the logic of lineage discrimination. Whether you're from a branch family or not, your blood is still red. He flashed a charming smile, smoothly admitting, What I said before was wrong. This unexpected attack made Eileen blush, completely taken aback. She was utterly flustered, unable to believe her ears. Did Julian just apologize to me? Turning away to hide her embarrassment, she mumbled a hesitant thank you. Julian immediately changed his tune, teasing. Thank me for what? For doing all the heavy lifting for you? He concluded his own joke with smug satisfaction. Of course. Eileen finally regained her composure, sighing in relief, and both acknowledged the mission was complete. His smile vanished. Julian returned to a serious expression, preparing for the next act. Now, after clearing out the demons, Eileen smirked, announcing she would introduce the painting's buyer. In a cluttered room, Julian and an old man were appraising the painting. The old man went wild with joy, exclaiming that he couldn't believe his eyes seeing this masterpiece. Julian leisurely sipped his tea, asking for the old man's thoughts on Red Grapefield, Corsia's final work. The old man, none other than Veal Academy's vice principal Alram Chorny, began analyzing the details in the painting. While Alram was engrossed in the scene of crows soaring, Julian secretly thought the painting looked rather ordinary. The painting depicted roads leading nowhere, a scene full of dead ends. Julian began his masterful bluff, explaining the artist's imagination. He declared that the painting was lonely because it contained the sorrow the artist wished to convey to his sibling. The artist had also included a letter, and Julian knew the very first words within it. Vice Principal Alrum's jaw dropped, not expecting the painting to have such a profound backstory. Julian merely nodded, feigning understanding, and continued to enjoy his tea. Vice Principal Alrum suddenly emitted an orange aura, his gaze turning sharp. Julian immediately recognized it as the color of negation. The system signaled color of negation, suspicion, and Julian immediately understood he was being scrutinized. Maintaining his calm expression, Julian asked directly, "Is there something wrong with the painting?" He ruled out the possibility of a fake painting, as Eileen's and Alrum's initial reactions had proven it to be genuine. Julian broke into a cold sweat, his mind racing. Then what on earth is this old man suspecting about me? Without hesitation, Julian reached out and snatched the painting, preparing to reveal his hand. Julian maintained a poker face as Vice Principal Alrum called his name. Alrum questioned him directly, asserting that Julian knew nothing about the painting and was only there to make a quick profit. The old vice principal declared he only wished to buy paintings from those who truly understood their value, making Julian realize he was being tested. Julian smirked, thinking that if he sold it as is, he'd be pressured on the price. It was time to put on a show. He began his masterful bluff, bringing up the information that this was the artist Corsius's final work. Julian emphasized that the painting's value lay in its direct connection to the artist's death, drawing Alrum's attention. Vice Principal Alrum let out a profound chuckle. The old man nodded, admitting Julian was right, that Corsius had drawn his last breath at the very location depicted in the painting, and offered an apology for his earlier suspicion. Julian nonchalantly brushed it off and suggested discussing the price, secretly sighing in relief at his successful deception. Alrum held up 4 fingers, naming his price for the painting. Julian mentally calculated 400,000 nars, wondering if he should haggle further, and spoke as if he deeply understood the artwork's value. Alrum cleared his throat, stating that he believed Julian could discern its true value. Julian, still playing the role of a shrewd merchant, confidently raised the price by another 100,000 nars. 500,000 nars, Julian concluded, believing this amount was more than enough. Julian froze, his mind reprocessing the information. 500,000 nars? Wasn't it supposed to be in tens of thousands? He realized he had stumbled upon a gold mine when converting it to a familiar currency, the sum reaching hundreds of millions of won. Seeing Julian stunned, Alrum called out, startling him awake from his daze. Julian immediately regained his cool demeanor, smirked, and sealed the deal. "I believe we have an agreement." In Eileen's thoughts, she silently apologized for ever doubting Julian's discerning eye. The scene shifted to Eileen, who was knocking on a door with a serious expression. "Vice Principal Alrum, did you call for me?" Vice Principal Alrum invited Eileen to sit, beginning their meeting in the room where the newly acquired painting hung. Alrum went straight to the matter concerning the incident in the old hall, and Eileen confirmed she had found a clue. The vice principal sighed in relief, magically poured tea, and expressed joy at having worried needlessly. Alrum inquired if Eileen had encountered any trouble during her investigation. Eileen smirked inwardly, recalling Julian's spectacular deception, and replied nonchalantly, "Nothing significant." The vice principal looked at his reflection in the teacup, thanking Eileen for handling the matter. A mysterious voice echoed in a dark room, demanding secrecy and revealing the Dawn Society as the mastermind behind the incident. Eileen appeared surprised, wondering why an organization like the Dawn Society would target the Academy. The mysterious voice explained that they had exploited the chaos caused by the resonance stones to act. Eileen frowned, realizing that the decision to keep this matter hidden from the students to prevent panic was entirely correct. She gripped her teacup tightly, her mind still analyzing the tense situation. Images of a demonic symbol and cloaked figures appeared as Eileen pondered the Dawn Society's objective. Alrum reassured Eileen, asserting that security had been tightened to protect the students. He also mentioned that Eileen getting Julian involved was a wise move. Upon hearing Julian's name, Eileen showed a hint of embarrassment. Alrum curiously asked if she had met Julian yet, taking the opportunity to boast that thanks to him, he now owned a rare painting. Eileen replied that she had intended to thank him, but Julian had already left, a knowing smile on her face. Alrum confirmed that Julian had slipped away right after receiving the money, his silhouette striding confidently down the corridor. The vice principal casually remarked, "I heard he plans to use the money to buy moonstones in bulk," causing Eileen to choke on her tea. Eileen sprang up in a panic, shouting, "Moonstones?" Then quickly excused herself and rushed off, claiming urgent business. Vice Principal Alrum sat alone, sipping his tea and muttering, "Everyone must be busy." Meanwhile, Eileen frantically ran to a jewelry shop, hastily apologizing for the disturbance. She questioned the shopkeeper with a panicked expression. "But you said there was still enough." The jeweler explained tearfully, "Miss, Sir Julian bought more than we anticipated." Eileen slammed the counter, urgently asking when new stock would arrive, only to be told it would be a very long wait. She clutched her head in despair, wailing, "No way. I need them for my graduation thesis." Eileen completely collapsed, sitting on the floor in a tantrum and screaming Julia N, leaving the shopkeeper to watch helplessly. Elsewhere, Julian wore a smug smile, beginning his plan. "You said." A burly blacksmith held a shattered moonstone, asking incredulously, "You want me to forge a sword with this?" At the Twilight Flame Forge, Julian stood with his arms crossed, confirming firmly, yes. With a cunning smile and a flash of red in his eyes, Julian looked at the pile of moonstones and placed his order. Can you forge me a sword that looks like it's condensed moonlight? The blacksmith roared. That's not a sword, that's a piece of decorative junk. The pride of a master blacksmith would not allow him to create such a worthless item. Julian maintained his mocking smile, emphasizing, I'm asking you to make it for practical combat use. Slam! The blacksmith pounded his hand on the table, dismissing it outright. No, that's just a luxury item. He pointed at Julian's crude design and cursed him directly. You dare bring me a blueprint that can't even be called a weapon. The two faced each other tensely, the blacksmith warning. If you want luxury items crafted, you've come to the wrong place. He proudly declared that the Twilight Flame Forge only forged combat weapons for knights. He boasted proudly. We only create masterpieces like Sir Reich's sword, the very sword you admire. Julian calmly laid his cards on the table, calling the old man by name. I want to engrave mana channels into the sword, Ruger Orland. But the blacksmith dismissed it, deeming using gemstones for a sword a joke because it would be too weak. Julian silently pondered, while a young female blacksmith hesitantly spoke. Sir Julian, I apologize, but... The girl explained that they stake the honor of their forge on every weapon they create, while the blacksmith Ruger Orland behind her still glared at Julian with fiery eyes. An illustration showed a sword bearing their emblem snapped in half, emphasizing that if their creations were flawed, their reputation would also vanish. The female blacksmith affirmed, Our forge's reputation will turn to dust. Julian smirked, thinking to himself that this was the very place that forged Hayden Reich's legendary sword, then decided to lay his cards on the table. In that case, he nonchalantly replied, I understand, leaving both blacksmiths dumbfounded. Then Julian scoffed defiantly. Then I will ensure it doesn't break easily. Ruger Orland's eyes widened, and he growled. Huh, do you think that's possible? Julian uttered an arrogant remark, his gaze sharp. Yes, because I am Julian. If you don't believe me, just test my skill. True to his word, Julian grabbed a heavy pouch. He tossed the bag of deposit money onto the table, ordering. First, just forge the sword. Both Ruger and the female blacksmith were speechless at the deposit bag, which contained even more than the standard cost. Julian leaned close to Ruger's face, growling. If it breaks during the test, I won't demand my money or gems back. The blacksmith broke into a cold sweat at this insane confidence. Cornered, Ruger Orland gritted his teeth and accepted the wager. All right. If the sword breaks during the test, consider this contract void. A few days later, a sword made entirely of gemstones, emitting an enchanting blue light, was completed and handed to Julian. Ruger Orland, looking haggard, recounted that their best team of blacksmiths had to toil day and night, failing countless times, to produce this item. Julian took the sword, his face utterly satisfied, ignoring the skeptical question. Can this truly be used as a weapon, Sir Julian? A system window appeared, announcing perfect sword technique, activated. As Julian prepared his stance, asserting confidently, Of course, shall we begin the test? The sky was clear blue, signaling a perfect day for testing the item. Outside, a crowd had gathered to witness the spectacle, but Julian merely looked up at the sky, not bothering to pay them any mind. The female blacksmith anxiously asked if the crowd needed to be dispersed, but Julian coldly dismissed it. No. Let them watch. Ruger Orland patted the armor, calling out to Julian. Here's the test item, sir. The old blacksmith scoffed, confidently showing off the armor, specially prepared for this test. The armor emitted a magical glow, clearly not an ordinary type, drawing the attention of the onlookers. Ruger challenged him directly. It's a 1 centimeter thick block of steel. Now, try to cut it. Julian chuckled with delight at the old blacksmith's grand gesture, the gemstone sword in his hand beginning to glow. Exactly. What fun is there in a weak opponent? Julian declared, as blue mana violently erupted around him. The crowd murmured, and Ruger Orland muttered, It must be what the rumors spoke of. The onlookers remained skeptical, believing that the fragile moonlight sword could not withstand such an earth-shattering impact. Julian felt a completely new surge of power, a path that had formed within the sword. He closed his eyes, focusing all his spirit and mana into the impending attack. Whoosh! With a single slash, the toughest steel armor exploded into 100 fragments like fireworks. Ruger Orland and the female blacksmith gaped, their eyes wide with shock, stammering, No. No way. Julian stood amidst the mana storm, explaining the overwhelming mechanism. The sword is channeling, binding, and maintaining a continuous mana vortex. He smirked with satisfaction. This is the true feeling of a genuine moonlight sword. The female blacksmith froze, realizing that all the forge's efforts had been rendered meaningless, and her opponent hadn't even needed to exert his full strength. Another blacksmith slumped down, looking at the pile of scrap metal on the floor, speechless. The armor is completely shattered? Julian glanced at Ruger Orland, who was drenched in sweat, his voice full of challenge. So, what do you intend to do now? A dazzling blue light enveloped Julian, signaling an important event about to unfold. The system panel displayed a magnificent notification. Trait. Imperfect Moonlight Sword has evolved into Moonlight Sword. Julian chuckled triumphantly as the new trait unlocked. Notification appeared, confirming the brilliant success of his power-up. Julian held the brightly glowing Moonlight Sword, declaring that he had infused it with aura without a single scratch. With a mad grin and bloodshot eyes, he growled, This is the perfect Moonlight Sword, finally a success. The old blacksmith Ruger Orland cleared his throat, admitting, "It seems I underestimated you." Julian smirked, stating bluntly, "Sometimes, actions speak louder than 1,000 explanations." The old blacksmith warned sternly, "But remember well, if that sword breaks, my reputation will vanish with it. So use it carefully." Julian smiled confidently, raising a hand to reply sarcastically, "Yes, I will use it very well." A strange man walked to the scene. Looking at the pile of scrap metal on the floor, he froze, muttering, "The custom-made armor from the Sunset Forge. Yet the cut is so clean." The man looked up with a heavily shocked expression, wondering, was this done by Julian? Rinna Ronbell appeared beside her master, confirming, "So Julian was here?" Rin's master frowned, remarking, "But now I can't sense any of his aura." He still had to acknowledge Julian's skill, Hez as impressive as ever. The swordsmanship of one who honed his aura solely for killing. Rinna showed annoyance, while her master regretted, "I wanted to see how this armor was cut. What a pity." The man turned and asked Rinna directly, "You seem annoyed by Julian?" Rin's master continued to inquire, "That's right, you two just went on a mission together, didn't you? How was he?" Rinna lowered her face, sweat dripping, reluctantly admitting, "He is certainly very strong." The man narrowed his eyes. "I understand, but did you notice anything strange about him?" Rinna suddenly looked up, showing surprise at the unexpected question. Her master looked directly into her eyes, his voice deepening, posing a critical question. "Strange, I mean." He stroked his chin, his gaze sharp. "Do you think he belongs to the Dawn Society?" While elsewhere, Julian merely smirked mysteriously. Julian held the new sword, muttering something meaningful. He adjusted his gloves, admitting to himself that he was gradually assimilating with Julian's body. But he quickly reminded himself that his ultimate goal was still to find a way back to his own world. "I can't live forever as Julian," he sighed, determined not to lose his way. Julian's eyes sharpened as he calculated. "To return to my world, this world must reach its end." He envisioned a scene of Hayden Reich confronting a demon, which was the game's ending. Julian clearly defined his mission. In other words, the game must end, and the demon god's resurrection must be stopped by Hayden, not by Julian killing him. He had to prevent that terrible ending, and realized he was at the exact moment the Dawn Society appeared in the storyline. A Dawn Society member smirked sinisterly. This was the heretical cult, ready to do anything to resurrect demon god Barbatos, the sworn enemy of Hayden and Rinna, especially for Rinna Ronbell, as she stood before a grave under a stormy sky. Rinny's eyes blazed with hatred, because her father had been murdered by the Dawn Society itself. Julian rubbed his chin in thought. Allying with Hayden Reich's faction was clearly not a simple matter. A bold idea struck him. Perhaps I should infiltrate the Dawn Society to gather information, just as the original Julian had done. But then he paused, a thought flashing through his mind, making him reconsider his plan. Suddenly, his innate keen instinct activated, and Julian immediately took a defensive stance, shouting loudly, "Who's there?" The alley was deserted, but Julian knew his senses couldn't be wrong. He smirked mockingly, full of confidence. "No matter who you are, I've already detected your mana. Show yourself." A sound of footsteps echoed from the darkness. Julian chuckled inwardly, showing interest. "Haha." A hooded woman with blue hair and violet eyes stepped out, her voice full of hidden meaning. "We've met before, haven't we?" Julian recognized her instantly. "I remember this woman, a notorious dark mage. The bishop of the Dawn Society, Eleanor de Michel." He also guessed who her companion was. "And that man is Hayden Reich's sworn enemy." Julian smirked, a challenging greeting to both. The hooded woman, Eleanor, removed her disguise, revealing her teal hair and dark magical aura. "Hey, it seems you've seen through my disguise. Just as expected, Julian." Julian sneered, acting as if he knew everything. "I suppose I know why you've come here." Eleanor clapped her hands in applause, a smile full of hidden meaning. "Oh, if that's the case, then things are easy. It's time for you to give me an answer." Internally, Julian broke out in a cold sweat. "Damn it, I don't know anything. I was just bluffing," imitating the old Julian. Trying to buy time, Julian said, "I'm not entirely sure. Give me a little more time to think." The hooded man gave him no chance, his voice full of pressure. "That won't do, Sir Julian. Didn't you contact us first?" The man's words struck Julian like lightning, to join the Dawn Society. Julian was completely shocked, his inner self screaming, "Things have gone this far? Damn that, Julian, cleaning up your messes has become my daily routine." He gritted his teeth, recalling the original storyline of this damned game. In the old scenario, Julian would be thoroughly beaten by Hayden, a miserable end. He shuddered, remembering the predetermined path. After being utterly defeated by the protagonist, the original Julian sought the power of demons and officially joined the Dawn Society. Returning to reality, Julian tried to salvage the situation. "But it doesn't have to be right now. There's probably no time limit, right?" Eleanor glanced at the deserted alley. Her tone changed. "That's true. But I believe you've misunderstood our intentions." Her eyes sharpened, full of suspicion. "Perhaps this is your strategy to overthrow the Dawn Society? This whole affair could be a trap." Eleanor leaned close to Julian's face, her voice low and menacing. "Because you are, after all, the royal hound." Julian cursed inwardly. Damn it, she suspects me. But joining the Dawn Society is indeed a bit. He envisioned a scenario of being executed by the Emperor and the Imperial Knights. If the court finds out, my life is over. This is the shortcut to the worst ending. Julian's eyes narrowed, calculating his next move. If Hayden finds out I'm involved with the Dawn Society, he imagined the worst-case scenario. Then one of us will have to disappear, and I'll be stuck in this game forever. Julian immediately changed his demeanor, flashing a confident, fake smile. I'm surprised you would think that. Eleanor was not fooled, her voice icy. You know too much, Julian. What if you decide to withdraw now? She and the hooded man stood side by side, smiles full of hidden meaning, clearly threatening. The hooded man landed with enough force to crack the paving stones, displaying his bishop rank a combat unit superior even to knights. His fist clenched tightly, signaling an unavoidable battle. He pulled down his hood, revealing a ferocious face, and roared. You'd better decide quickly, otherwise, I, Pelkor the Iron Fist, will crush you. Pelkor pointed to the scar on his face, his voice guttural. Do you remember this scar? I can still feel the pain you caused. The burly man grabbed Julian's collar, but our protagonist merely sighed inwardly, tired of cleaning up the original Julian's messes. Julian sneered contemptuously, retorting nonchalantly. Sorry, I don't remember small fry. Pelkor burst into maniacal laughter at Julian's arrogance, while Julian also smirked, telling himself to stop playing the old Julian's role. In a flash, Julian vanished right before Pelkor's eyes, leaving the Guardian stunned. Pelkor quickly regained his composure, roaring a challenge. Let's see how long you can keep that attitude. The system panel appeared. Activating his innate master swordsman ability, Julian got to work. Wham! Julian blocked Pelkor's devastating punch with his bare hand. Julian broke into a sweat, realizing he had mistakenly used the old steel sword instead of the new moonlight sword. Annoyed by his old habits, he decided he had to buy as much time as possible with the stone sword in his hand. The two sides clashed, sword light and fist winds collided, sparking, and a high-speed battle erupted. Julian was pushed back, realizing the situation was very dangerous, and he needed to prolong the fight. Pelkor growled, pouring all his strength into his fist. He unleashed a thunderous punch towards Julian, who was retreating defensively. Pelkor's punch was so powerful that it shattered the ground, creating a terrifying explosion of energy. Julian was severely shaken, thrown backward by the aftershocks of the attack. Falling to the ground, Julian heard Pelkor burst into triumphant laughter. How does it feel to lose to a small fry, Julian? Julian drew another sword, a masterpiece with a blue gem on its hilt. He sighed, annoyed at having to clean up a mess he didn't make, as a red aura began to rise from him. Julian's entire body erupted in a blazing red aura, looking like a true demon. Pelkor was surprised to see Julian still moving, while Bishop Eleanor warned from behind that something was wrong. The system panel appeared, announcing, Your emotional intensity has reached its peak, Julian muttered irritably. Julian's eyes flashed with a deadly red light as the system activated his unique trait, open eyes. Julian stood up. The sword in his hand now also glowed brightly with a surging red energy. Pelkor sensed the change in the atmosphere, stared at the new sword, and roared that he would destroy it. Julian charged forward with terrifying speed, swinging his sword towards Pelkor in a razor-sharp slash. Pelkor was stunned, completely unable to react to his opponent's lightning-fast attack. Blood splattered as the Guardian looked in horror at the deep wound on his body. Pelkor's arm was mangled by the slash, and he screamed miserably in pain. Julian flashed a sinister smile, his crimson eyes filled with cruelty and delight. Pelkor trembled with fear, stammering incoherently before Julian's overwhelming power. The Guardian frantically swung his fist in retaliation, but Julian easily blocked it with his sword, preparing for the finishing blow. Julian swung his sword, tearing through Pelkor's body, making the Guardian let out a miserable scream. Pelkor gritted his teeth, his voice trembling as he ordered, Get off me! The Guardian screamed in panic. I said get out! Julian lightly dodged Pelkor's desperate counterattack, then swung his sword in return. Pelkor staggered backward, trying to maintain distance from the monster before him. The Guardian looked at Julian with horror in his eyes, realizing his opponent's power far exceeded imagination. Hez, a monster! Julian laughed savagely, completely immersed in the thrill of battle. He relished the sensation of tearing flesh, and Pelkor's face contorted in extreme fear. The system panel appeared, explaining the passive skill, Open Eyes, only for those with fox eyes, activated when emotions peak, amplifying strength and vision. Pelkor trembled, his voice weakly pleading, Stop! The Guardian had completely lost all will to fight, only begging for his life, while the system panel warned that this skill also made the user extremely aggressive. Julian smirked, his crimson eyes gleaming with cruelty, raised his sword and declared, I don't want to. Slash. Another slash flew straight at Pelkor's face, and fresh blood splattered again. Julian stood behind the staggering Guardian, uttering a sarcastic remark. Your Iron Fist nickname sounds pretty lame now. He grabbed Pelkor's hair and yanked his head back. The Guardian could only stammer a plea. Don't kill me. Julian's dark silhouette with bloodshot eyes loomed over the Guardian, his heavy breath filled with killing intent. Suddenly, a slender hand from behind firmly gripped Julian's sword-wielding wrist, and a voice rang out. That's enough, don't you think? Julian froze. His crimson eyes darted to look at the one who dared to interfere. The system panel announced that the Open Eyes skill had expired. Julian stood still. The purple demonic energy around him dissipated as he looked down at the collapsing Pelkor. Julian stared in shock at the pool of blood at his feet, his mind in turmoil, asking himself, Did I do this? What have I done? Julian realized that the Open Eyes trait not only opened his eyes but also brought out his belligerent nature. He smirked and chuckled darkly, admitting this skill was too dangerous, but also bluntly blaming his opponent. You brought this upon yourself. Eleanor de Michel, Bishop of the Dawn Society, quietly appeared, admitting that Pelcor had indeed been insolent. Julian clicked his tongue, scoffing at Eleanor. You knew everything but still stood by and watched the show. Quite impressive, Eleanor calmly retorted. But I also let you beat him up, didn't I? Then cast a spell to bind Pelcor tightly, making the guardian stiffen. The bishop pressed her face close to Julian's, seductively asking, After this fight, I rate you higher. Care to cooperate? While her beauty mark trait was active. Seeing Julian's silence, Eleanor added, You have nothing to lose. Julian unexpectedly grabbed her shoulder, nodded. You're right. In that case, but I need more time to think. Julian coldly pushed her away, completely unfazed by her temptation. At their feet, Pelcor still lay flattened like a rag doll. Eleanor clicked her tongue in annoyance, muttering that her charm trait was still completely useless against Julian. She turned to ask Pelcor, the guardian crawling on the ground. How is it, Pelcor? Is there anything different about him? Pelcor trembled and replied, No. He's stronger than before, making Eleanor smirk triumphantly, asserting that the amnesia incident was just an act. Eleanor's eyes flashed with magic, and she threatened Pelcor. This is personal. Don't you dare breathe a word of it to the other bishops. Terrified to the point of turning pale, Pelcor could only stammer out fearful affirmations. Eleanor looked at the frightened Pelcor, reaffirming to herself that her ability was only useless against Julian alone. Meanwhile, Julian had already boarded the carriage and left, his face grim as he cursed. He looked at his still trembling hand, telling himself that even though open eyes had helped him escape danger, he couldn't rely on such an uncontrollable skill. Julian mused, admitting that even though he had anticipated it, the Dawn Society was indeed an opponent, not to be underestimated. Inside the carriage, Julian ran his hands through his hair in frustration, wondering what the hell he should do now. He was stuck between two deadly choices. If he followed the Dawn Society, he would be killed by Hayden, but if he didn't, he wouldn't be able to return to his old world. And if he exposed the Dawn Society, one of the two factions would also send him to his grave. Julian's eyes narrowed. He had anticipated this difficult game. After a period of deliberation, he muttered, It seems I have no choice but to join the Dawn Society. Julian smirked, deciding to act as an infiltrator, extracting as much information as possible to stop the plan to revive the demon god. That was the only way to return home. Night fell upon Genmul Monastery, an ancient and gloomy edifice. Julian, donning a white cloak, coldly strode inside, ignoring the gazes of the crowd. This place was a monastery affiliated with the Church of the Sun God, the most populous religious sect on the Rosenda continent. The worshippers in the church turned pale, whispering among themselves, Why is that atheist Julian here? Others whispered in fear, guessing that he had come to purge someone. Julian merely remained silent, wearing a mysterious half-smile amidst the crowd's panic. A priest tremblingly approached, stammering, Sir Julian, what brings you to our monastery? Julian replied curtly with an indifferent expression. I am here to see the abbot. The priest grew even more flustered, stammering that he had received no notification of this visit. Suddenly, a nun stepped out from the shadows and said confidently, I will lead the way. Please follow me. Julian followed the nun through the silent corridor, realizing someone had already been sent to greet him. When they were alone, the nun stopped, and a surge of purple magic enveloped her. You arrived earlier than I expected. The disguise shattered, revealing Eleanor de Michel, who smirked. Honestly, I thought you wouldn't come. Julian smirked, casually greeting Eleanor after she had dispelled her disguise, right before his eyes. He chortled, mocking the audacity of the Dawn Society for daring to hide their headquarters in such a massive monastery. Eleanor led Julian to a gigantic door, which was exuding dense, dark magic. She turned back and warned, The Archbishop is waiting. Behave yourself. Julian replied curtly, Well, see. Realizing she was far more cautious than last time, probably because she's about to meet the final boss. Inside, the Dawn Society's minions had gathered in full force, whispering when they saw Julian confidently stride in, while a masked man sat on the throne. The Archbishop spoke up, confirming the identity of the newcomer. Are you Julian? Julian assessed his opponent, thinking to himself that the man called Archbishop had no charisma whatsoever. It turned out that this Archbishop's name was Tenelron, originally just a mere farmer chosen by some relic to lead the Dawn Society. Eleanor growled, ordering Julian to kneel before the Archbishop. Julian tilted his chin up, retorting with a blunt question that left Eleanor speechless. Why should I do that? She flew into a rage, demanding, Didn't you choose to join us? Prove your loyalty. Julian waved his hand dismissively, declaring bluntly that he wasn't here to place his faith in some absurd belief. He boldly declared his true purpose. I am here to establish a cooperative relationship. Julian told himself that this brazen act was necessary, as both sides were exploiting each other. He said directly to them all, I am certain you are only after my status and influence. Julian concluded his argument. And similarly, I also need help from the god you worship. The minions furiously cursed Julian's arrogance, but the Archbishop raised his hand, signaling them to be silent. Tenelron pronounced with calculation, Enough. To establish a cooperative relationship, there's no need to treat him like this. Then dismissed all the small fry, keeping only Julian and Eleanor. The Dawn Society's minions obediently retreated, leaving only Eleanor, who secretly wondered what Julian was up to. The Archbishop chortled, looking at Julian with amusement. You truly are as arrogant as the rumors say, Julian. He clapped Julian on the shoulder good-naturedly, declaring bluntly, "But it's fine. I like it. Follow me. I have something I want to show you," the Archbishop said, leading the way and leaving Julian with a questioning expression. Eleanor warned that the area ahead was only for those of bishop rank or higher, but Julian merely smirked and replied curtly, "Is that so?" The Archbishop explained as he walked that this was the resting place of the relic, information that immediately caught Julian's attention. The leader turned back and directly asked Julian if he could guess why he was led here. Before Julian could react, the Archbishop said with a meaningful smile, "Because I don't want to let you leave like this." He explained that letting Julian go now would be no different than turning him into an enemy, and the prospect of Julian joining hands with the Dawn Society sounded so interesting. Julian sneered, confirming the cooperative relationship, and the Archbishop immediately sealed the deal. "Indeed. And I shall bestow upon you the rank of bishop." Eleanor protested in alarm, but the Archbishop brushed her off, stating that it was the treatment a hero deserves. The leader glared, growling at Eleanor, asking since when she dared to question his decisions, making her turn pale with fear. The Archbishop pulled the blushing Eleanor closer to Julian like a gift and asked provocatively, "Well, Julian, satisfied?" Julian smiled and thanked him politely, while Eleanor could only glare helplessly. "Excellent," the Archbishop said, then led them to a gigantic fountain filled with bubbling, blood-red liquid. All three approached the relic, which looked like a sculpted pillar with a human face constantly gushing fresh blood. Julian immediately recognized that the golden cup atop it was the legendary relic. The Archbishop casually stepped into the pool of foul-smelling blood, declaring that this was the relic that had chosen him. He raised the cup high, while Julian had already realized its true nature. The Star of the Demon God, an artifact capable of drawing out the latent power of demon god Barbatos. The Archbishop raised the relic cup high, and fresh blood splattered from it like a cheap performance. From within the cup, a pitch-black object, dense with dark energy, slowly emerged, looking like a genuine demon horn. Julian stared wide-eyed, immediately recognizing the item. A demon's horn? The leader laughed gleefully, showing off his trophy. "Indeed, using this relic, I can create demon horns, their source of power. Isn't it magnificent?" Julian's mind raced with information. He had never seen a horn created like this, but he knew exactly what this relic could do and how overwhelmingly powerful this horn was. Julian regained his cool expression, a smirk playing on his lips. "Ah, yes, creating demon horns. Quite interesting indeed." Julian feigned excitement, getting straight to the point. "So, you can wield demonic power through this horn? Then I've come to the right place. It's exactly what I need to fulfill my dream." Hearing this, the Archbishop's eyes behind his mask gleamed brightly, just as Julian had scripted. The leader didn't say much, thrusting the demon horn directly into Julian's hand, casually pushing the bewildered Eleanor aside. "Keep it, and use it." Julian froze, a red glint in his eyes, unable to believe this man would hand him such a high-tier item so easily. He knew full well that creating a horn like this required sacrificing countless demons in exchange for an immense source of power. The Archbishop leaned close to Julian's ear, whispering temptingly, "I wonder how powerful it will be in your hands. Perhaps you could even surpass the Sword Saint." Julian fully understood the price. Using this horn wasn't borrowing power, but transforming himself into a demon, a prospect he never desired. So how should he refuse now? Julian silently calculated, having received a scorching hot gift. Eleanor couldn't sit still, quickly calling her leader back. "Sir," she tugged at the Archbishop's sleeve, whispering her objection. "I think it's too soon to give him the horn." The leader glanced at her, his voice full of authority. "Too soon?" Eleanor explained her reasons, her voice filled with worry. "That's right, he hasn't even decided to join yet. Furthermore, the horn is the source of our power. The other members won't be pleased." Julian still held the horn, a meaningful smile playing on his lips. "I can hear everything." Julian casually returned the demon horn, stating coolly, "For now, I'll give it back. This isn't why I came here." The Archbishop gripped the dark artifact, smiling with satisfaction. "I see you're more sensible than I thought," Julian sneered, beginning his act. "But it seems it will take a bit more effort to convince Eleanor, so may I ask a favor of you?" The leader asked curiously. "What is it?" The Archbishop explained about the core material. "Spirit stones, taken from the hearts of three-horned demons, contain remnants of the demon god's will. Bring them back here to me. It won't be difficult for you." Julian looked troubled, immediately retorting, "Hunting three-horned demons without an imperial decree? That's a bit suspicious, even for me." The leader of the Dawn Society confidently declared, "You don't need to worry about that, Julian. We will handle it." A few days later, a train rolled into a large, bustling station. On the train, Julian pondered the information. What the hell is going on? The Archbishop accepted me as a member, and even directly appointed me as a bishop. He recalled the moment he received the order to hunt three-horned demons right after joining, in front of an imperial soldier, and realized, it seems they've infiltrated the court as well. Julian smirked, assessing the situation. These guys are too big and too powerful to be called a secret organization. They're practically an entire nation. This is trouble. Lost in thought, he was interrupted by a familiar voice and realized Harand was cheerfully greeting him, making Julian inwardly curse. "Damn, I forgot about this guy," Harand asked. "Didn't you also say you were coming to Bernardin?" But was startled by Julian's gaze. The noble quickly confirmed, his voice stammering, "That's right. Harand explained that the Ascension Festival of the Church of the Sun God was being held there, and he would attend as a representative of the Kreifart family. The noble awkwardly tried to make conversation, his voice slightly trembling. Once your mission is complete, you should try to enjoy the festival. Julian offered a meaningful smile, deciding to play along. I'll go if I have time. Julian's gaze and smile crackled with a murderous aura like an electric shock, making Harand sweat profusely in fear. Julian thought to himself, it seems he's still afraid of me. The train had arrived at Bernardin Station. Harand hastily asked to leave first, but was called back by Julian, who issued a warning. Don't provoke Marquis O'Neill. This made Harand tremble as he explained that the Marquis was a close friend of the Highland family, which Julian had wiped out. Julian muttered to himself, clearly annoyed at having to deal with officials instead of getting straight to his main task of demon extermination. Marquis O'Neill, an official with a stone-cold face, bluntly ordered, please postpone your mission. Julian smirked defiantly, his tone clearly sarcastic. Excuse me? The Marquis explained that the Piran Forest was under lockdown in preparation for the Ascension Festival, and only members of the Church of the Sun God were allowed entry. Julian laid his cards on the table, announcing that the three-horned demon was hiding in that forest, and warning that if it wasn't dealt with, the festival would become a graveyard. The Marquis began to sweat, trying to salvage the situation with a weak argument. But it hasn't appeared yet, has it? O'Neill began to invoke imperial orders to threaten Julian, but still only dared to request a postponement of the mission, not an outright prohibition. The official pleaded earnestly, emphasizing that the Ascension Festival was the city's pride and could not be cancelled for a demon that hadn't even shown itself. Julian silently watched the Marquis act, while the other man continued to threaten about who would be responsible if the festival was ruined because of the demon extermination mission. After his rigid approach proved ineffective, O'Neill switched to a softer tactic, inviting Julian to stay and enjoy the festival for a week before deciding. Two murderous auras clashed. O'Neill tried to appear superior, while Julian merely sighed, speechless at this blockheaded official. Suddenly, a clear child's voice rang out. Father! Cutting through the tense atmosphere, O'Neill's daughter, Tarina, peeked out from behind the door, startling the Marquis, who called her name. The little girl, without a hint of fear, ran straight to Julian and exclaimed that he was handsome, right in front of her pale-faced father. O'Neill panicked, frantically shouting for his daughter to stay away from Julian immediately, as if he were a monster. Julian looked at the Marquis shielding his daughter, thinking, do you think I'd attack a child? Then coldly stated, I understand. A terrifying purple aura emanated from Julian, the skill color of negation. Fear was activated, making O'Neill clutch his daughter and tremble violently. Julian smiled triumphantly, having sown terror into the Marquis's mind, and gently said, well then, we'll discuss this another day. Marquis O'Neill could only stand frozen in place, clutching his daughter in extreme fear. As Julian turned and walked away, Julian breathed a sigh of relief after intimidating the Marquis. Mission accomplished. Two Shut Eyes members ran over to ask Julian about the situation, their faces tense. Julian casually reported, he's very stubborn. He smirked, feigning calculation. So, I couldn't prevent the mission from being delayed. One subordinate anxiously asked if they needed to withdraw the troops hidden in the forest, while the other's face turned pale. No, leave them be, Julian dismissed, his gaze sharp. The festival preparations were underway, but Julian bluntly declared, the festival won't proceed as planned. The two subordinates froze upon hearing it, sensing something ominous. According to gamer knowledge, Bernardin was the first farming ground to encounter the three-horned demon, a formidable foe. Julian mused, the shadow of the colossal demon vaguely appearing behind him. He knew this festival was about to turn into a chaotic battlefield. Lore check. The more horns a demon had, the stronger it was, and the more unique skills it possessed. Those with 3 horns or more were all renowned threats, and one of them was Hamlin. The Hamlin demon was a parasitic type. It transformed the entire territory into its own fortress, with a labyrinth that constantly shifted its entrances and exits. What's more, it also had a poisoned swamp. Stepping into it meant instant death. Even if one escaped the fortress, the player was still not safe, because it also launched psychological attacks, driving opponents mad. All those traps made clearing this boss a nightmare. Back to reality. Julian calmly held a teacup, the water gently rippling. He confidently declared that Hamlin was about to finish preparing its fortress, and the timid Marquis O'Neill would soon come crawling to him. Just as predicted, the subordinate rushed in to report that Marquis O'Neill had invited Julian to the mansion immediately, making Julian merely smirk. Faster than I thought. The shut-eyes subordinate frantically apologized for interrupting his meal, but Julian coldly replied, it's fine. Julian smirked, his face nonchalant, as if he had read everything. I knew this would happen. At the mansion, Marquis O'Neill trembled, sweat pouring down like rain when facing Julian. Julian entered, getting straight to the point. Did you call for me, Marquis O'Neill? The old Marquis stammered. My daughter, Tarina. The Marquis buried his face in the table, his voice filled with despair. She hasn't woken up since last night. Marquis O'Neill's face was utterly panicked. He confessed that even doctors were helpless, and this condition was spreading throughout the city. Julian merely responded with a nonchalant sound, his mind already having completed its calculations. So, it has begun. The Marquis leaned his hands on the table, asking tremblingly, a healthy child suddenly falling into a coma? Don't you find that strange? He lost all composure, slammed the table, stood up abruptly, and yelled at Julian, what are you trying to say? I'm sure you know what's happening. Marquis Oronil pointed a finger, his face pale with fear, asserting firmly. This, without a doubt, was caused by a demon. Julian listened in silence, then calmly and coldly confirmed. You are correct. Julian began to explain about the Hamlin monster in Pirun Forest, a plant-type boss with glowing red eyes. He continued to describe its mechanism. It sows seeds into living creatures and turns them into its minions. Julian emphasized that this attack did not affect adults but was fatal to children. They would lose consciousness before being fully transformed, and it might already be too late for his daughter. Marquis Oronil was stunned, speechless, unable to believe what he had just heard. He stammered, impossible. He grabbed Julian's lapels, shouting in despair. Then destroy it immediately. To hell with the festival or whatever. Save my daughter first, Julian replied with a sarcastic tone. Oh, how quickly you've changed your tune, my lord. The Marquis still clung tightly to Julian, asserting he would do anything to save his daughter. Julian narrowed his eyes, growling a loaded question, cornering the Marquis. Anything? Even if it might harm Bernardin? Julian lightly brushed the Marquis's hand off his shoulder, adopting a superior air. Marquis Oronil bowed his head, his voice trembling as he accepted full responsibility for whatever might happen. Julian smirked with satisfaction, sealing the deal. I understand. Hearing Julian agree to destroy the Hamlin demon, the Marquis profusely thanked him with joy. As ordered, the shut-eyes subordinates laboriously carried buckets of flammable liquid and poured them all over the edge of the forest. Streams of brown liquid were poured onto the ground, preparing for a massive blaze. A subordinate reported to Julian that everything was ready, but still couldn't help but wonder about the necessity of this action. Julian coldly replied succinctly, Of course. Allowing a threat to persist is the act of fools. The subordinate still hesitated, asking anxiously, But are you going to burn down the entire forest? Julian confirmed firmly as the shadow of the Hamlin demon appeared behind him. Yes. Burn it to ashes. We're not clearing its fortress, we're destroying it. That's the easiest way to defeat it in the game. The subordinate worried ahead, fearing Marquis Oronil would go mad, but Julian reassured him that the Marquis had nodded, agreeing to sacrifice the festival to protect the people. Julian sneered, pointing and commanding. Then, let's begin. The subordinate obeyed, throwing the torch into the kindling soaked with accelerant, shouting loudly, Start the fire! Another one also roared, fanning the flames larger. Burn it all down. Amidst the raging sea of flames, the Hamlin demon's glowing red eyes opened, filled with wrath. The demon's plant fortress was engulfed in fire. It let out a pathetic shriek before disappearing. Suddenly, another roar echoed, making the two subordinates turn pale. One of them frantically realized, Is this the three-horned demon's roar? As the subordinate was about to frantically order preparations for battle, Julian raised a hand to stop him, coldly saying, Stand back. Julian stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt with a confident smile. I'll handle this demon myself. The black-haired subordinate frantically asked again, unable to believe Julian intended to solo the three-horned demon alone. Julian sneered, uttering a chilling remark. That's right. You guys would only get in the way. He stood tall amidst the sea of flames, his aura soaring to the heavens. The flames flared fiercely as Julian advanced towards the demon. He casually walked on the scorching ground as if strolling, the flames licking at his feet without harming him. The three-horned demon emerged from the sea of flames, and Julian merely glanced at it, uttering a disdainful remark. Truly hideous. The demon's energy core glowed bright red. It tensed its body. The demon roared in the sea of flames, its entire body trembling violently. The terrifying heat caused the ground beneath the demon's feet to crack open. The demon roared, It's useless, Hamlin. But Julian activated his moonlight sword, and a burst of blue light erupted. A radiant blue sword aura ripped through the air, slashing straight into the demon. Julian swung his sword, creating a vortex of icy blue energy. The Hamlin demon was completely overwhelmed by the icy sword energy. Unable to resist, Julian smirked, explaining to the one taking the blows. You can't use your full power because you're being consumed by fire. He pressed his sword against its face, delivering the finishing blow. Now, die by my hand, all right? Hamlin's red eyes flared, seemingly preparing to unleash its ultimate move. Julian suddenly froze, realizing something was amiss. He covered his mouth, immediately realizing, this is Hamlin's pollen. The system panel displayed a warning about hallucinogenic pollen and mental attacks. Julian cursed bitterly. Damn it, I completely forgot about this. Amidst the sea of flames, Julian cursed under his breath as he inhaled the demon's pollen. He coughed, but a challenging smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Julian's eyes glowed with a demonic red hue, and he sneered. Is that what you think I mean? The system panel announced. Mental attack resistance successful. Julian immediately swung his icy sword energy, slashing straight into the Hamlin demon. The system continued its analysis. Julian's is less than arrogance is greater than, is less than duplicity is greater than, and is less than stone-cold demeanor is greater than activated. How could a mental attack from a petty demon stand a chance against the real deal? The Hamlin demon's eyes widened in horror, realizing its trump card was utterly useless, and it let out a pathetic shriek. Julian sneered, looking even more deranged than a demon. This guy's nature is already crazy enough. He gathered all his strength, spun around, and unleashed a sword strike that created a gigantic blue energy vortex. A terrifying energy explosion engulfed the entire forest, incinerating everything in a sea of flames. At the heart of the firestorm, the Hamlin demon was torn apart, its core exposed and shattering into pieces. Julian stood tall, sheathing his sword with a cold expression, confidently declaring, "I suppose it's done." Several shut-eyed subordinates rushed over, one of them anxiously calling out, "Julian, are you all right?" Julian glanced at them, his red eyes not yet faded, and replied curtly, "Yes." He stood with his back to the blaze, a stream of red, malevolent energy escaping from the demon's corpse, and reaffirmed, "I'm fine." In a luxurious room, Marquis Oronil was drenched in cold sweat, his face as taut as a bowstring. The Marquis looked out the window, where the flames were still raging fiercely, his heart filled with anxiety. Julian suddenly appeared behind him, smiling sinisterly. "Thank you for your cooperation. I'm sure the Imperial Court will acknowledge your courageous decision." He lightly patted the Marquis's stiff shoulder, getting straight to the point. "Has your daughter woken up yet?" Marquis Oronil flinched, his voice trembling as he replied, still fearful. "Ah, yes, she's recovering." Julian held out a glowing necklace, nonchalantly suggesting, "In that case, please give this to her." Marquis Oronil froze. Julian sneered, explaining, "This is a necklace made from the remnants of the Hamelin demon." Julian continued his psychological manipulation, stating that the Marquis's daughter had potential due to her abundant mana, which was why she was the first to be affected by the pollen. He declared that he was gifting this magical item because the girl had the potential to become a mage, causing Marquis Oronil to blush and stammer, asking why he was suddenly being so generous. The Marquis roared, disbelieving the reason that the more mages, the better, and directly questioned Julian about what he truly wanted from him. Julian maintained his calm expression, asserting that this was merely compensation for his cooperation, leaving Oronil bewildered and wondering if this was truly the Julian he once knew. While Oronil was still racking his brain over the suspicious motives, Julian had already turned and left, thanking him once more before making a swift exit. The old Marquis stood frozen, holding the necklace, unable to believe that fellow had left without demanding anything in return. Looking at the glittering item in his hand, Oronil began to waver, wondering if he truly. His daughter's bedroom door slowly opened. As he stepped in, Oronil saw his daughter Tarina awake and calling father. He joyfully rushed over. "Tarina, you're feeling better." He handed the necklace to his daughter as a recovery gift, and little Tarina's eyes lit up with astonishment. Tarina cheered yes when asked if she liked it, making Oronil feel both relieved and incredibly safe. Oronil's expression hardened. He muttered that this outcome was truly unexpected and decided he must send word to the Elders Association. Recalling a hooded figure giving orders, Oronil gritted his teeth. "I tried to delay Julian's mission, but since they dared to put my daughter in danger, I will never cooperate with them again." With a determined expression, he whispered an apology to someone named Highlance, choosing to abandon his revenge for the safety of his family. Scene change. A steam train was rolling away from the station. On the train, Julian sat alone, holding a wooden box, and thinking triumphantly. The heart of the Hamelin beast has captured its spirit stone. He slowly opened the loot box. Opening the loot box, Julian smirked as he felt a surge of dark, malevolent energy pouring out, muttering, "I sense an ominous aura from this thing." Inside the box, the heart of the Hamelin beast emitted a blazing red light, throbbing like a living heart. Julian pondered his next move, his face full of cunning. He considered, "If I hand this over to the Dawn Society, it'll gain their trust. But there's definitely a more interesting way to use it than just giving it to them." A train conductor announced loudly, "We will be stopping at Rondrian Station." Julian glanced at the boarding crowd, deciding, "For now, I'll go back and hide it in a safe place. No one can know about this." The clatter of high heels echoed as a woman walked down the train car's aisle. A blonde girl with a ponytail, none other than Rinna Ronbell, was looking for her seat. Rinna found her seat, but immediately froze when she saw Julian already seated right beside her. Rinny's eyes widened in horror, unable to believe the sight before her. Julian broke out in a cold sweat, screaming in his head, "Damn it, why is this girl here?" He immediately recognized her as Rinna Ronbell, and having her or Hayden's subordinates discover this item would be even more troublesome. Julian quickly regained his composure, forcing a cunning smile. "I can't let her know that I haven't decided what to do with it yet." He knew well that carrying demonic remnants was enough to arouse suspicion. Julian stealthily hid the box behind a bag, thinking, "I don't know if it will work, but I'll hide it for now." He turned to Rinna, starting his taunt. "We seem to run into each other often, don't we? Could it be fate?" Julian smirked, facing Rinna, his voice full of innuendo. "I believe this is your seat, Miss Rinna." Rinna gritted her teeth, while Julian continued to prod. "You must be wondering why I'm here, aren't you?" Julian's lips curled into a bright smile as he revealed, "I'm on a mission in Berneden, and it seems." Rinna Ronbell suddenly appeared, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just got back from a fun outing, did you? Your belongings are practically spilling out of your bag, and you don't even notice." Julian replied hesitantly, trying to maintain a cool demeanor. "Mind your own business. Apologies if I spoke out of turn," he thought to himself, a sly expression on his face. "She probably hasn't noticed yet. If she knew I had this, then..." Rinna suddenly called his name, making Julian jump and break into a sweat. "Julian. Oh no, she found out." Rinna narrowed her eyes, sensing something extremely amiss with this man. Julian feigned ignorance, asking, "Is there a problem?" While Rinna was bending down to inspect the area around his seat, Rinna straightened up, questioning him directly. "I'm very suspicious. Is this just a coincidence, or are you stalking me?" Julian smirked, nonchalantly replying, "Unfortunately, I wasn't the one who booked the ticket. This ticket was booked by the Imperial Clerk's office. He immediately turned the tables. Or are you the one stalking me? Rinna was furious, speechless, and unable to retort. Julian cursed inwardly as he watched Rinny sit down. I thought she had hidden the box somewhere safe. He continued to regret. If I had known she would come, I wouldn't have taken this box out. Rin suddenly narrowed her eyes, her gaze sharp as a dagger pointing directly at the item. By the way, that box seems very precious to you, doesn't it? Julian broke into a cold sweat, his face taut as a bowstring as his opponent saw through him. Rinna continued to press. You've been fiddling with it this whole time. Julian clutched the box tightly, realizing he had been watched from the start, and stammered, this is. He quickly wiggled his way out, offering the box with a fake smile. It's just a normal jewelry box. Rinna crossed her arms, looking at him with an expression that said, Do you really think I'd believe that? She scoffed. It seems you're still fond of luxury items. I heard you even crafted a new moonlight sword from jewels, didn't you? Julian sighed in relief inwardly. Thank goodness. She didn't see what was inside. Julian burst out laughing, perfectly playing the role of a playboy noble. Haha. You can never go wrong with more jewels. While he was deep in character, the train suddenly screeched to a halt, making Julian lose his balance and lurch forward, clutching the precious box. Julian broke into a cold sweat, his face pale as he realized the perilous situation. Stopping abruptly right now? The violent jolt sent Julian sprawling, the box flying from his hand as an announcement of an emergency stop due to a storm blared. Disaster. The box lid sprang open, revealing the brightly glowing spirit stone inside. Julian only had time to think. I'm finished now. The spirit stone rolled across the floor, and a hand, quick as lightning, snatched it right in front of Julian. Rinna picked up the spirit stone and examined it with sharp eyes, while Julian froze, thinking, if she recognizes this, I'm definitely done for. Rinna glanced at the stone, then coldly requested, Please return it. She casually remarked, It probably isn't too dented. What bad luck. Then taunted, It seems you're really bad at keeping jewelry safe, no matter how much you like it. Julian froze, unable to believe it. As Rinna calmly placed the spirit stone back into the box, he thought to himself, could it be that this girl doesn't know what a spirit stone is? Julian offered the box to Rinna, still utterly bewildered in his mind. Rinna took the box back and thanked him, while Julian breathed a sigh of relief, admitting that his poker face sometimes came in handy. Both disembarked, Rinna still grumbling irritably about the tiring journey, especially having to sit next to that detestable man. Julian turned to strike up a casual conversation. Oh really? I, on the other hand, was happy to have someone to talk to, which only earned him a glare from Rinny. A servant was already waiting, bowing to Rinna and announcing that the carriage to the academy dormitory was ready. Julian seized the opportunity to make a quick escape. Well then, I'll be going, Miss Rin. But just as he turned, she called him back. He flinched, turning back to ask, Is something wrong? While his mind was taut as a bowstring, fearing she had discovered something about the spirit stone, Rinna unexpectedly thanked him for the incident in the slums, but she emphasized, I thank you, not as Rinna Ronbell, but as a swordswoman. Julian let out a sigh of relief, a meaningful smirk on his face. No need to be so formal. He continued to taunt. After all, we're both former students of Hayden Reich, aren't we? But Rinna bluntly retorted, No. You were expelled. Then she turned away in annoyance. Rinna Ronbell, with a poker face, ordered her servant, We should leave now. The next day, at Shut Eye's headquarters, Julian Plasson walked in, sarcastically asking Captain Odwin, Did you enjoy your trip to Bernardin? He shrugged, nonchalantly replying that the mission was boring, while Odwin, hidden behind a mountain of paperwork, growled. Of course I did. Julian looked at the mountain of paperwork, wondering, By the way, why is there so much paperwork, Captain? While Odwin looked extremely tired, he continued to taunt, guessing that she must have been lazy and shirked her duties, while internally screaming to act as much like the crazy Julian as possible. Odwin officially exploded, shouting, Look here, why do you think I have so much paperwork? Julian smirked, adding fuel to the fire with a single sentence. Because you're lazy? Which made Odwin even more furious, pointing directly at him. No, it's because of you, Julian, she yelled, questioning him directly. Why did you burn down the Piran forest? Julian nonchalantly replied that they were allowed to improvise, leaving Odwin speechless, only able to clutch her head in helplessness. She rubbed her forehead, tiredly explaining that most of these documents were warning letters from the Church of the Sun God. Odwin stated that the Piran forest was an important location for the church, and although luckily the imperial family had intervened to mediate, she still emphasized that Julian was the cause of this mess. Julian smirked, admitting, Let's say that's the case. While internally telling himself that he had no choice but to speak this way in front of the captain, Odwin changed the subject, tossing him a few letters, saying there were letters from Veal Academy. Julian noticed a letter with an unusual golden seal that he had never seen before. He realized the letter was from Genmel Abbey, and his face immediately changed color, sweat beginning to pour. Memories of a meeting with a Dawn Society member flooded back when that man had promised, You won't have to worry about that, Julian. We'll take care of it. Julian broke out in a cold sweat, thinking to himself, Don't tell me this is what he was talking about? Odwin, seeing his attitude, narrowed her eyes suspiciously. The Church of the Sun God should despise you, yet they sent you a letter of proposal. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze sharp as a knife. Do you know anything about this? This left him speechless. realizing the Dawn Society had made such a bold move that they sent a letter directly to Shut Eyes. In the thick of it, Razlot rushed in frantically, his voice trembling as he called out, "Sir Julian!" He burst straight into the captain's office, stammering a report that the secretary's office wanted to know what had happened in Bernardin. Julian was secretly delighted to have an excuse to leave quickly, calling Razlot his savior, while Razlot awkwardly apologized for the disturbance. Captain Odwin waved her hand, tossing Julian a few letters. "It's fine. You may leave now, Julian. Take these with you." As he turned and walked away, Julian sighed in relief, thinking to himself that he was glad to have escaped his strict boss's interrogation. Upon reaching the hallway, Razlot immediately followed closely, his eyes gleaming as he asked, "The rumor of you single-handedly defeating the three-horned demon is spreading like wildfire. Is it true, sir?" Julian coldly replied, "It's nothing," though he secretly thought, "I nearly bit the dust." Julian casually ordered Razlot, "The Dawn Society just sent a letter, so that demon is a trivial matter. Meet me at the secretary's office after I've read the letter." Alone in the hallway, Julian let out a breath, clutching the letter that bore no sender's name. He narrowed his eyes, muttering, "What the hell do they want, anyway?" Julian opened the letter to read it, his face filled with deep suspicion. Immediately, he realized this was no ordinary letter. A dark aura in the shape of a snake with glowing red eyes slithered out from the words. The dark aura coiled and writhed, conveying a chilling message. "The Archbishop wishes to meet Bishop Julian." Julian broke into a sweat, immediately recognizing the enchantment hidden in the letter. Eleanor must have written this. He gritted his teeth, clenching his fist until veins bulged, certain that their target was the spirit stone obtained from the three-horned demon. Julian began to piece the events together, realizing that the Dawn Society had calculated the timing of his return perfectly. There was definitely an insider among the high ranks. The scene shifted to an ancient and magnificent church, where a few people were silently praying. Julian, now donning the uniform of a shut-eyes officer, stood with his arms crossed, feeling uncomfortable with the curious stares around him. A nun approached, bowing in greeting. "Welcome, Julian." Julian smirked, calling her by her true name. "Long time no see, Eleanor. I'm feeling quite uncomfortable with so many people staring at me." Eleanor dropped her disguise, revealing her true form as a charming teal-haired sorceress, surrounded by a purple dark aura, and replied with a smile, "How amusing. Didn't you yourself exude an aura to drive others away?" Julian smirked as Eleanor recounted his feat. "I hear rumors that I single-handedly annihilated the three-horned demon and burned down the entire Pirun forest." Eleanor smiled meaningfully, wanting to hear the story from the person involved himself. Julian replied sarcastically, "Bishop Eleanor, you flatter me too much." However, his gaze turned icy cold, his hand holding the enchanted letter. "Please don't send me these troublesome things directly anymore. They could put me in a difficult position." Eleanor feigned innocence, claiming no one could see the enchantment. But Julian warned that there was always a risk, and hoped this wouldn't happen again. Eleanor narrowed her eyes and asked directly, "So how do you intend to contact us? Do you have any other methods?" Julian smirked cunningly, a red light flashing in his eyes. "Perhaps I'll pay you a visit from time to time?" He held out the letter, stating firmly, "Exactly. Why don't we meet in person? I don't want others to discover my connection with the Dawn Society." Eleanor was slightly flustered by his confidence. "You speak as if you know exactly where I'll be," she muttered to reassure herself, believing Julian was just bluffing and couldn't possibly know her true identity. Having said his piece, Julian turned and walked away decisively, leaving Eleanor in a jumble of confused thoughts. At another location, a red-masked figure gleefully welcomed Julian. "Bishop Julian, you've finally arrived. Do you know how much I've missed you?" Julian stood on the steps, looking down at the members of the Dawn Society, and coldly ordered, "Then show me the item. The spirit stone from the three-horned demon that you single-handedly annihilated." A cunning smile appeared on Julian's lips. He calmly dropped a bombshell. "I couldn't bring the spirit stone." The masked bishop was speechless, asking again in shock, "What?" The other man still couldn't believe his ears, pressing him. "Wasn't it the three-horned demon? So there's no spirit stone?" Julian confirmed that there was indeed a demon, and also a spirit stone. The masked bishop lost his patience, insisting on knowing. "Then where is the spirit stone?" Julian slowly approached, while the other members of the Dawn Society were also whispering among themselves. He spread his arms wide, laughing loudly and arrogantly as he declared, "I've already submitted it to the Imperial Secretary's office." The masked bishop was stunned, demanding in a low growl that Julian repeat what he had just said. Julian smirked and confirmed, "That's right, Archbishop. I handed over the three-horned demon's spirit stone to the Imperial Secretary's office." One of the members stammered in horror. "Are you insane?" A blazing red killing intent erupted around the bishop. He gritted his teeth loudly. "Can you tell me your reason?" Julian smirked, calmly explaining his strategy. "Consider it taking one step back to take 3 steps forward." A member of the Dawn Society shouted in protest, "Sir, there's no need to listen to him. He has clearly betrayed our trust." Julian shot a contemptuous glance at the small fry. "To think that way is truly foolish." He turned to the whole group, challenging, "If that was my intention, why would I even show my face here?" Julian began to explain his reasoning. Submitting the spirit stone to the royal family is to use them to conduct research, making them actively hunt more demons, and thereby allowing the society to easily find other targets. The masked bishop seemed to be convinced, admitting, "I understand. That is certainly not a bad idea," but he was still not entirely convinced. His eyes beneath the mask gleamed with suspicion. However, do you truly think that is a sufficient reason to hand over the spirit stone? In the bishop's mind, the image of a subordinate drawing a sword and pointing it at Julian appeared. Other members of the Dawn Society were also poised to strike, ready to rush in and deal with the traitor. Julian smiled confidently, knowing full well they wouldn't be easily convinced. Of course, there's another reason. He began to list. There are many rumors about me single-handedly defeating the three-horned demon, the Pillar of Shut Eyes, the next Sword Saint, and... Julian raised a finger to the sky, proudly declaring his new title, a hero. He continued his arrogant speech. All attention is focused on me, certainly, including hostile gazes. You know very well who is trying to obstruct me, don't you? The henchmen of the Dawn Society couldn't stomach this charade. They shouted, "Sir, Hez just stalling for time. We must punish him." Julian placed his hand on his sword hilt, his icy gaze sweeping across the group. Huh? Do you really want to fight me? Whoosh! He drew his sword, the blade flaring with dazzling blue energy, ready for combat. Interesting. Come at me. The masked bishop shouted in panic. Stop! The masked bishop roared, pointing directly at Julian. Who are you talking about? A Dawn Society member charged forward, swinging their weapon to create a crescent-shaped streak of light. Whoosh! Julian was even faster, darting past his opponent in a blue blur. Slash! A clean sword strike. And blood splattered everywhere. The Dawn Society minion only managed a pained cry before collapsing. Julian stood above, looking down at the defeated foe with a cruel smirk. He began his act. If you're curious, I'll tell you. Julian revealed a shocking name, pointing at an image of the Sword Saint Hayden Reich. My former master, the Sword Saint Hayden Reich. Does that name ring a bell? The masked bishop erupted with a crimson killing intent. Completely provoked by that name, Julian thought to himself, this move of linking the Sword Saint to the Dawn Society was more effective than he had imagined. The bishop gritted his teeth, clenched his fists, and growled. The one who ruined my face. Julian continued to fan the flames. Indeed. Hez also suspicious of me. Your mask isn't just for show, is it? Julian explained his counterintuitive yet perfectly logical reasoning. I defeated the three-horned demon, but didn't bring back the spoils. If I had, he would have grown even more suspicious of me. The bishop finally understood, growing angry on Julian's behalf. I see. That scoundrel dares to suspect even his former disciple? Julian extended his hand, a gesture full of trust. The masked bishop took Julian's hand, completely convinced. Julian, now I understand why you joined us. Julian smiled in return, but in his mind he coldly uttered a thought. Glad you understand, even if you're completely mistaken. Back in his office, Julian tapped his fingers on the table, calculating to himself. I've successfully bought myself some time. He was confident that if he skillfully utilized both the Dawn Society and the Imperial Court, he could win this game, but there was still work to be done. A shadowy figure filled with ominous energy appeared, and Julian realized, I need to deal with the one who's been following me. Julian sat in contemplation, thinking about the stalker. At first, I didn't even notice. He gritted his teeth, realizing the situation wasn't simple. But over time, they became increasingly mysterious. The shadow of the stalker appeared in Julian's mind, someone he had already identified. The office door burst open, and Razlot excitedly ran in. Sir Julian, a letter from the secretary's office for you, Julian coldly ordered without looking up. Just leave it on the table. Razlot hesitantly replied yes, thinking to himself that his boss seemed a bit different today. Julian took the scroll from Razlot's hand. Razlot was about to slip away when Julian called him back. Wait, Razlot. The employee flinched, sensing something ominous. Julian smiled meaningfully. You seem quite busy lately, don't you? Razlot forced a laugh, flattering. Haha, it's all for shut eyes, sir. Even though I'm just an intern, I'm grateful to be entrusted with so many tasks. Julian repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Indeed, just an intern, yet handling such important matters. He continued his interrogation. Didn't you go to the captain's office to deliver a message from the secretary's office the day I brought back the soul stone? Razlot broke into a sweat, stammering his admission. Yes, I was just curious about the soul stone. Julian smirked menacingly. His prey had fallen into the trap. Julian's gaze sharpened, an invisible pressure weighing down on Razlot. Oh, so an intern like you also knows about the soul stone? Razlot froze, realizing he had misspoken. Julian stood up, closing in. Excuse me? This is the first time I've mentioned the term soul stone in front of you, yet you don't seem confused at all. He listed the only ones who knew about it. Me, the Imperial Court, and the Dawn Society. Razlot stammered, trying to find an excuse in vain. Julian stood up, laying his cards on the table. I found it strange from the very beginning. A mere intern like you handling such important tasks? Julian pressed his face close to the terrified young man, grabbing him tightly by the collar. Julian pressed his face close, asserting firmly that this couldn't be done without the involvement of the Dawn Society, hidden within the Imperial Court, leaving Razlot speechless. Suddenly, Julian let go, raising both hands with a teasing expression. But don't worry, I'm not going to do anything to you, leaving Razlot bewildered and confused. With a sly smile, Julian declared he just wanted to talk a little. Razlot trembled, clutching his collar, stammering to confirm. Really? Cornered, Razlot decided to go all in, growling. Then I don't need to hide anymore, and activated a magical item. A purple gem on his neck erupted with dark energy, emitting an eerie aura. Razlot's eyes sharpened, No longer holding the innocent look of an intern, he let out a sigh of relief, his expression as if a burden had been lifted. His demeanor completely changed. Julian smirked. Mind magic, huh? You look completely different. Completely unfazed by this transformation. Razlot smoothed his hair, admitting it was a mandatory charm for entering the palace. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived in this place. Now, Razlot had regained the upper hand, facing Julian and questioning him. Since you didn't kill me immediately, that means you have something to say to me, right? Julian chuckled with delight, praising the young man's intelligence, then getting straight to the point. Julian made an unbelievable offer. Why don't you work for me, Lazarus? Lazarus, Razlot's true name, narrowed his eyes warily. What do you mean? Julian crossed his arms, casually laying his cards on the table. To put it plainly, be my spy. Then directly asked if he was asking Lazarus to be a double agent. Lazarus was utterly shocked, unable to believe his ears, stammering to ask why Julian would make such a crazy offer. He frantically speculated. Don't tell me you're planning to betray the Dawn Society? Julian placed his hand on the table, denying it gently. Don't say such terrible things. I just want to ensure I can act freely. Lazarus was still skeptical, thinking Julian was joking and that he would never agree so easily. Julian sneered, wiggling his finger. Of course not. I wouldn't ask you to work for free. Julian began his mind games, grabbing Razlot by the collar. I hear you often donate to the orphanage, don't you? Razlot's eyes widened, a cold sweat breaking out as Julian hit a nerve. Julian pressed further. Where does a lowly intern like you get so much money? Julian waved the paper, a calculating smirk on his face. This place must be very important to you, isn't it? He concluded with a blatant threat. It would be terrible if something unfortunate were to happen to it. Razlot gritted his teeth, speechless and unable to utter a word. Julian burst out laughing, feigning reconciliation. Haha, I was just kidding, don't be so tense. Then he placed his hands on the table, getting straight to the point. If you help me, I will give the orphanage an extremely generous gift. Razlot looked up, wavering slightly. A generous gift? Julian smirked, clasping his hands together. Indeed. I've suddenly become interested in doing good deeds. Razlot narrowed his eyes, beginning to weigh the pros and cons, his expression less panicked and more contemplative. A few days later, a carriage stopped in front of a luxurious building. Aiden, a high-ranking member, called out to Lazarus. Lazarus, have you brought what I asked for? Lazarus respectfully handed him a scroll. Yes, Bishop Aiden. Aiden took the scroll, confirming the information. This is the next destination of the Sword Saint, Hayden Reich. Anything else? Lazarus further reported on a petition from a member of the Elders Association. Aiden dismissed it, deeming the petition a trivial matter. Hayden is what's important. Report his next destination to the Archbishop. Lazarus bowed in obedience. Yes, I understand. Aiden suddenly noticed something unusual. Say, you don't look so good. Lazarus was startled and hastily denied it. Internally, Lazarus was screaming, standing at a crossroads. Should I tell him, or should I hide it to the very end? Even if the Dawn Society protects me, my sister Chernia. Julian's offer echoed in his mind, an offer too good to refuse. I will write letters of recommendation for your sister and the other children at the orphanage to enter Veal Academy. Aiden stared intently at Razlot, asking suspiciously, Lazarus? But the double agent could only stammer out denials. No, nothing at all. The moment Julian set foot back in the mansion, a line of maids bowed deeply in welcome. Welcome home, young master. A maid timidly reminded him. Young master, your coat. While Julian merely scoffed, replying absently, I was a bit distracted, he muttered to himself with a sinister smile, a cold sweat running down his back, asking if I'm all right. I feel like things shouldn't be going this smoothly. In his train of thought, Julian recalled the moment he discovered Razlot. His first instinct was to act just like the original Julian, using the information he had to blackmail him. He scoffed mentally, thinking about the naivety of his prey. If Lazarus had been a little more careful, he would have realized that the paper I was holding had nothing to do with the orphanage. A trick on a completely different level. Returning to reality, Julian became aware of his own transformation. Li Si-hu would never have thought of such a trick. The maid timidly spoke up. Young master, there was a message from the main house today. Julian showed obvious disgust upon hearing about the main house, muttering, those people, the ones who despise Julian for being from a collateral branch, are they seeking me out again? The maid explained that it was a wedding invitation from Renia Kreifart, Julian's older sister, and that they had only sent it out of courtesy. Julian coldly ordered, just tell them I'm busy and cannot attend. The maid sighed in relief, but just as she was about to turn away, Julian called her back. Wait. With a cunning smile, he completely changed his mind. Report back that I will attend this wedding, then muttered to himself. I forgot a few things at the Kreifart estate. The maid asked bewilderedly. Do you mean that outfit? And Julian wondered. Which outfit? The maid innocently replied. Yes, the pink tuxedo you always wear, which made Julian freeze on the spot. He forced a smile and suggested, how about choosing something a bit more elegant? But the maid delivered another fatal blow. Didn't you once say that was the most luxurious outfit? The soul of Li Si-hu screamed inside. You bastard, Julian. Why would you do that to me? And the scene shifted to a luxurious fashion store. At the White Atelier, the most exclusive fashion store in the empire, the female staff all bowed in unison to the esteemed guest. Why is Julian in a place like this? Julian stood confidently in the middle of the store. He knew this place had many quality outfits and a host of staff ready to advise him. Julian flashed a friendly smile, thinking to himself, perhaps I should gently ask for a little help? He grinned, his tone like an order. Can anyone here help me choose a few outfits? The female staff were scared out of their wits, hastily bowing deeply and profusely apologizing. Julian sighed, speechless, wondering why simply buying a few clothes had to be so difficult. Scene change. At another shop, a red-haired shop owner warmly welcomed a regular customer. Welcome, Miss Eileen. Eileen smiled back in greeting, and the owner remarked that she had been too busy with research lately to drop by. Eileen replied wearily that it was the burden of a professor, while the owner listened dejectedly. She bitterly complained that her research had almost gone to waste because someone had completely plundered all the moonlight stones, and she roared the culprit's name. Julian. But fortunately, the royal family requested an investigation into a new type of material called spirit stones. Thanks to this, Eileen not only saved her research, but could also elevate it to a new level. Her will ignited, her eyes blazing, as she thanked whoever that guy was for discovering this material. Back at the shop, the owner asked Eileen what kind of outfit she was looking for. Eileen explained she needed a dress for Renia Criffart's wedding party. As they were a prominent family, she needed to invest a little. The shop owner showed surprise upon hearing the prestigious Crifart name. The owner quickly said she would go fetch a few suitable dresses for Eileen to see. Eileen sighed in relief, happy to be free from her pile of research papers for the first time in a long while. She wandered around, secretly marveling that this shop truly had everything. Suddenly, Eileen's gaze froze when she saw a familiar figure. She was stunned, uttering his name in utter astonishment. Julian? Julian, holding a red suit, turned to look, while Eileen reflexively hid behind a mannequin. He smirked as if he already knew someone was there, while Eileen remained hidden, wondering why she was having such an irrational reaction. Eileen muttered, reassuring herself that Julian was just a branch family member of the Crifarts, probably just here to buy clothes for the wedding. As she secretly observed, she wondered why he was looking at ordinary clothes, when he usually wore tight-fitting outfits like sausages. Eileen's eyes widened in shock when she realized which outfit Julian was eyeing. She couldn't believe he intended to choose that one. Julian smirked smugly, picked up a piece of dark red fabric, and nodded. This outfit looks fancy enough. Eileen gritted her teeth, screaming in silent despair. He's actually going to buy it. Wearing that to the wedding would be a disaster. While other noble mothers and daughters stared at her like a strange creature, Eileen decided she had to risk everything to prevent this fashion disaster. She rushed out, snatched the outfit from Julian's hand, her voice full of skepticism. Young Master Julian. Julian turned around, a little surprised to see Eileen. While she sternly asked if he was truly going to buy this outfit, the atmosphere was tense. Julian taunted. Still keeping up the habit of taunting people right after meeting them, aren't we? While Eileen responded with a forced smile. Eileen began her lecture on fashion, criticizing Julian for not understanding the meaning of clothes because he only ever wore flashy outfits. Julian frowned and asked, "Excuse me?" And Eileen immediately went on the offensive. "Are you playing dumb?" She stepped closer, her eyes sharp, questioning whether he still held a grudge against the Crifart family. Eileen concluded with a harsh statement, inferring that his actions were nothing short of a declaration of war, aiming to wipe out the nobility. Julian froze, his brain unable to process Eileen's logic fast enough, thinking to himself, what the hell is this girl talking about? He was completely clueless about the hidden meaning behind this seemingly ordinary red outfit. Julian broke into a sweat, having no choice but to ask innocently about the symbol she was referring to. Eileen flipped over the back of the jacket, revealing a dazzling golden royal emblem. She explained that this was the emblem of the Pebrance royal family, something knight families used when dealing with enemies. Eileen scoffed, saying that even though it was just an ornament now, for a notorious person like him to wear this to a wedding would be like slapping his entire family in the face. Julian finally understood. He covered his mouth, forcing a laugh, telling himself, "There's no way I would have known. I never played Julian's route." Julian was speechless, complaining that choosing clothes was exhausting, especially when the original Julian's instincts kept calling for disastrous fluorescent pink outfits. He smirked, turned to Eileen, and admitted defeat, saying he had no choice but to ask for help. "Well then, I guess I have no choice." He grinned slyly, pulling out an even more horrifying rainbow-colored outfit. "So, I guess I'll have to take the second outfit I had in mind." Eileen was so shocked her face contorted, unable to believe her eyes, while Julian secretly gloated, knowing she wouldn't be able to sit still. Eileen shrieked when she saw him hold up the garish pink suit. "Are you seriously going to wear this to the wedding?" Eileen gritted her teeth, clutching her dress until it wrinkled. "I can't take it anymore." Eileen exploded, pointed directly at him and declared, "In the name of the Donatian family, I will find you a decent outfit." Julian chuckled to himself. Everything is going according to plan. Julian gleefully thought to himself, she's truly an easy girl to read. While Eileen clutched her head in helplessness, blaming herself for not realizing his problematic fashion sense back at the academy. And so, the wedding day arrived at a magnificent, luxurious mansion. A trembling staff member presented an invitation with a seal, stammering out the name, Lord Julian Criffart Plassen. After a guard confirmed the invitation, Julian confidently stepped in, wearing a very cool formal suit, secretly thanking Eileen for choosing a decent outfit for him. However, he felt a sense of discomfort rising, realizing these were residual emotions from this body. He smirked, admitting he didn't want to be here either. but there was only one reason he had to be present. The ultimate goal, the soul stone that the Kreifhart family possessed. He recalled his game knowledge. There were a few ways to farm soul stones. One was to hunt demons. The other was to negotiate with the Kreifhart family head. He placed his hand on the grand door. Just thinking about Julian's father already annoyed him. The door opened, and Julian grandly entered the banquet hall, immediately becoming the center of all attention. The music abruptly ceased. The musicians were stunned, while the guests began to whisper with astonished expressions. Julian crossed his arms, smirking defiantly at the deadly silence. Did you have to stop the music? Is there really a need to overreact? He glanced around, thinking to himself, they're shocked that I dared to show my face here. Well, it would be strange if they welcomed me. A white figure rushed over and embraced Julian, calling his name to the protagonist's astonishment. It turned out to be Renia Kreifhart, Julian's older sister. She smiled brightly. You're here, thank you. Renia clasped her younger brother's hand tightly, openly delighted because it had been too long since they last met. Julian thought to himself that this was the first time someone had treated him kindly, but then accepted it. We are siblings, after all. Renia turned to apologize to Eileen for being overly excited, while Eileen merely replied politely to dismiss the matter. The older sister curiously asked about their relationship, guessing that they knew each other from their academy days. Julian confirmed, but his mind was blank because he had no idea that he and Eileen were in different classes. Renia continued to expose Julian's fashion sense, praising his current outfit and asking if Eileen had chosen it, making her flinch. Julian immediately felt Eileen's fiery gaze from behind him. Eileen gritted her teeth, silently commanding, "Tell her who chose that outfit for you." But Julian nonchalantly took credit. "That's right. I chose them," leaving Eileen completely shocked. When asked what was wrong, Eileen had no choice but to change the subject, pretending as if nothing had happened. Renia happily invited them both to meet her husband, while Julian secretly thought this atmosphere wasn't as bad as Head imagined. A tall figure approached as Renia called out. The man with ash-gray hair was introduced as Joshua Kreifhart, Renia's fiancé. Joshua was about to take Renia's hand to greet her when another hand blocked him. Julian's hand tightly gripped Joshua's wrist, stopping his action. Joshua growled, his eyes filled with killing intent. "What the hell are you doing?" While Renia froze in shock, Julian spoke coldly, mocking Joshua for wasting time greeting a foolish, peripheral family member in such an important place. Renia hastily explained that she was just happy to see her brother again, and asked Joshua to at least offer a greeting. Joshua's face turned crimson, and he pointed directly at Julian, shouting, "Who said he's my brother?" Julian merely smirked, thinking to himself, "Yes, this tense atmosphere is exactly what I want." Joshua stepped closer, growling, "Hey, you branch family member. I don't know why you're here, but don't think that makes us family." Julian sneered, holding up the invitation card to provoke him. "I only came because I was invited, didn't I?" "Rip!" Joshua snatched the invitation card from Julian's hand. He furiously crumpled the card in his hand, veins bulging. The crowd of guests around them began to whisper and gossip at the entertaining spectacle. Joshua exuded killing intent, gritting his teeth as he ordered, "As a member of this family, I'm telling you to leave." Julian remained unfazed, smirking as he retorted with a cutting question. "What if I don't leave?" Joshua placed his hand on his sword hilt, his voice full of challenge. "Then I'll show everyone." Swish. He drew his sword, its gleaming blade pointing directly at Julian. "The fate of a branch family member who dares to defy me." Julian coldly stared at the sword, his expression completely unwavering. Memories of Joshua Kreifhart began to resurface. He was once the ringleader, the most notorious bully at Veal Academy. He specialized in forming cliques and bullying weaker commoner students. He even disrupted the lectures of lower-ranking professors. Back in the present, Joshua, with an arrogant expression, roared, "Come here, you royal dog." Julian merely sneered, secretly assessing. Is this guy serious? Is he brave or just foolish? Whoosh. Julian vanished in a blur of blue light, moving too fast for the naked eye to follow, and seized Joshua's face. Joshua's eyes widened, completely frozen by Julian's terrifying speed. Joshua roared, swinging his sword to strike, but Julian simply raised his hand and easily parried it. Crack! Julian gripped Joshua's sword-wielding wrist tightly, his overwhelming strength rendering his opponent immobile. Joshua broke out in a cold sweat, his face flushed red with shock and anger. What kind of monstrous strength is this? He gritted his teeth and cursed, but Julian maintained a cold, sarcastic expression. To dare to commit such a despicable act as grabbing Renia's wrist, even a mere branch family member wouldn't dare to do that. Clang! Joshua's sword clattered to the floor, completely disarmed in a humiliating manner. Julian leaned close to his opponent's ear, his voice full of contempt. "You should be ashamed." Harand rushed over to intervene, his voice hesitant. "Stop it, Julian." Julian glanced over, giving Harand a sharp look that silenced him. Harand tried to persuade him, while Joshua was still held firmly by Julian. "I understand how you feel, but the guests are watching." Hearing that, Joshua once again spoke with a foul tone. "That's right. How dare you forget your place?" Harand turned and yelled directly at Joshua, exposing his true colors. "Joshua, don't bring us any more shame. Weren't you the one who provoked Renia and Julian first?" Julian released his grip, uttering a sentence that extinguished all of Harand's efforts. "My brother is here as our father's representative. Don't act so thoughtlessly anymore." Julian calculated inwardly, realizing the situation had changed. Father's representative, huh? He deduced. So, the head of the Kreifhart family isn't attending this wedding. Julian frowned, his initial plan ruined. If that's the case, acquiring the soul stone here will be difficult. Julian turned towards his older sister, his voice calm as if nothing had happened. Rainia, are you all right? I apologize for causing a commotion. Rainia smiled, her sharp eyes seeing through everything. Don't worry. You did it for me, didn't you? Amidst a den of such depraved individuals, your composure is almost frightening, Rainia. The bride waved cheerfully. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Julian decisively turned on his heel. In that case, I'll take my leave. The entire banquet hall buzzed with whispers about Julian's actions as he turned to Eileen and said, And thank you, Lady Eileen. Julian gave a self-satisfied smile, complimenting Eileen. The outfit you chose suits me well. Eileen's face flushed crimson, completely flustered by the unexpected compliment, wondering why she reacted that way. In a flashback, Eileen had secretly admired Julian's formal attire, believing it was as beautiful as if woven from stars and a worthy work of art. Back in the present, Eileen buried her face in her hands, groaning in embarrassment, while Rainia could only watch her helplessly. Rainia hurriedly ran after Eileen to intervene, while Julian walked away coldly, secretly cursing himself for remembering such a trivial matter. As Julian strode out of the banquet hall, Rainia suddenly called out his name loudly. Julian turned back to see his older sister panting as she chased after him. Rainia, still breathless, chided, You walk too fast. I almost couldn't give you this. Rainia looked directly into her younger brother's eyes, immediately seeing through him. Tell me the truth. You came to the wedding to see father, didn't you? She held out a small velvet box, an unexpected gift. Rainia explained, I wanted to give you this, our mother's keepsake. Julian narrowed his eyes, immediately realizing this was the very reason the original Julian and their father had a monumental argument. He smirked, confirming, Ah yes, we had some words over it. Julian inwardly confirmed that the mother of this body had passed away, while Rainia explained that she had secretly taken it to return it to him. The gamer soul within Julian was speechless, unable to comprehend why a villain like Julian had such a normal and warm family. Rainia said that their father would be furious, but leaving the keepsake to rot in storage was too wasteful, and Julian reluctantly accepted it, unable to refuse. As soon as he opened the box, Julian froze, his voice faltering. Inside was not ordinary jewelry, but a verdant soul stone, radiating a brilliant magical light. Julian immediately analyzed it. The stone had been refined and contained no demonic energy, making him even more suspicious about the true identity of his deceased mother. Julian couldn't believe he had obtained the target item so easily, while Rainia stood there, bewildered, and not understanding what her younger brother had just seen. Julian vehemently denied it, claiming he was just muttering to himself, then thanked Rainia for returning his mother's keepsake. Rainia smiled, saying it was the first time she had seen her brother with such a human expression, and knew she had done the right thing. He let out an awkward laugh, denying, You must be mistaken, sister. But Rainia only smiled faintly, saying nothing more. Rainia waved goodbye, telling her brother to remember to visit home occasionally. Julian vaguely promised, I'll come back someday, then turned his back and walked away decisively. Julian's cold silhouette departed the mansion, leaving the warm family atmosphere behind. He stared at the soul stone, never expecting that an item from the family treasure vault would turn out to be his mother's keepsake. Suddenly, a sharp pang in his chest made Julian halt. Tears streamed down his face unconsciously, and the gamer's soul within was deeply shocked. This bastard Julian actually has emotions? Is this longing? The luxurious carriage rolled swiftly along the path through the forest. Inside the carriage, Julian sighed in relief, unable to believe that a psychopath like Julian could feel sadness. He wondered if this meant the original villain still retained some shred of humanity. Julian smirked, brushing aside the surge of emotions. Anyway, the objective is complete. He held up the soul stone, grinning triumphantly as he thought about how easily he had acquired such a valuable item. Now it's time to strategize. How should I handle this super powerful soul stone? He didn't want to hand it over to the Dawn Society or the Sword Saint. Suddenly, a flash of insight struck him as he remembered an important detail. He activated the system, and a blue virtual interface appeared around him, recalling that Julian also possessed such a thing. The notification panel clearly displayed the characteristic, Vessel of the Demon King, which allowed for the absorption of the residual power of demon god Barbados. His mind raced, and he realized Julian could absorb the soul stone, evolve into the Demon King, and become invincible in this damned game. But then he leaned back, a look of disgust on his face. Become the Demon King? That sounds disgusting. Forget it. Julian grimaced, disgusted by the hypocritical villain role this body once played, his gamer instincts screaming in protest. In the carriage, he told himself to clear his head, deciding to temporarily put away the soul stone rather than hastily power up. Thud. The box containing the formidable item was set down decisively. Upon returning to the mansion, Julian remained uneasy, fearing the Dawn Society would come to steal the item, so even storing it in his inventory didn't feel secure. He leaned back in his chair, let out a long sigh, and secretly wished for some peace and quiet for a while. Suddenly, a strange surge of mana flashed by, making Julian jump, his eyes glinting with vigilance. The system activated is less than keen, intuition is greater than, and he immediately analyzed the situation. Exact location? What's the purpose? Is it alone or with accomplices? Julian sprang to his feet, his mind racing, planning to use mana detection to pinpoint the intruder, but he quickly dismissed that idea, because if he used mana carelessly, the opponent would immediately detect him as well. Fortunately, he didn't sense any killing intent, So it seemed this wasn't an assassination attempt. Julian sighed in relief and headed straight towards the source of the mana, curious to see who dared to intrude. A figure was calmly sipping tea in the dimly lit room. She turned, smiling meaningfully. Oh, a blue-haired woman, surrounded by a purple magical aura, stood up and casually said, "You're later than I expected." Julian immediately recognized the intruder as Eleanor de Michel, one of the bishops of the Dawn Society. He froze, unable to comprehend how she had managed to sneak into his mansion. Eleanor took a sip of tea and nonchalantly explained, "I was bored, so I just asked the servants to bring out some tea. It's only proper to treat guests this way, isn't it?" Julian narrowed his eyes, wondering if she had used charm magic to control his servants. Maintaining a poker face, Julian asked directly, "Bishop Eleanor, what brings you to my mansion?" She sneered, "Oh, just a friendly gathering among comrades." Julian's annoyance showed on his face, and he cursed inwardly. What the hell? Breaking into someone's house is called socializing? He quickly regained his composure, realizing this woman disliked beating around the bush, while Eleanor declared she had a few questions. Eleanor took a sip of tea and got straight to the point. "Recently, you completed a mission in the slums, the one about exterminating a demon." Julian coldly confirmed, "That's right." Eleanor smiled meaningfully, launching her first probing question. "Was that demon human-shaped?" Julian immediately read her intentions. She wanted to test how much he knew about human demonization, so he decided to put on a good show. He burst into arrogant laughter, confirming that it was indeed a human who had suddenly transformed into a demon, which piqued Eleanor's interest. Julian continued to boast, adding that the demon's horns were completely different from what Archbishop Tenelron had once shown him. Eleanor froze, her eyes flashing with astonishment upon hearing that name. Julian sneered, concluding that it was just like a cheap imitation, and asked directly, "This is what you wanted to know, isn't it?" He turned the tables, asking Eleanor in return how much she knew about the horns and demonization, which made her admit she didn't know much. Eleanor stood up, telling herself that the battle of wits was over. This kid knew too much. Julian sarcastically asked if she was satisfied, and Eleanor admitted that she didn't even need to test him anymore. As she turned to leave, Eleanor began to state her terms. "Since you seem to understand how the Dawn Society operates," she glanced back with a cunning smile, "I trust you know what to do." Julian was not to be outdone. He retorted with a challenging smile, "Let's not point our swords at each other. I'm just as troublesome as you are." As soon as Eleanor was out of sight, Julian collapsed onto the sofa, his domineering facade vanishing, leaving only exhaustion. He sighed, realizing he only had two choices: either become a core member of the Dawn Society or completely exit this game. Julian bitterly reflected on the irony of his mansion being infiltrated on the very day he acquired the Soul Stone, concluding that this place was no longer safe. Just then, the butler appeared, holding a small box, his face pale as he asked Julian if he truly wanted to entrust this matter to him. Julian called Haran's name, startling the nobleman, who stammered, surprised to hear his name called instead of news about Joshua's punishment. Julian sneered, coolly stating that the brat Joshua wasn't worth his concern, further bewildering Haran. The butler tremblingly asked Julian about the small box in his hand, not understanding what strange item he was being entrusted with. Julian casually replied that it was his mother's keepsake, shocking Haran, whose face turned pale as he gasped and yelled, "What?" Haran panicked, stammering to ask if it was Lady Melena's keepsake, believing such a precious item couldn't be entrusted to him, but Julian merely coldly told him to calm down. Julian smirked triumphantly, thinking to himself that Haran was one of the few who wouldn't dare to mess with the Soul Stone, as he was both cowardly and ignorant of its true nature. Haran still couldn't believe it, tremblingly asking again if Julian was sure he wanted to entrust such an important item to him. Julian curtly replied that he couldn't keep it with him at the moment, and trusted Haran to keep it safe, accompanied by a meaningful smile. Haran began to speculate, believing that his mother's keepsake symbolized the last shred of humanity of the original Julian Plasson, who was always very obedient in front of his mother. The nobleman frantically concluded that Julian handing over this keepsake was nothing less than a declaration of abandoning his humanity to become a monster, a loyal hound of the Empire. Julian merely thought to himself that this man had misunderstood again, but he didn't care, as long as the Soul Stone was kept safe. Scene change. Joshua was sitting on the bed, his face flushed with anger, muttering curses. He looked down at his wrist, where a clear bruise remained after the collision with Julian. A maid entered the room, announcing it was time to change young Master Joshua's compress. Joshua immediately flew into a rage, snarling and yelling at her to change it at once, frightening the maid into shrinking back. He gnashed his teeth, bitterly cursing Julian as a low-born wretch who dared to injure the hand of a direct descendant like himself. The image of Julian with a smug smile reappeared in Joshua's mind, haunting him with the fact that someone bearing the purest silver hair of the Kreifhart family originated from a collateral branch. Joshua angrily punched the bed, shouting that Julian's attitude was too arrogant and conceited. He recalled the moment his attack was blocked, clearly feeling Julian's sharp sword aura as if it wanted to pierce his flesh. Joshua bitterly admitted deep down that he had lost from that very moment, and couldn't understand why a wretch like Julian was so confident and even had the favor of the royal family. Joshua Kreifhart flinched when a drop of water splashed onto his face. He was still seething with resentment. The maid trembled in fear, stammering young Master Joshua's name. She knelt on the ground, begging for her life while Joshua snatched the towel from her hand. He threw the towel to the ground, forcing the maid to beg for forgiveness. Joshua suddenly stood up, radiating murderous intent. He growled, his face darkening as if about to explode. A calm, deep voice echoed from the doorway. I came because I heard young Master Joshua called for me. A black-haired man entered, none other than Alpha's Myend, Joshua's personal guard and former vice-captain of the Blue Lion Knights. Joshua waved the maid away, sarcastically remarking that she should be grateful for her luck. He turned to Alphas, thrusting out his bruised wrist and snarling, Hey, Alphas, do you see my wrist? Alphas calmly replied immediately. Yes, I see it, young master. While Joshua roared, Then tell me, where were you when I ended up like this? Alphas tried to explain that he was acting under the family head's orders, but Joshua immediately cut him off, roaring, That's not what I asked. He yelled directly at his guard. Your duty is to protect the direct lineage of the Kreifart family. Joshua furiously questioned, Is there anything more important than my safety? Alphas merely listened in silence, thinking, Here we go again, as Joshua continued to insult him. You know perfectly well that a disgraced knight like you would never find work anywhere else. Have you forgotten that your livelihood completely depends on me? Joshua continued to mock, saying that even if Alphas had been there, he would have been too scared to move, then contemptuously apologized himself. Alphas silently dipped the towel into the basin of cold water. He calmly used the towel to wipe his face, ignoring his young master's rage. Joshua lost all patience, roaring, Shut up. I don't want to hear an apology from a worm like you. The one I want to hear it from is Julian. Alphas stopped his hand, asking in an even, deadly tone, Young Master Joshua, do you wish to take revenge on Julian? Which stunned Joshua, leaving him gasping. Joshua grabbed Alphas by the collar, shouting for a revenge plan regardless of the means, but the guard frankly admitted, The current Julian is too terrifying. I'm scared out of my wits. Alphas explained that Julian's power came from his immense mana reserves, something ordinary knights, even with their full aura, couldn't compare to. His moonlight sword art, buffed by that mana pool, was just as formidable as his personality, a realm every knight dreamed of. Joshua impatiently yelled, Get straight to the point, and Alphas revealed his trump card. The solution is simple. Create an environment where Julian cannot utilize his aura advantage. The statement left Joshua stunned. Alphas coldly pulled an item from inside his cloak. Joshua gaped when he realized it was a flawed resonance stone, wondering why Alphas possessed such a defective item. Alphas explained that genuine ones were used to suppress demonic energy and block their paths. But this flawed stone was different. It emitted a dark energy when released. Joshua recoiled in surprise as his hand was enveloped by the stone's deep purple aura. Alphas revealed its true purpose. This flawed type doesn't suppress demons. It suppresses human mana. Imagine if we used it to create a barrier around Julian? Idiot, Joshua snapped. If we use that, my aura will be locked too. Alphas calmly replied. Young Master won't need to use aura. Then threw another item to Joshua, who was still sitting on the floor. Joshua tremblingly realized that what had just been thrown to him was a demon horn. A forbidden item. Scene change. Julian was leisurely tending to some potted plants in the mansion. He smiled to himself, thinking that life in Julian's body wasn't so bad after all. The peace vanished as Razlot rushed in, breathlessly reporting, Young Master Julian, some members of the Dawn Society are planning an ambush against you. Julian immediately retracted his words, his face darkening, clearly in a terrible mood. He gnashed his teeth, annoyed that he hadn't done anything wrong yet, was still dragged into drama. Julian scolded Razlot to maintain a normal demeanor next time he reported, then sneered and asked, An ambush? What do those insignificant non-bishops plan to do to me? Razlot anxiously suggested preparing countermeasures, but Julian calmly dismissed him. They haven't done anything yet. Let's just wait and see. His subordinate broke out in a cold sweat, unable to comprehend how his boss could remain so calm before an ambush. Julian glanced, using his aura of negation to immediately read the lingering hesitation in Razlot's heart. Realizing he still had reservations, Julian decided he needed to enlighten his subordinate, suddenly asking an unrelated question. Do you know? Julian picked up a potted orchid, beginning to lecture like a true orchid connoisseur. Healthy orchid leaves don't easily wrinkle, unless there's a problem with the roots. He crushed the rotten part of the root, smirking sinisterly. Just as I thought, the roots are rotting right here. Razlot turned pale, not understanding what his young master was rambling about regarding bait, as Julian analyzed the strategy of sacrificing outer roots to save the inner roots of the orchid. Putting aside the plant philosophy, Julian asked directly, Any other news? And Razlot reported on the victory celebration mission and the Academy's affairs. Julian smirked upon hearing about the celebration, immediately thinking of Sword Saint Hayden but wary of being interrogated about the Soul Stone. Razlot asked if his young master would accept the celebration mission, but Julian decisively refused, declaring he would take a simpler mission related to the Academy instead. Razlot was utterly shocked, unable to believe Julian, a glory-obsessed individual, would refuse such a lucrative mission. His subordinate began to connect the dots. The Academy's security would be dispatched to the Imperial Palace, meaning, if Julian went to the Academy, the Dawn Society would see it as a golden opportunity to eliminate him. Julian already knew their plan. The conversation about bait was precisely to imply that he would turn himself into the prey, flipping the script and turning the ambush into his own stage. No longer a reckless daredevil, Julian had now officially ascended to the level of a strategist, ready to clean up all the scum. The scene shifts to the Academy, where Vice Principal Alram Chorney forced a smile, sweat pouring down his face. Julian, in his military uniform, wore a confident, challenging smile. Vice Principal Alram feigned a welcome. I didn't think Sir Julian would personally come here. He continued his act, saying he had assumed Julian was busy with the victory celebration and wouldn't have time. Julian just watched in silence, but his aura spoke volumes. This old man is terrified. Vice Principal Alram still tried to appear cheerful, mentioning the special lecture the students were waiting for, but Julian retorted, "A special lecture?" Julian's gaze was sharp. He had already calculated every move in his head. Julian replied to the vice principal sarcastically, "Of course not. I was just asking out of curiosity, while secretly thinking he never expected to be teaching one day." In Veil Academy's lecture hall, No. 1, the students were seated, whispering and chatting. A gray-haired female student greeted Rin, informing her that the guest lecturer had not yet arrived. Rin sighed in relief and slumped her face onto the desk, glad she wasn't late. She seemed to have no interest in theoretical lectures. She mumbled that she was a bit tired from overtraining, thinking she would get some rest during this lecture. Her classmate looked worried. "You seem tired." The gray-haired student agreed that today was just a lecture, so it would be easy. They just needed to sit and listen. Vice Principal Alram peeked through the door, muttering that guest lecturers usually came from shut-eyes, so it must be a commoner. Times truly had changed. The vice principal stepped onto the podium, announcing loudly, "Attention everyone, the guest lecturer has arrived. Please show him respect." The entire lecture hall began to buzz, and a male student gasped in recognition of the figure who had just entered. "Huh? Wait, isn't that him?" The news spread like a shockwave, reaching Rin, who was still slumped over. "He's from Shut-Eyes." Rinna lifted her head, her face still sleepy, but immediately turning bewildered. "What? Oh?" As Julian confidently stepped onto the podium with the vice principal, Rinna could only gape. "Huh?" Julian wore a smug smile and introduced himself. "My name is Julian Kreifart, from Shut-Eyes. It's a pleasure to be your guest lecturer today." Rinna froze, her face turning pale, unable to believe her eyes. "Why is it him?" Julian gestured to the class, his tone casual. "You don't need to be too tense." He leaned his hands on the desk, declaring, "I'm only here to give a short lecture as an examiner for the upcoming practical exam." Julian smirked meaningfully, preparing to deliver his first deception. "And what I will teach you today is nothing special at all." The entire class looked bewildered. Julian looked at the confused students and began his lesson. "Let me ask a quick question. Why do you practice swordsmanship?" Seeing the entire class silent, Julian smirked, saying, "Is the question a bit difficult? It's just a warm-up." He smirked cunningly, deciding to call on Rin to answer the question. Rin startled, almost swearing out of habit when her enemy called her name. She quickly covered her mouth, telling herself to calm down. Even though it was Julian, he was currently the guest lecturer. Rinna tried to deflect, politely replying that everyone probably wanted to hear the lecturer's answer more than a student's. Julian, delighted by the back and forth, calmly answered his own question. "Naturally, it's for fame and status." The entire class froze. Rinna and her deskmate were utterly shocked, thinking, shouldn't he have said something cliché, like for the royal family? Julian again pointed the spearhead at Rin, forcing her to answer, and she replied sharply, "To train the mind and body, in order to achieve one's goals." Julian nodded, praising her profound answer, then declared that the previous question wasn't just for fun. He stated directly that no matter how much swordsmanship he taught, it wouldn't compare to what they had already practiced themselves. Julian lightly tapped the hilt of his sword, declaring that teaching in such a short time was impossible. "That's why," he said, as his hand began to gather mana. "Instead of swordsmanship, today we will talk about aura." Rinna and her friend gaped, unable to believe Julian intended to teach them about aura, an extremely advanced subject. Julian began his lecture, explaining that everyone possessed mana channels, and that utilizing it to reinforce the body or weapons was how aura was used. He stood with his back to the class, releasing his aura. A mesmerizing stream of silver-white energy enveloped his body. Julian asked the class if they could see the color of his aura, his smile still full of smugness. Rinna immediately understood. This was the meaning of aura being a measure of skill disparity, as he had said. A male student raised his hand, hesitantly replying that it was gray, almost like moonlight. Another student whispered to their friend, wondering if it was silver. Rinna stared intently at the energy stream, firmly confirming in her mind, "It's silver." Amidst the guessing crowd, another student raised their hand, and, a pale cobalt blue. Rinna Ronbell smirked, her sharp eyes affirming, "You used two different types of aura simultaneously." She analyzed clearly. "Silver aura on the sword's sheath, while your hand used a pale cobalt blue aura." Julian turned around, his hand still emitting a cobalt aura, admitting, "Precisely, Miss Rinna." Rinna thought to herself. Ever since the incident at the forge, she had tried to close the skill gap, believing it was no longer too far. Julian sneered, raising a finger to his lips, signaling silence. "And there's one more." Rinna flinched, her eyes wide with horror, unable to believe her ears. "Impossible." Boom. Julian unleashed a colossal, brilliant blue third aura, enveloping his entire body, and sarcastically remarked, "It seems no student could perceive the third aura, could they?" He stood there, submerged in a sea of energy, continuing to taunt. "I suppose no one could sense this third aura." Julian smirked, explaining this was a good way to gauge skill. If your opponent cannot perceive your aura, then it's highly likely you can strike them down. Upon hearing this, Rinna gnashed her teeth, her face darkening with vexation. She bit her finger, bitterly acknowledging the harsh truth. I was too arrogant. There's still a long way to go. The lesson ended. Just as Julian turned to leave, Vice Principal Alram Chorny was already waiting, stammering praise. Truly, truly impressive, young Julian. The old vice principal placed a hand on Julian's shoulder, admitting, I didn't expect the students to be so enthusiastic about a guest lecture. Julian realized the old man had been eavesdropping from start to finish. Vice Principal Alram gave a forced laugh, confessing, I suppose I was a little worried about young Julian's lecture. Ahem. Julian merely gave a wry smile, thinking to himself, he's not wrong. Who would have thought a guy like Julian would be teaching others? Vice Principal Alram chuckled, handing over the remaining task. Well then, I'll entrust the practical exam to you, young Julian. Julian casually walked away after the old man left, muttering, now that he's gone, I should head back too. Strolling down the familiar corridor, a game memory suddenly flashed in Julian's mind, a character selection screen appearing. Black Knight, Forgotten Hero, Fallen Star, Hayden Reich. Julian clutched his head in annoyance, wondering why that damned game trailer kept appearing in his head, and what the hell a Black Knight was. Memories of Sword. Saint Hayden Reich's demise in the game resurfaced. But Julian resolved. That scene will never happen, as long as I am Julian. Scene change. A trembling hand rested on a chair, signaling escalating tension. At Julian's residence, Joshua Kreifhart was visibly annoyed, grumbling, why isn't he back yet? Joshua walked around the mansion and stopped before a fiery abstract painting, his face showing confusion. He continued to scrutinize another bizarre statue, sweat dripping profusely because of Julian's unbearable artistic taste. Joshua covered his face in helplessness, muttering, I truly cannot understand this guy's artistic taste. He looked at the houseplants with an exasperated expression, wondering about their very existence. A subordinate entered, his voice trembling as he reported, Young master, I have set up the barrier as you commanded. The subordinate explained that he could activate the mana-blocking barrier at any time, but his limbs were trembling uncontrollably. Joshua narrowed his eyes and asked directly, Are you scared? Causing the subordinate to flinch. Joshua grabbed the soldier's collar, growling, Are you afraid of Julian? He released his grip, his face thoughtful. I don't understand. Joshua began to raise his voice, listing his formidable forces. In this house, our side has 2 knights specializing in hunting 2-horned demons, 6 Kreifhart household soldiers, a high-level mage, and even a mana barrier. Joshua confidently declared, more than enough to take down one guy. The subordinate broke out in a cold sweat, thinking to himself, but what if that one guy is? And an image of Julian appeared in his mind. In the soldier's imagination, Julian appeared like a god of war with a colossal light sword, causing him to tremble and conclude, Julian, I don't think this will be enough. Joshua turned back, questioning irritably, Oh really? Why? The subordinate tried to explain, Not only that, I feel something strange in this mansion. Even though it's late, we haven't encountered anyone. Joshua dismissed it. They probably just went home early, but the subordinate remained worried, thinking that Julian might have already known their plan and set a trap in return. Joshua flew into a rage, raising his hand. Smack! He punched the subordinate directly in the face for his cowardice. Joshua roared, Idiot! While the subordinate clutched his face and fell sprawling. Are you really that scared? And you call yourself a Kreifhart knight? The arrogant young master screamed. The subordinate trembled, hastily apologizing to his young master. Joshua ordered, Anyway, you don't have to fight him. Just raise the barrier when I tell you to, he muttered contemptuously, believing that once the barrier was erected, Julian would have his aura sealed and become useless. Joshua bared his teeth in a sinister grin, confident that he had another trump card. He smugly declared, Now that I have new power, Julian doesn't stand a chance. 2 soldiers ran in to report that the target had arrived. Joshua immediately ordered, Everyone, to your positions. Meanwhile, outside Julian's mansion, silent night enveloped the massive building. A hand reached out from the bushes, revealing someone was hiding. A group in hooded cloaks whispered among themselves, convinced that by now, Julian was fast asleep. The leader revealed his face, a man named William Hylance of the Dawn Society, sneering, I'm itching to kill Julian. The entire mob of the Dawn Society followed suit, resentful that Julian dared to disregard their rules and refused to accept his appointment as bishop. William declared that everyone present was a member of the Dawn Society and held a deep grudge against Julian. He asserted firmly, Today will be the last day we have to see Julian's face. We will take his life. Another member, also from the Hylance family, interjected, declaring he was here to avenge his family, who were engulfed in flames. A green-haired man shrewdly noticed his comrade trembling uncontrollably. Are you scared too? Your hands are shaking all over. William cleared his throat, trying to cover his embarrassment. Ahem. I'm just a little overexcited, that's all. William Hylance drew his magic wand, ordering his Dawn Society subordinates to prepare to infiltrate the mansion. He began chanting a spell, creating a complex magic circle in the air. A hexagonal mana barrier enveloped the entire group, activating the imperfect silence stealth mode. He sneered, confident that this barrier would block all of Julian's senses, while a subordinate flattered him. Lord William is truly incredible. The group of assassins stealthily advanced, convinced that Julian was alone because all the servants had left in the afternoon. Suddenly, the magic wand in William's hand flickered as if running out of power. He frowned as his magic power was disrupted, while his subordinates bewilderedly asked what was happening. William gasped, realizing something was wrong. Someone has deliberately severed the mana flow here. Meanwhile, at another location, Joshua Kreifhart's subordinate frantically reported, "Young master, Julian is not alone. Many individuals are approaching the mansion." The subordinate continued to report that those weren't servants, but a group of skilled mages, making Joshua begin to suspect that their plan had been exposed. Joshua gritted his teeth, his face darkening as he realized there was only one possibility. The information has been leaked. Turning back to William, he was also sweating profusely, muttering, "Could he have known we were coming and prepared some kind of barrier?" Both Joshua and William, the two leaders of the assassin groups, realized a bitter truth. This is a trap Julian set for us. Joshua's subordinate trembled as he asked his master what to do, but Joshua merely shot him a sharp glare, secretly thinking he needed to teach this kid a lesson. Joshua smirked arrogantly, declaring bluntly, "I don't care if it's a trap or not." He clenched his fist, his eyes filled with killing intent. "Today, I will kill Julian at all costs." Joshua turned to his subordinates, ordering, "Thanks to that barrier, Julian must be weakened. The plan has changed. You all deal with those guys while I handle Julian." He growled, asking for the location of the Dawn Society members, and the subordinate pointed. "They are right outside in the hallway." Joshua's two henchmen stood ready, awaiting orders, their faces filled with killing intent. Joshua drew his sword, laughing maniacally. Perfect timing. Attack before they can do anything. Joshua, along with his subordinates, kicked open the door and charged in, directly confronting the cloaked assassins of the Dawn Society. Joshua taunted the assassins, cursing them directly. "You scoundrels, are you still acting as dogs for that piece of trash?" William, the leader of the assassins, roared in anger. "That's what I should be saying to you." The Dawn Society mage didn't say much, gathering a bolt of lightning in his hand, growling, "Be ashamed." One of Joshua's subordinates recognized the opponent as a level 3 mage, but Joshua merely smirked disdainfully, believing that a mage within the barrier was nothing but trash. Joshua yelled, "Deal with them," leading his henchmen into the chaotic battle. Joshua's swords clashed fiercely with the weapons of the Dawn Society assassins. After dispatching a few minor foes, Joshua scanned his eyes, searching for his main target. "Where is Julian?" Suddenly, Joshua cried out in pain as he was struck by a paralyzing electric current. Joshua's entire body was thrown backward by the electric shock. Unable to react in time, he staggered to his feet, still dazed from the sudden attack. A shadowy figure enveloped in lightning appeared. It was the mage William who had just attacked. Joshua gritted his teeth, annoyed. This strong, even inside the barrier? I'll kick this rat's ass right now. Meanwhile, William coughed up blood, realizing that the damned barrier was making his body harder to move. Joshua realized his opponent was exhausted. This bastard? He's about to collapse but still manages to unleash a skill? He glanced at his hand, hesitating for a moment. Do I really need to use that? Joshua shook his head decisively, deciding to save his trump card. No, I must save it for Julian. I can't waste it on a small fry like this. Joshua discovered an opening in his opponent's defense as the assassin was retreating. Now's the time, Joshua roared, seizing the opportunity to charge forward. He swung his sword to attack a Dawn Society member, determined to break the enemy's formation. A Dawn Society member panicked as Joshua charged straight at him. Joshua closed in on the green-haired man. His speed was too fast for his opponent's expectations. William exerted all his strength, gathering a bolt of lightning into his magic wand. Whoosh! Joshua didn't bother to dodge. He slashed directly at the magic wand, neatly neutralizing the skill. Joshua burst into arrogant laughter, completely disdaining the small fries before him. The green-haired man regained his composure, swinging his sword to attack Joshua from a blind spot. But Joshua had anticipated it. He spun around to neatly block the attack, making the other man spit blood. Joshua's blade was pressed against the Dawn Society member's throat. He was completely subdued. Joshua growled with utter contempt. Even a level 3 mage can't do anything inside this barrier. He gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing. You nameless trash, how dare you stand in my way? The green-haired man coughed up blood, overwhelmed by Joshua's aura, but still managed to ask. How much did Julian pay you? The Dawn Society member gritted his teeth in response. 5,000 nars? 1,000 nars? I bet you didn't think your life was so cheap, did you? Joshua, enraged, delivered a devastating kick to the man's stomach, making him scream miserably. He grabbed the green-haired man's collar, his voice trembling with fear. Wait, the Dawn Society member cried out in despair. I wasn't hired by Julian. Joshua grabbed his hair, lifting his head, and growled. Lies. I see you have no honor whatsoever. Joshua smirked, feigning disbelief. Is that so? He sneered. Purple dark energy flared around him. Even if you're telling the truth, I don't care. You're in my way, so you will die. The Dawn Society member froze, sweat pouring down him like rain, as he realized his fate. Joshua raised his sword, coldly declaring, Very well, give me your life. As Joshua was about to make his move, footsteps echoed, followed by a casual voice. Oh my, oh my. Joshua spun around, wary at the sight of a strange figure holding a sword. It seems I have many uninvited guests. He was stunned, breaking into a cold sweat, unable to believe his eyes. He arrived when? How did I not sense anything at all? Julian appeared like a ghost, coldly looking down at the Dawn Society member pinned beneath his feet. Joshua took a stance, growling as he called the newcomer a monster, clearly utterly intimidated. Completely ignoring Joshua, Julian bent down to examine the scene, muttering, "The vase." He picked up a shard, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's broken." Julian stood up straight, looking at the small fry sprawled on the floor, and spoke in a commanding voice. Suddenly barging in here to cause trouble. Joshua tried to regain his composure, telling himself that within this barrier, if it was just a sword fight, he still had a chance to win. Julian gently touched the lining cloth of the broken vase, his eyes unreadable. He spoke in an icy voice, feigning regret. "I'm pained, because I truly liked this vase." Joshua turned pale, a bad premonition striking him as he realized the absurdity of the situation. Wait, how can this be? A massive blue aura began to pour out from Julian. While he simply thought, the barrier is still functioning normally. Julian unleashed his power, his overwhelming presence freezing Joshua in place, and he smirked. "It seems you need another lesson in etiquette." Scene change. Julian was firmly holding the reins, preparing for a journey. The entire Kryfart mansion was enveloped by an unusual purple demonic energy, signaling a restless night. Riding his white horse, Julian observed the mansion from afar, noticing the unstable mana flow and the unnatural atmosphere outside. Julian smirked faintly, seemingly having anticipated everything. They've arrived. Inside, Razlot anxiously looked out, confirming Julian's warning about an ambush had come true. Julian, alone on his horse, rode straight towards the mansion, knowing full well that a crowd was waiting to settle scores with this fox-eyed villain. Julian smirked, declaring that his skill level was different now. His moonlight sword had been upgraded, and he wondered if he should go in and stir things up. Crack! As he stepped into the mansion, his foot landed on the shards of a porcelain vase. Julian casually stepped over the corpses of the Dawn Society small fry, as if nothing had happened. He was at a loss for words when he saw the battlefield, thinking to himself, "What is this? I haven't even arrived yet, and they've already started brawling?" Julian narrowed his eyes, his attention not on the corpses but on something else. He staggered as he saw the wreckage, muttering, "That thing. They destroyed it." He told himself that the real Julian would truly go mad, but then brushed it aside. "But I'm not the real Julian." Julian froze when he saw a withered plant, realizing that this life had finally changed his emotions. He cried out a piteous name, his voice filled with pain. "Angelica!" Julian fell to his knees, trembling and speechless, before the remains of the potted plant. Memories flooded back. It was the first thing he had watered, the first thing he had named after becoming Julian. He gritted his teeth, repeating the name once more with all his fury. Angelica. With a twisted, murderous smile, Julian swore to avenge the plant. System activated. Moonlight sword. He declared that he would use the blood of those bastards as a sacrifice for Angelica's death. Murderous intent erupted, and he growled, "To do that, I will kill every single one of you." Joshua froze, unable to believe his cousin was losing his mind just because of a potted plant. Julian questioned himself, realizing this was the first time he had been overwhelmed by the emotions of this body. Despite trying to maintain distance, he tried to calm himself down, telling himself not to get carried away by emotions. It was just a plant. But memories of the days he had personally watered, it flooded back. Images of Julian gently caring for the potted plant appeared, explaining his uncontrollable rage. Memories flooded back. Julian had once carefully moved the potted plant to a sunny spot. He even wiped each leaf before going to sleep, caring for it like a treasure. When needed, he even mixed a special nutrient solution to fertilize it. Back in reality, Julian erupted with a deep purple murderous aura, growling, "That was my Angelica. How dare they touch it? Just thinking about it makes my blood boil." Joshua was holding a sword to the throat of a Dawn Society member, while Julian's thoughts echoed, "I will kill them all." Julian regained his composure, smiling sarcastically at Joshua. "Come on, let's change the subject. As far as I know, you've never hired anyone." Joshua glared, asking directly, "So, what do you want to do?" His cousin resentfully questioned. "Your night ambush failed. Do you have any other plans?" Julian's eyes narrowed, cold and calculating, completely suppressing his opponent's aura. The green-haired Dawn Society member secretly calculated, "This Joshua is an easy target, but that mage is the problem." He continued to analyze, "I don't know what magic he uses, so I dare not act rashly, but if both of them attack together, it will be tough." Julian spoke, his tone as if dispensing the truth. "You two know full well that even if you combine your strength, you can't defeat me, right?" He sneered, with the smile of a predator. "And you also know that I never let enemies who dare bare their fangs at me get away with it, don't you?" Julian raised a finger, his voice condescending. "But I am merciful, so I will give you a chance." He spread his arms wide, making an insane offer. "You two fight each other." Both Joshua and the other man were stunned, while Julian smirked. "Heh heh, I'll let the winner live." Joshua gritted his teeth, realizing he was being toyed with. "Let the winner live? He wants us to be his entertainment." His cousin flew into a rage, his pride trampled. "Whether we infiltrated here or not, in his eyes, we are just mere small fry." Joshua glanced at the green-haired mage, a plan flashing in his mind. "But with this worthless mage and the power of the horn, I'll show that guy what I can do." But when Joshua turned to discuss a plan, his green-haired accomplice suddenly began trembling uncontrollably, his extremely unstable state making him exclaim, "Hey, are you all right?" The green-haired mage suddenly clutched his head, screaming miserably, as dark purple demonic energy erupted from his body. Joshua flinched and yelled at him, "Hey, are you crazy? Calm down. If we cooperate, we'll at least have a chance to resist." The green-haired man sneered maniacally, shouting that Joshua was just all talk and would stab him in the back. Joshua angrily cursed him as an idiot for believing the smiling executioner would spare the winner, while the other man was determined. "I'll eliminate you to survive." Without further ado, the green-haired man brushed aside Joshua's words, swung his weapon, and charged forward, yelling, "Shut up." Joshua was no pushover either. He quickly took a stance, swinging his sword to meet the crazed former ally in battle. Whoosh! Joshua deftly dodged the attack, simultaneously raising his sword, preparing for a lightning-fast counterattack. Slash! A clean sword strike cut straight into the green-haired mage's chest. Fresh blood splattered as Joshua's blade cut deep into his ally's body. The mage collapsed, officially out of the game. Joshua panted, sneering contemptuously. "You charged at me without fear?" He confidently thought he had defeated his opponent, and now it was time for a life-or-death battle with Julian. But then he suddenly remembered the rules of the game. The smiling executioner never spared anyone who dared to show hostility towards him. Joshua broke out in a cold sweat, his eyes narrowing as he realized a terrifying truth. Death. He trembled, clearly feeling death standing right before him. From above, Julian looked down coldly, his tone both sarcastic and pitying. Is that all you've got? Oh my, that must hurt quite a bit." Joshua gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down him, his mind racing to find a way out of this perilous situation. Suddenly, he remembered his trump card, the demon horn that Alphas had given him. Joshua muttered, calculating his final move. "If I use this horn, I might not win against it, but at least I'll have a chance to escape." In the midst of the tension, he suddenly noticed a hole in his pants, muttering foolishly. "Huh, a hole in my pants? Must have been burned earlier." Joshua gritted his teeth, realizing the item in his hand was indeed a demon horn. A green-haired Dawn Society member lay slumped on the ground, weakly begging for his life. He held a piece of horn, his face full of despair, muttering that there was no other choice. Driven by an intense desire to live, he didn't hesitate to plunge the horn fragment straight into his chest. The green-haired man knelt, screaming for the Archbishop's forgiveness for his actions. Dark purple demonic energy erupted, engulfing his body amidst screams of extreme agony. Joshua flinched, startled to witness the Dawn Society subordinate transforming into a monster right before his eyes. He recalled Alphas' calm expression when he handed him the horn, gritting his teeth and cursing, "Alphas, you crazy bastard." Facing the new demon, Joshua roared in anger at being deceived. "You only said I'd gain demonic power, not turn into a demon." Julian suddenly appeared, coldly asking Joshua about the horn's origin, causing the latter to stammer out Alpha's name. Julian smirked, having pieced everything together. Alpha's Mayand, a bishop of the Dawn Society, an enemy of the original Julian, had somehow colluded with Joshua. The transformed demon growled, but Julian immediately realized. Fortunately, this horn doesn't look like the real deal. He compared this demon to the fake one he had dealt with in the slums. Its level was only so-so. Julian surmised this was likely a side effect Eleanor had once mentioned, a flawed product created by low-level dark magic. The demon let out a final roar, seemingly unable to control its new power. Joshua recoiled in fear as the out-of-control demon lunged towards him. Cornered, Joshua frantically screamed Julian's name. He turned to beg his sworn enemy. "I'm sorry, please, kill that demon for me." Julian merely crossed his arms, smirking sarcastically. "You're a Kryvart, so you should be protecting me." The transformed demon staggered and then collapsed, its body beginning to disintegrate, unable to withstand the borrowed power. The transformed demon roared madly, charging straight at one of Joshua's subordinates. Slash. The subordinate's sword was knocked away, and he was impaled through the chest by his own weapon, blood splattering everywhere. Julian stood with his arms crossed, watching the spectacle, a sneer on his face. "Heh, if you don't do better than this, you're really going to die." Joshua's face turned pale, and he called out with a trembling voice. "Brother." He was utterly panicked, screaming and begging, "Brother Julian, please, please save me," which left Julian speechless at such a quick change of allegiance. The out-of-control demon grabbed the terrified Joshua, growling right next to his ear. It lifted Joshua high, ready to tear its new prey apart. Julian realized the demon had shifted its target to him, likely sensing his overwhelming killing intent. Julian's instincts surged. He smirked with delight, feeling an urge to send this monster straight to hell. He secretly mocked the original Julian. How foolish, to hate demons so much yet still seek their power. The transformed demon immediately ignored Joshua, turning to face the real threat. With a roar, it lunged at Julian, determined to fight to the death. Julian merely sneered nonchalantly, treating the monster as a joke. "A mere bug crawling towards me," Julian muttered, then dashed away like a blue-red blur. The demon let out a shriek, unable to comprehend what was happening. Thud. A devastating kick from Julian pinned the demon's head firmly to the stone floor. Giving it no second to breathe, Julian plunged his sword straight into the screaming demon's head. He showed clear delight, as if he had just found a new toy. The demon lay sprawled, but its wounds began to regenerate. Julian analyzed. A demon with regenerative abilities usually inherits its human-era powers upon demonization. Julian smirked, explaining that the man's intense desire to survive had been amplified into regenerative power. From a distance, Joshua was sweating, his voice trembling as he asked how on earth to kill that thing. Julian merely smirked mysteriously. "Actually," with the smile of a hunter, he admitted, "I'm actually quite enjoying this." Julian continued his analysis, the image of a sorcerer appearing in his mind. He scoffed. "Someone who once wielded unique magic, now transformed into a demon with only regeneration? Julian propped his chin, showing extreme delight at his new toy. He declared, and because I possess the innate ability is less than clairvoyance is greater than. Julian's eyes flashed red. The analysis interface activated, allowing him to see through all of the demon's stats. He confidently asserted that no matter how overpowered its regeneration was, destroying its demon core would end the game. The system scanned the demon's body, analyzing each part to find its fatal weakness. A brightly glowing energy mass was precisely located right within the monster's head. Julian smiled with satisfaction. So, the core is in its head. He bared his teeth in a savage grin, muttering, "It's as if it's begging to die." Whoosh. The demon's hand, which had just been pierced and shattered, regenerated completely in the blink of an eye. It sprang up, its entire body fully recovered, as if nothing had happened. The demon growled, its resentful eyes fixed on Julian, ready for round 2. Julian took a stance, the sword in his hand, enveloped by a stream of blue mana, and asked challengingly, "So, shall we continue?" The demon roared madly, while Julian also yelled excitedly, "Bring it on!"